The Holocaust ended before Israel.
What was the situation Jews were in just after the Holocaust? Getting kicked around.
What do you mean, living in displacement camps?
Getting booted around displacement camps. Some of them getting sent to Seychelles or Mauritius, or to was it Mauritius and Cyprus. Some of their boats being turned back away from Mandate Palestine and sent back to Bergen-Belsen. It was repurposed as a DP camp. Being in the Arab countries, where even before the 48 war in Iraq, you already had the Farhud. You already had anti-Semitic riots in Libya. You had anti-Semitic riots going on in Syria as well, Egypt. This was all before the 48 war as well. What else were Jews supposed to do in the 20th century to feel safe? You also acknowledge that Jews fleeing the Holocaust went to countries that all had quotas on them, and that in the Evian conference, all these countries said, let's basically take in none, or we'll expand a quota a little bit. Yeah? If Jews can't go to America because of the Johnson-Reed Act and quotas, the rest of Europe is clearly not safe for them. The rest of the Arab countries are starting to warm up to European anti-Semitism, and also they're starting to flirt with their own nationalist ideas, and nationalism so far doesn't have a good track record when it comes to Jewish people. What were they supposed to do? The ones who ended up in Israel, the ones who went to land that had been purchased or had involved in quite a few cases, land evictions. What were they supposed to do? You put on a sweater, are you cold? First of all, it's a jumper, you Yankee fucking cunt. And second, yeah, I live in Scotland. Yeah, it's fucking freezing, yeah. But if you put the heating on, it gets too hot in this little fucking studio room because of the PC, so... like, even with the radiator quite low, this room gets really warm, so... Also, I'd rather just... I'm very specific. My temperatures. It's not too cold for that I need heating, but it's cold enough that I want a jumper. Science, bro. It doesn't have any leg muscles. How could it possibly be a jumper? I don't know why we call it that. Listen. It's the queens, the kings. Don't ask questions.
I see you. Do you see me?
Gotcha. Yeah, I see you.
There we go. Hello, Lonerbox.
Hello. Wait, why? Oh, there we go. Okay. Just
Are you streaming?
Both of us. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Same. Sorry, I don't know why my picture's so dark. I'm just checking that we see him, but we cannot hear him. Okay, that's fine. I keep it like this. Perfect. Okay. Everyone seems to be fine. I guess the best way to start is, look, I'm not very convinced of the position of the two-state solution. So why don't you try and convince me?
Okay. So, broadly speaking, my understanding is that there are two national groups that are living in that region. There's the Israelis and the Palestinians. And for whether we want to debate about the ethics of how the Israelis got there, maybe one story or the other, but the fact is that they're there and they are not going anywhere. The Palestinians are not going anywhere either, unless you want to just have a brutal ethnic cleansing campaign of one group or the other. So they're both there.
Wait. I'm really sorry. I'm not being rude. I just accidentally, they're all complaining they can't hear you. So sorry, that's my fault. No, I can fix it. It's just I did something stupid. Application audio capture. Sorry. Oh, fuck's sake. There we go. Wait, do you mind speaking? I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, there we go. 6, Everyone
7.
can hear you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Shall I start again?
So I guess yeah, I'm really sorry about that.
Okay.
Let's start again.
So you want me to convince you of why the two-state solution is the way to
Yeah. I think that's a good position to start from.
Okay. Broadly speaking, there are two national groups in that region. Whether one side likes it or not, they're both there. They're not going anywhere unless you want to have a brutal ethnic cleansing campaign of one group or the other. I don't want that. I hope most people don't want that. And they definitely seem to have no intention of wanting to share a country together. So I think the way that we've dealt with national conflicts in the past, or the way that borders have typically worked, is that it just seems to make the most sense to have the Palestinians in their state and the Israelis in theirs. And, I'm a multiculturalist. I think sectarianism is insane. It's a very stupid thing to be watching from a distance, but if you want to solve that, I think it would make much more sense for them to be living in peace and security in their two different regions. And then if they want to engage in trade with each other and reconciliation and whatever else, then hopefully that border would become less and less meaningful. But yeah, if you want them to have a state now in Palestine, then it's going to be two states, not one.
And how do you think that that is reached? Like with the current Israeli government, how do you think that that's plausible? And in fact, not just the current Israeli government, like speaking about the alternatives, because in my understanding, the largest the largest outcome that wouldn't be Likud is Naftali Bennett, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't support a two-state. So how do we get from where we are now to a two-state solution?
I think we have to look at how we've gotten closer to it in the past. I think the fact is that despite what a lot of embedded like Zionist propagandists will say, for the last 100 years, Israelis have maybe for less than 10 of those been favoring a two-state solution or voted in favor of one. For the rest of the time, they voted for governments that don't want one.
In which period, sorry? Did they vote for one that did?
They voted in Barak, who promised that he wanted to solve the conflict with the Palestinians, and they voted in Olmert as well.
Okay. Yeah,
we can go into details if you want, but just broadly speaking, they've been more humoring of it in the past than they were now, and definitely before the 90s, they were not humoring it at all. I think.
Well, see, I would kind of hold the opinion that I'm not sure really they ever humored it. I think particularly the best example would be the Oslo Accords, because for me, right, I can't really see any other example where Palestinians have been as close that the PLO, 100% confirmed their commitment to recognize Israel's right to exist, their desire for there to be a two-state solution, and it just didn't go anywhere. Well, it did go somewhere, which was the further Bantustanization of Palestinian territories and, the strengthening or solidification of occupation.
Do you want me to address that specifically, or do you want me to go back to what I was saying about?
Yeah. I'd like to hear a way in which that wasn't the case.
In which what part? So you're thinking that from Oslo onto the 2000s, the Israelis only Bantustanized further, and were not ever humoring there being a state in the West Bank and Gaza.
I think so, yeah.
No, I'm not entirely convinced of that. I think there's an argument to be made that Camp David wasn't good enough. But given how the PLO and Arafat responded to the Clinton parameters, I think it seems pretty likely that the Israelis were more willing to put something on the table than the Palestinians were. I still, to this day, do not know what the Palestinian offer of a two-state solution looks like concretely. I know they've said yes to frameworks, but as far as a final offer, as in this is exactly what we want for borders, refugees, Jerusalem, security, I've not seen anything.
I think the base level is, right, accepting international law, surely. Our government's right. Because this is sort of one of the problems that I have predominantly with the two-state solution, right? Our governments all say that they want the two-state solution. They declare that Israel's occupation is illegal, that settlements of Palestinian land is illegal, but then they do nothing to pressure Israel in these negotiations. Like at Camp David, in my understanding, there was a point at which Arafat was like, you are literally just repeating Israeli talking points. These are not even America's own talking points. And that rather than acting as like an honest broker, they acted fully as like a dishonest broker in favor of Israel. And I think that at this point, it's like really hard to see how when you allegedly have these Israeli governments that are moderate and you have this Palestinian position of, okay, we'll accept basic international law. And also, in my understanding, right, I think there's a couple of different alleged proposals on the right of return. And there's one that was like 800,000 Palestinians being allowed to return and Israel could have control over that happening. But I think that getting to these points is interesting because the main thing that hasn't stopped with any of these governments is settlements. Like, how do we get to a point of having a two-state solution when Israel is actively undermining that through every negotiation? Like Israel, in each one of these negotiations, settlement didn't stop. And settlement has always been the key obstacle to peace because it's illegal under international law. And it is effectively operating not just as a random thing that happens. It is a thing that is continually happening directly to undermine the emergence of a Palestinian state. So I find it hard to like look at any negotiation and not see that as the most important thing.
Okay, so first of all, just because there's a few things going on once there, you mentioned accept international law. When you say that they need to establish a two-state solution based on international law, what specifically do you mean?
I think probably the 6-day war borders, right? Is that 242 or 338?
It's both, really. But
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
does 242 say the exact 67 borders?
I don't know.
It basically says the opposite. It says so if you look at the background to how the resolution 242 came about, Lord Caradon, I think specifically, was the main person who spoke about this, is that if you look at the exact wording of 242, it doesn't say withdraw. First of all, it has the main principle. It's inadmissible to acquire territory through conquest. But then the second part is they say to withdraw from territories, very strangely worded sentence. They don't say the territories or all the territories. They just say from territories occupied since the Six-Day War. And the French translation, some people mistake it, but the way that's worded says effectively the same thing. So, and the reason they did that was because the 67 borders, really the 49 border, is not really a border at all. It's an armistice line. And it was definitely put in to be ambiguous because they wanted to anticipate that a border based on a random armistice line from just where the Arab and Jewish soldiers were in 49 doesn't really make sense. So it would be open to negotiation and land swapping and things like that. That's why it's there. 242 doesn't say to just go exactly down to the letter to, and then the third part it says is that it says that it needs to be on the grounds of mutual security and recognition, as in it needs to be compatible with each side being assured that the other won't use use that state to attack the other.
I just find it interesting, like, to kind of quibble with the logic of it there when it says initially that it is inadmissible to conquer territory or to seize and annex territory through conquest.
Well, that's why when it comes to law, like laws are usually interpreted by the professionals and by the people who are involved in putting it down. Like they say it's inadmissible, but then they will also say that they say territories and not the territories. And they did that very, very intentionally. They did that intentionally because they were anticipating that whatever a Palestinian state is, it might be a little bit different to the 6-7 borders. It could even theoretically be bigger. Obviously, it's not been offered to be bigger, but that's why it's there. That's why it's there.
But in order for there to be like a meaningful negotiation, right? In Oslo, Palestinians conceded 78% of historic Palestine on the basis of what they wanted, and 22% throughout the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. That feels like a far bigger concession than anything that Israel was willing to offer. And just being to abide by that and to take it at its interpretation of, okay, it's wrong to conquer territories, and it's clear that at this point there probably is a Palestinian group who will and have the capacity to accept a two-state solution. It feels really difficult for me to see that as like, oh, it's just down to the interpretation of international law. It seems that Israel wasn't interested in giving Palestinians a state.
Well, it does seem to be down to the borders in a way, because if you look at the details of how they negotiated in Camp David, Arafat didn't seem to care all that much about 1 or 2% of the West Bank, or even 5 or 6%. He was actually quite happy to leave that up to Bill Clinton. The sticking points of Camp David and Taba were not 1 or 2, 3, 4% of borders. The sticking points were Jerusalem and the right of return. That's where they just couldn't seem to get any. And you said 800,000 refugees. To my understanding, I don't think Arafat or Abbas ever said, this is the refugee settlement we will accept. That they've never said that.
Yeah, I heard Finkelstein say that. So when he was debating Ben Ami ages ago. But I'm going to be frank, I've never really been that interested in these two negotiations. They've never been the key points of what I've studied. But I think even then, at Camp David, right, how could Arafat have gone back to his people and said, look, I've not got sovereignty over the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's a very important thing for Muslims. Like, you must recognize that surely. Like, the Al-Aqsa Mosque matters a lot. It's the third holiest site in Islam. I'm sure you know all
Yeah, of course. But I would... Yeah, go on, sorry.
But Arafat was sort of expected to just go back to his people and be like, yeah, sorry, I haven't got that. Because if you look at what Arafat said to Madeleine Albright and Clinton before Camp David was called, he said, look, we can't actually call this because the Israelis are not ready to negotiate on the positions that we want. Please don't call it. It is not a position and a good time to call this. And then Clinton calls it. And the sticking point of Jerusalem is not really that surprising, right? Like that it's, Palestine's, like it's such a center of Palestine, they want it as the capital, and kind of getting rid of that is impossible for Arafat. Like no country can really give up their capital city where the most important center of life is for so many people.
Well, then why did he? I agree. Why did he say no to Ben Ami's offer in Taba then? Ben Ami offered the idea of vertical sovereignty, as in the Israelis would have sovereignty over the wall and the holiest Jewish areas, like surrounding the compound, but then the top of it, like because they do this in maritime law sometimes with vertical sovereignty. But then when they said that Al-Aqsa would have gone sovereign to the Palestinian state, so even when Ben Ami said that, when he was offered vertical sovereignty, meaning that the compound and the Dome of the Rock goes to the Palestinians, Arafat still said no. And the reason he said no is that because was saying yes to that would entail acknowledging that the Jewish temple existed underneath Al-Aqsa. And he said no to that. That has always been an issue with the Palestinian side, is that they've never even accepted that the Western Wall or the temple is even there, that it's valid, right?
In my understanding, there's also a threat to accepting that, right? Like, it's now reached a point where it is openly talked about by Israeli government figures of demolishing the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that came specifically at a time when Netanyahu opened the tunnel under Al-Aqsa, which threatens its structural integrity, in my understanding. And so I can kind of see why Arafat might have been like, actually, I really don't want that. I don't want a recognition of the temple underneath because it is a direct threat to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But also, in my understanding, Arafat didn't walk away. He asked, right, for like specifics. He asked for maps and all of these things at Taba, and then it was more Sharon who torpedoed it, right?
One thing at a time. So it's again, it's weird that he would say no, considering that it's still a threat to have vertical sovereignty because of excavation. Obviously, like fuck Netanyahu and Likud, right? But the problem was that excavation was actually part of the deal as well. Part of the Clinton parameters was that excavation would have to be agreed by both sides if they were ever going to do it. I mean, Palestinian leaders since al-Husseini since the 1800s have been saying that Zionists want to come and demolish Al-Aqsa. They haven't done it yet, and it would be much harder for them to do it in a peace process. No, that's not why Arafat said no to it. Arafat said no to that because he doesn't believe that the Jewish temple exists there.
Okay. I mean, in my understanding, I've heard some people say that there's no actual archaeological evidence being found of it.
Which people say that?
I heard a PhD student at Exeter say it.
Interesting. I'm pretty sure it's beyond dispute, but okay.
Like, frankly, I'll be frank with you at that part. I don't actually fully know as to whether that's true. He said that. But what I will say specifically about this is, I understand that during a peace negotiation that may be unthinkable. But let's be real, like, Netanyahu and the right were quite likely to come back, and they did come back. Did Sharon torpedo the negotiations, right? Because when does Taba end?
Taba ends when with Sharon and also Clinton leaving office as well. But everyone knew this would happen. So that's why it was very imperative to get it done quickly, which is why the delayed response to the Clinton parameters was an issue. And also the endless list of reservations from the PLO was an issue as well. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to support Sharon either. But the problem is, again, is that this opportunity that's why there was so much pressure, more international pressure on any leader to accept a peace deal ever, really, than there was on Arafat to accept Camp David or to counteroffer it. But they didn't. And as far as map clarification, that's to do with Abbas, not to do with Arafat.
Okay, well, I think also another interesting point about all of this is that these negotiations had to have very specific dynamics because, in my understanding, the Oslo Accords are about 300 pages long. They are filled with like very complex legal jargon. And that's part of the reason that, you know, they ended up achieving nothing. They kicked down the road the can of refugees' right of return, which, like, Palestinians deserve the right to return, right? Like, they do deserve the right to return. And I'm sorry, I'm unconcerned by the demographics of Israel. Israel is continually importing huge amounts of, like, Jewish people, and sometimes not even Jewish people, you know, in the case of the huge amounts of Soviets, like ex-Soviet Jewish people who are allowed to bring their spouses over and such. There's about 1 million in the 1990s. And so for me, I can't ever really conceptualize why the Palestinians demanding the right of return is such like a ridiculous or an outrageous thing to keep that as a focus. And especially, I think Arafat also was particularly interested in Lebanese Palestinians who resided in Lebanon because of what the Lebanese people had given to him and the role he'd played in their society.
Yeah, I think it might be in the Clinton parameters or in the Israeli response to the Clinton parameters. But I think either one of those sides agreed that Lebanese refugees would have priority because of how they're treated in Lebanon. Makes sense. Okay, this brings us to a much more broad issue. You acknowledge that if full right of return happens, there's no more Israel. There's just two Palestinian states.
Yeah, and okay. I think that ultimately that's right. But the reason that I feel that way is because I would rather invest in like the impossible. Because for me, frankly, the two-state solution is impossible. And the reason I say this, right, is because I think the two-state solution maybe could have happened at some point if there had been major pressure put on Israel. But no one was really willing to do it. Like, Carter knew that the settlements were the major issue. Begin just went and increased the number of settlements. Rabin increased the number of settlements. Everyone has increased the number of settlements, and the international community does nothing about it. I mean, I think it's best described as kind of like winking at the settlers. They're like, oh, no, 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 you can't do this settlement thing, Israel, but here's unlimited money. Even when there was frozen loan guarantees, I think, was that in the... Yeah, it was to Shamir's government.
Yeah,
and it was linked to the settlement issue, but then they kind of just didn't care. And that's why I'm so, like, so much more in favor of, say, a one-state solution rather than a two-state, because, like, I appreciate and understand that Arafat is not perfect. I don't think he should have signed the Oslo Accords in the first place. I think it was a terrible idea. I think in, like, some people's readings of it, particularly Seth Anziska, he says the Washington Accords, the Washington negotiations, the Madrid summit, were actually looking more likely to get peace because the Palestinians were very clear on what their red lines were, whereas Arafat didn't give any of those red lines. But sorry, I kind of made a multitude of points there. But I think that the thing I'm saying about a one state is I would rather invest in the impossible, you know, and I would rather have the hope that there could be a better Middle East. I would rather hope that the Middle East doesn't have to always be dominated by these sectarian nation states and that human beings can live in peace and equality.
Yeah, so if you're talking about impossibility, are we saying impossible? I know that impossible just means it's going to be an oxymoron, but are we talking about like a spectrum of impossibility? Like, do you think the two-state and one-state solution are equally impossible, or one's more possible, or like...
I think in the current world order, the changes that are required for there to be a two-state solution would probably just end up being more likely to move towards a one-state solution.
Interesting. Okay. Maybe a broad take about sectarian stuff. So obviously when you look at sectarianism from a distance, it looks ridiculous. It looks like, why the fuck are you fighting over these like some of it's just arbitrary, some of it's ahistorical, some of it's just like a long time ago. Like all these disputes just look insane. Like I'm Lebanese. I've seen it with my own family and people I know. Like sectarianism it's a cancer. The problem is that when you see sectarian groups and they're all dug into their positions and they're very aggressive and they're very aggressively defensive, it makes sense to say that they should all stop and be multicultural. It doesn't make sense to go to one group and tell them to lower their guard and just let the other one and just hope that the other one will reciprocate. So when it comes to, that's why I would never tell Palestinians to just like completely throw down their arms regardless of any context, right? If you've got settlers coming in and encroaching on your territory, you should be allowed to chase them away, with whatever means you want. Fuck them. But when it comes to the Israeli side, when we talk about demographic concerns of Israelis are not invalid. Like when the problem with nationalism is, especially if you're Jewish, nationalism as a whole is not good for outgroups as it is. It's good for in-groups, it's not good for outgroups. That was the whole issue of the 20th and 19th century nationalism. Arab nationalism did not show any indication in the 20th century that it was going to be massively different for Jewish people. I just don't understand this idea where we think that Jews would exist as a minority in the Middle East, especially if the majority is Palestinians, the one group that probably has more of an excuse to be anti-Semitic than any other group in the region. Why that would be anything other than like how that would guarantee multiculturalism and not just sectarian violence, but in the other way around.
Because I think, like, I don't wish to sort of lie in favor of the Ottoman Empire. I think that whole notion of tolerance was bullshit, that it basically only operated on the principle of, well, we'll be tolerant to you as long as you're doing what we're saying. That's like how they were tolerant. They were like sometimes, like almost instantaneously, someone could go from being a Christian accepted in the, you know, like the Ottoman vision of what wanted, like the Ottoman vision of society, to just being swapped instantly if you did something that was against the Ottoman Empire. Like I think the best examples are really groups like the Kurds or the ones that I've read about. And sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought. I think that generally in the Middle East, the treatment of Jewish people is incomparable to that of Europe. Like Europe, what Europe did for generations to Jewish people, and continued doing, that culminated really in the Holocaust until after that point, Europeans to a large extent were like, well, we need to prevent that ever happening again. And since then, you know, there's been a decent amount of protection of Jewish people that's developed. And I think that that's a good and positive thing. But I just think this belief that, you know, Arabs can't stop being sectarian doesn't really fit with how, you know, the Europe and how America are ending up.
Well, it took Europe an entire world war to, to get over their sectarianism, and obviously it took most of the Jews leaving for them to stop caring that much about Jews. When it comes to the Arab world, though, I don't think Arabs are inherently sectarian. Of course, they're not. The problem is that we're expecting one group to give up, to lower their guard, and just hope that the other one does the same, or it reciprocates a peaceful offer, which I just don't think will happen. As far as European anti-Semitism goes, you're right. The Arab world was not anything near as what Europe was in the 20th century. But we also know that Arab leaders were not immune to European anti-Semitism, because obviously things like blood libel started to come into Damascus in the late 1800s. We know that there was actually one blood libel case, a very minor one, but it happened in Jerusalem, and it was actually backed by Muslim clerics. We know that obviously al-Husseini, a very popular figure in Palestine, was just a flat out Nazi. We know that his cousin, the head of the Palestine Arab Congress, believed in stab in the back myth. He believed that the Bolsheviks were... Yes.
Really?
Yeah, he believed that the Bolshevik revolution was done by Jews, and also that the stab in the back was done by Jews. Yeah.
I'd never heard that about Musa Kazim, actually.
Now, he did moderate later, obviously. There's a bit of a rumor that he was bribed by Zionists, but I don't know. Not confirmed.
Who wrote about that? I'd be interested to hear.
For that particular
because
one...
I've seen like a much more sympathetic reading of Musa Kazim. But just on this topic, right? I feel like in terms of Palestinians, they are expected to lay down their arms, right? Like they did in the West Bank. The one-gun policy instituted by Abbas pretty much disarmed all militants in the West Bank. Yeah, there are still a small number of militant groups like the Lion's Den in Jenin, but like organized resistance doesn't really exist in the same way in the West Bank. And the thing is that Israel didn't lay down their arms. It was, and the international community over and over again expects of Palestinians to lay down their arm. Even the most leftist Israeli, right? Like the person who's an outsider, Yair Golan, what he actually believes is that they should still have like military dominance over any Palestinian state, right? So like my problem is that the basic premise of the only two-state solution that we're going to get in the context of like the really existing Israel is one where Palestinians have to lay down their arms, but Israel still gets to keep its really powerful military.
So that can get you into a debate about what just like the power imbalances that already exist, or like factual realities on the ground. I can put it bluntly if you want. Like the fact is that Israelis benefit from violence, like Israeli right-wingers at least, they benefit from a degree of violence happening in the region because they'll win and they'll use it to get more territory. Palestinians do not benefit from violence in the slightest. Like maybe there are some edge cases of people chasing settlers away or disrupting infrastructure, but obviously, just broadly speaking, do we agree that Hamas's strategy and the Axis strategy was a total failure?
What do you mean? What do you mean a total failure?
For achieving Palestinian dignity, rights, anything?
I think it depends what you look at their aims as. If you take their aims as achieving Palestinian sovereignty, then yeah, you're probably right. Right now, they're in a horrendous situation. However, if you look at the other aims of Sinwar, that is like kind of placing the Palestinian national cause back at the top of the agenda, delegitimizing Israel, and generally showing the world what Israel is actually like, the things that it had already been doing in the West Bank. You know, it accelerated them definitely in Gaza, but the structure of mass killing, mass oppression did not start after October the 7th. And so in terms of like Hamas's aim of defeating and destroying Israel, I think they knew fully that that was implausible on October the 7th. However, what I will say is that like in terms of the aim of like delegitimizing Israel, I don't think Israel's ever been in a worse position right now. I think it's something like 40% of American Jews even think that Israel is committing genocide or committed genocide in the Gaza Strip. The amount of young Jewish people who you now see speaking out and generally opposing Israel in a way that didn't exist before has grown hugely. And I would say consciousness amongst the general populations of like a country like ours. I mean, I know you live in Scotland. Maybe you're a bit of a Braveheart guy, but I don't know. I think that the thing is that like, if you look at the general consciousness, the opinion of Israel is in the gutter. And I think it will increasingly become difficult for even, say, for like governments to cling to it. I think it's a major problem of the Labour Party that it still feels a need to cling to Israel and not offer any significant change on policy against Israel. And I think even for the Republican Party in the US, as these young Republicans grow up, it's a worrying thing. Like I think that all of this stuff is troubling, and I think that it is only a problem that will grow for Israel. And I'm sorry if this seems like a contrived explanation, but I don't think we can frame it exclusively through armed struggle is going to achieve instantaneously the aim of dignity and a state. But I think that in other ways it has achieved the things that Sinwar kind of thought, I'm going to do this because of that.
Yeah, and that's great if you but obviously that's great if you believe that the Israeli opinion doesn't matter. Like, we're not going to treat this like apartheid South Africa. We're not going to consider the opinions of the people who have the power and actually are going to turn things over. Because obviously that approach was very much, we need to assure, like, at least in part, they needed to assure the white population that there was a future for them in the country, that they were not going to just get subject to revenge killings, and it was going to be about peace, reconciliation, and nation building. If we don't care about that from the Israeli side, then you can have all the international pressure you want. The fact is that you have a population there that, one, for whether they're correct or not, they see themselves as indigenous, but more importantly, they see themselves as with their backs to the wall and with nowhere else to go. So if all you're going to do is disempower Israel and isolate them on the world stage, well, who benefits from that in Israel? The right-wingers do. The right-wingers are the ones who constantly go to Israeli left-wingers and say, look, no one likes us. Everyone fucking hates us. That's the only way that we can ever stand strong is if we are aggressive and if we are assertive and we don't let people build up infrastructure and military stuff over in South Lebanon and Gaza. Every time we see a new tunnel or a new weapons import, we're going to blow it up right away. We're not going to let them amass 2,000 rockets or 200,000 like last time. We're just going to keep expanding into the West Bank because fuck them. They don't want peace anyway. That all benefits the right wing in Israel. They love that. So you're never going to get rid of that one single issue, is that you have this group that sees themselves with their backs on the wall and with nowhere else to go, and they're going to be as aggressive as possible to assert that position. And those are the ones that get more popular. And you cannot be an Israeli left-winger in an environment where the entire world is shitting on you. Meanwhile, groups like Hamas or Al-Aqsa Martyrs or PIJ or anyone else are kind of just getting almost a pass or just getting little condemnations every now and then, but can mostly just kind of go on and keep on doing what they're doing. And there's no broad ideological shift from either region. Same with the West Bank as well. Like, one of the reasons they're so embedded in the West Bank is it's not just because of wanting settlers wanting land. That's obviously one reason, but another reason is that they think as soon as they leave the West Bank, Hamas comes into power, and then it'll be a place 15 or 16 times bigger than Gaza, taken over by a group that wants to militarize the entire region. So
but
you're not going to get rid of that perception.
But I think one thing I find really difficult to to take that into account is the Palestinian Authority engaged in a heavy crackdown on Hamas in 2009. They arrested thousands of Hamas members. They arrested people who were sympathetic to Hamas. They closed charities. They arrested preachers who they gave gave sermons that were too pro-Hamas. And so, I'm sorry, I don't feel the need to pander to the feelings of the Israelis. I genuinely don't. And I think that also I am I understand the opposition to these right-wing, largely religious fundamentalist organizations in general. However, none of them engage in a structure of violence that is comparable to Israel. And I think the bigger problem isn't what the Western left are saying. I think the bigger problem is that our governments continue to cling to this genocidal country, this country that, is in violation of so many laws, engages in apartheid, violates international law constantly. And I think it needs to have its back to the wall. I think that that's how Israelis need to feel. And I don't care if the right benefits, because I think that ultimately what has to happen is Israel has to be held to account. And those right-wingers are just an expression of things that the Israeli left do and then hide it. Right. I think a good example is Sabra and Shatila. Sabra and Shatila, yes, was basically Sharon's plan. But when Sharon is about to be held to account, he goes to Rabin, he goes to the leader of Labour at that time, whose name I have somehow, it escapes me, don't know. Do you know the answer? In the 80s, the leader of Labour?
In 82?
Shafir? Was it? No,
yeah,
no,
not Shamir. You're thinking of Perez, but was he in 82?
Perez. I think it was Perez. Anyway, let's just say it's Perez. He turns to them and says, you trained the phalangists, you used them in Tel al-Zatar, you sent them in, and now you're moralizing on us for doing it in Sabra and Shatila, just because there's outrage, basically, because of the size of the invasion of Lebanon. And so I think I find this really hard to be so worried about the Israeli right when the Israeli left are doing the same things. Settlements expanded under Rabin, settlements expanded they started under Labour prime ministers. Yitzhak Rabin, during his first term, had the most aggressive settlement drive in the 1970s. And sure, it's expanded by Begin once he gets into power, but it's not like it wasn't happening. And so I think that Israel as a country and as Zionism as an ideology has to be held to account because it's not producing any differences. Like, I'm sorry, it's just not.
I mean, these differences are there if you just like they are there. When it comes to settlements, obviously, before the Six-Day War, I think there was one person in the cabinet who had big ideas about going into the West Bank and actually taking it over, and it was Dayan. The other ones didn't really. Like that's why they tried to get the Jordanians to stop shooting on them before they went in. When it comes to settlements afterwards, Rabin, when he semi-froze settlements, he made a delineation, whether you agree with it or not, between security and political settlements. Even Barak didn't do that. And also, if we talk about settlement expansion,
sorry, could I just ask a question? When is that the one in the 70s? The like
no, Rabin. This is Rabin in the 90s. This is when he wasn't in office in the 70s, or he wasn't a prime minister.
Rabin was in office in
74, not prime minister.
74 wasn't he prime minister 74 to 77?
No, not Yitzhak. Was he? I might be wrong. Actually,
I think so. Yeah. I think you may just be wrong about that.
Okay, I'm talking about.
I think he goes out because he's corrupt. But actually, I'll let you continue speaking.
Yeah, I'll continue. So, yeah, in the 90s, after the Oslo Accords, is when Rabin decides to delineate between security and political settlements, and he stops with the ones that he considers to be political, as in like the ones that are anywhere past the green line. He's not interested in allowing them to continue. Even Barak didn't do that. We also, I mean, whether you agree with it or not, the fact is that had Camp David or Clinton parameters or even, especially Olmert's plan been accepted, we know that settlements would have been dismantled, especially anything beyond the green line, and pretty much all the ones like that are several miles past the green line would have been gone, and the other ones wouldn't have been allowed to expand. So we know that those offers have existed, and in any case, when you're talking about the Palestinian, there's a few points again. The PA Hamas crackdown, again, I think we also both know that if Israel just unilaterally yeeted themselves out of the West Bank tomorrow, then Hamas would win an election, or they would take power by force. They are easily the most popular party in that territory. We also, again, if we're talking about you don't care about what Israelis think, and you don't care about the left wing winning over the right wing, and you just want them to be to their backs of the wall until they concede something. What exactly are you expecting the Israelis to concede that there's any realistic option of them doing? What are they going to concede?
I think that once you take away the ability to just have a racist apartheid state, that Israelis start conceding huge amounts. Once you start feeling the consequences of having an occupation, no longer getting loan guarantees from America, unlimited weaponry, the protection of the US, I think all of a sudden that Israel does start conceding. There are historical moments at when this happened. Begin says to Reagan, he talks to Reagan about it's in August of 1982. The second that there's like a threat of the US cutting support for them, Israel starts acting. This just has never really happened, because in the current status quo, the fact is Israel is better to have as an ally, and so we're always going to keep appeasing it. However, there is something that I wanted to address there. The reason for the popularity of Hamas is pretty evident, by the way. It's because the Palestinian Authority and the two-state solution lacks any legitimacy in the West Bank, because it has not offered any improvements to Palestinians' lives. It categorically has not. They spend their time cracking down on Palestinians. They don't protect them from settlers. They do nothing but enshrine this situation where a small elite enrich themselves over and over again in Ramallah, whilst the rest of Palestinians live in a situation where they're generally incredibly unsafe and are living a totally abnormal existence. The PA really just stabilizes this horrendous existence. So it's not really surprising that an alternative who reject the two-state solution, who still engage in armed resistance and would allegedly represent a threat to, the settlers, are the legitimate choice. I think it's kind of like, well, Hamas would take over. Yeah, but because of the context in which we exist. And once Israel takes meaningful, very serious steps of being like, right, settlements are frozen. That is the base premise of any negotiation. Not that, we're only building defensive and offensive ones, because Rabin lied about that during his, well, actually, it was more the Labour who came before him. They called it the stockade and watchtower mode of settlement. It wasn't like a legitimate thing. And the settlements continued expanding anyway beyond what they claimed it would be. And so I think I just sit here and I see this thing of like, well, Hamas would be elected and Israelis are scared about that. But it's a product of the occupation. The anxieties that Israelis feel are products of dispossessing people. People don't give up their land for free. People don't get subjected to occupation for decades and then have negotiations where the other side is still expanding settlements, taking away your land, your resources, and then just go, okay, yeah, that's kind of fine for us. Like, I'm sorry. it's really hard for me to take into account those anxieties when they are a product of what Israel is and does.
Okay, so that seems to be that your position is that Palestinians, even if it came to like, they're right to not have ever counteroffered a kind of Tuesday solution. They're right to just keep on going. But again, okay, if we're talking about Palestinian armed resistance keeping up and making it popular, do you think if Hamas got elected in the West Bank that Palestinians in that territory would be safer or more in danger from Israeli reprisals? I'm asking that rhetorically because we obviously know that if Hamas are there in the West Bank, that's a territory that is much more... I don't know why you're saying that the security idea on the Green Line is not valid. Like, these are literally hilltops that are just a few miles away from all of the major cities in Israel. Of course it has a meaning. Like, it's much more of a threat than anything that could come out of Gaza. The fact is that when this space is granted that when Hamas have this opportunity, they militarize. They put that way in front of any kind of development of infrastructure or allowing people to try and build a better life or education or anything like that. They put it on military installations and tunnels sprawling across the entire place. You were wrong earlier when you said that you don't think the Sinwar or the Al-Aqsa, the Al-Qassam brigades didn't expect to overwhelm Israel. We don't actually know what they expected, because given Sinwar's rhetoric and given what was actually said on the day by Mohammed Deif, we know that they were calling on the rest of the Arab world, and especially they were calling on Palestinians inside Israel. They were calling on the West Bank and on Hezbollah to join into the fight right there and then, because the time was now. And they saw that Israel was, because of the Supreme Court reforms, that they were at an all-time level of weakness. They thought that that was the opportunity, and we don't know. Maybe they did think they were going to win, because the way that they were talking and the way that they fired up their soldiers definitely sounded like that. Had what they wanted happened, had 1 or 2 million Palestinian Israelis decided to rise up as well, had the West Bank risen up, had Hezbollah decided to unload on October 7th, had the militia groups in Syria decided to try and fire in, maybe they would have. Maybe they would have had Iran joined in the same day and launched their ballistic missiles. Yeah, maybe they would have. But again, I don't think you really... I think you're... Maybe I'm being a bit presumptuous, but I don't think you would care. I think you'd be okay with October 7th just continuing all the way until Israel's gone, regardless of how many people died in the process.
I mean, I think it kind of depends in the context of what happens, right? Like, I don't want mass civilian casualties. I don't. Unfortunately, the problem with me and what I think of Israel as a structure and a society is Israel has always premised itself on eliminating the indigenous people. There are some changes that occur at the start. There are some different modes of settlement tried. But if you look into the logic of, say, something like the Jewish National Fund and the early Zionist organizations there, they basically try and do away with the Palestinians. But on the topic of, I really want to go back to a couple of things you said there about Gaza, because I think that they're so important. Now, tunnels were first made for smuggling, I believe. Like, tunnels were made to smuggle things because they were living in a siege, right? They were in this situation where, Israel withdrew, but they reconstituted around Gaza's border. They instituted a crippling siege of the area, and the tunnels were initially used for smuggling. Israel never stopped acquiring huge amounts of weaponry. So are you really surprised that a group whose legitimacy was premised on the notion, well, look, we've driven the settlers out through armed resistance. That's why Israel views these settlements as no longer necessary. Whether that's true or not, whether it came down to just Sharon wanting to freeze the peace process in formaldehyde, I believe someone close to him said. But ultimately, Hamas are engaging with these things, and Hamas have legitimacy because of the occupation, right? Like, I don't think it's hard to see that like, the PA have lost so much legitimacy through collaboration, through offering Palestinians nothing, and that, in Gaza, whatever it may be, they don't live under the yoke directly of Israeli occupation. But on the second thing, I am so perplexed. Like, I am so perplexed by the notion that Palestinians could have built a better society in Gaza, right? Like, it was under a crippling siege. Like, surely that's something you admit, first of all. But second of all, the de-development, the economic destruction of the Gaza Strip largely happened during the Israeli occupation. This is written about by Sarah Roy. She talks about economic de-development that occurs, and largely the permit system that Israel had for a while. Now, the permit system operated so beneficially for Israel rather than Palestinians because basically you could take a huge amount of Palestinians when the Israeli economy was good to engage in, labor in the country, and then when you didn't need them, you could just do away with them. How is any kind of meaningful society, after decades of occupation, decades of extreme violence, going to build something better, something good, something that's like different and meaningful? Because the PA have failed, and they've denounced armed struggle. They haven't built something good for the general population. It's just a society that's like entirely reliant on the Palestinian Authority and people policing other Palestinians. It's not a meaningful existence. It's not like the kind of liberationary change that we're looking for. And there's no way that Palestinians could have made that in Gaza.
Okay, coming to tunnels. Whether or not the first tunnels were for smuggling, I don't even know if that's correct, because they were kidnapping people from 2005, 2006 from those tunnel crossings. They were using kidnapping. Also, one of the things they were smuggling was weapons. So it's like, yeah, they were made for smuggling, but the timeline is just off there. The withdrawal came in 2005. The crippling siege that you described wasn't imposed in its totality until 2007 after Hamas took over, as in it happened after the rockets, after the kidnappings, after the weapon smuggling. The fact is that it's not, there's a spectrum, okay? I'm not saying that Gaza could have become Singapore. It wasn't a state when Sharon pulled out, with the formaldehyde, whatever. It wasn't a state when Sharon pulled out. It was a territory, but it was also a territory with a lot of international aid, more per head than most groups in the world get, as far as groups that require it. They could have built something other than 500 kilometers of tunnels. They could have built something other than massive weapon stockpiles or enough booby traps for, in Sinwar's word, thousands of buildings. They could have done something other than that, and they chose not to because, again, they didn't think. What did they think they were going to do with all these weapons and arms other than what? What was the expectation there of doing all that? Because they were launching attacks into Israel. They were still launching rockets. They were still kidnapping soldiers, or kidnapping eventually civilians as well. That's what they were doing with those tunnels. Just because of the first one, even if the first ones were just for smuggling food or whatever, I'm still not even sure that's true. But assuming that's all it was for, then what were they for after that? They were not. That's not their primary purpose.
Defense.
It's not. What's defensive about Hamas? Hamas doesn't think that if you want to defend yourself against Israeli, who's more well defended, Gaza City or Ramallah? Ramallah doesn't have tunnels sprawling all the way underneath it.
Who was better defended against like huge amounts of settler incursions into their land up until October the 7th? And even now, it's a dangerous situation for an Israeli settler to go into Gaza. Like, seriously, for example, in Vietnam, the reason that they dug tunnels, they were dug by families and stuff. It was to fight against the French occupation. Like, old people would throw away the dirt, kids would like grab it up, and people who understood how you did it would dig the tunnels. They were largely like a defensive operation because like this whole thing of like, well, Hamas stockpiled weapons for this or that. Israel's stockpiled weapons for for what? For mass killing? Because look, Israel at times has engaged in defensive wars, but like 1982 Lebanon, there's no argument of defense there. They invaded to break the back of the Palestinian national movement. Sharon lied to his own government vis-a-vis that. And Israel's history of engaging in huge massacres and mass killing campaigns in order to establish what it wants politically, it's not something new. And also, by the way, on the topic of like Hamas taking over, they won what was declared a free and fair election. They were allowed to stand by the West in an election. It was only after the results that the West were like, no, that can't happen. I believe there's a rather comical story that Condoleezza Rice fell off her treadmill when she heard the results because they did not think that Hamas had any chance of winning. And so I think like this kind of notion that, Hamas just used all this money to build weaponry. Okay, fine. Yeah, they did do that. But simultaneously, I don't know what else they could have built. I don't know what you can build in one of the most densely populated places on Earth that is subject to a crippling siege by both Egypt, by Israel, and where you basically cannot do anything. Like, you just cannot. There's not enough jobs. The influx of refugees after 1948 was even said, there's a UN representative who is like, it feels unlikely that Gaza will ever be able to support this number of people who came in. So you're kind of just building a society that is what? Reliant on aid from the international community forever? And Hamas builds what with that? They build a collaborationist society and get what? The Palestinian Authority? Like, I see what you're saying. Like, okay, they spent it all on weaponry. But I don't understand what else you think could have been there. I don't care if it's not Singapore. How do you look after a population of 2 million people with huge unemployment, with very limited natural resources? The gas fields off Gaza, they weren't allowed those. They were found in, I think, 2004, 2003. They weren't allowed them. What is there? It's really hard for me to see what kind of meaningful life you could find in Gaza. Like, people did, don't get me wrong, but saying that you could, like, do whatever there, that there could have been something really different, to me totally ignores, like, the history of occupation.
Okay. You said a few things there that I'm actually quite skeptical that you sincerely believe. One, tunnels were not built in Gaza to stop individual or lone settler groups from wandering in and trying to set up shop. There's no, if a settler
No, I'm
wanted
talking
into, the
Can I
military
just address
infrastructure
that?
was, yeah, okay, fine.
Sorry. But I just wanted to say, like, I'm not talking specifically about tunnels there, but I'm talking about building the capacity for, like armed resistance.
So yeah, so rockets, RPGs, IEDs, like none of this is to deal with settlers, right? You
Well,
need one or two
the
guys with
settlers
guns
come.
was going to stop settlers. Like Israel had
The
no
settlers,
intention of sending settlers into Gaza after '05.
but the settlers come with the army, right? Like we know that the settlers come with the army. You know that, but also, why did they have no intention of sending settlers in after 2005?
Because they pulled them out, because Sharon didn't want anything to do with the Israeli army actually being in Gaza anymore.
Because why?
Are we going to go into the context of the formaldehyde quote? Is that why? Is that what we're going for?
No. Just because I think that ultimately Hamas's logic and the logic of people there was like, look, it's costly when people actually stand up to you. When people have this capacity, it's easy to do things to defenseless populations where you've created a collaborationist regime, but it's not like, look, whatever Israel has achieved over the last few years, it has not succeeded in destroying Hamas. Dismantling its offensive capabilities, yes, but dismantling Hamas as a resistance organization, I can't see it's been able to do that. I really cannot see it's been able to do that.
I mean, there have been much more sturdy militant groups that have been destroyed in the past. When it comes to Hamas and Gaza, yes, violence was one reason that they pulled out. The other reason that they pulled out, if you look at the broader context of that quote with the formaldehyde, was people believing at that point, people even within Sharon's government and even without, because obviously the public voted for him, was people out with even without the government were believing that there's just no opportunity to get a two-state solution back on the table with the Palestinian leadership. And they believed that if they wanted nothing to do with Gaza, yes, it was costly also because Gaza just isn't that interesting to even extremist Jewish people. Like you have to be really extreme to think that it's not even, I think Gaza isn't even referenced in the Talmud as part of being Jewish. So they have very little interest in taking it the same way that they do for the West Bank. And also just because that was Sharon's way of saying, because again, remember, Sharon also had plans to converge. He wanted to pull out of the West Bank as well and to just leave in the similar situation to Gaza, the convergence plan it was called. They wanted that because they decided that their idea was to be neither the occupier, but neither Sharon's position wanting a Palestinian state. So they would just pull out unilaterally and then just say, this is not our problem anymore. We're not interested. That's why they did it. There was not any risk of, and again, the army going in, that brings me to the next thing I'm not sure you agree with. You can take Sharon's pretext for going into 82 and say that it was false. It wasn't a PLO killing or a PLO assassination attempt in Europe. But do you sincerely think that Israel wouldn't have gone into Lebanon without the PLO being there? It's not that the PLO were never attacking Israel in the 70s and 80s.
No,
the Coastal Road Massacre came from the PLO in Lebanon.
I think they wanted to make a Christian Maronite state that was a desire that Ben Gurion expressed, that Dayan in his personal memoirs expressed, that it was a good idea to basically cleanse the south of Shia Lebanese and basically create a sympathetic Christian state from up beyond that point. I think Ben Gurion expresses it quite early and people are quite shocked, but Dayan also expressed it. And then since that point, I think Sharon was like, yeah, fuck it, we're going to do that. And I think that that's why they did it. I don't think they really cared about the PLO. I think that there's people who have made actually an even better point talking about Seth Anziska. I think Seth Anziska, and there's a guy who I went to university with called Coulter Lowry's, I think his name is. That may be a mispronunciation, but he's written basically about the PLO, the fact that the PLO were like moving towards a two-state solution. Then Seth Anziska talks about it too. He's like, the PLO went on a diplomacy offensive. There's the famous speech by Arafat where he's like, I have the freedom fighter's gun and the olive branch in one hand. Do not let the freedom fighter's gun fall. And I think Israel was not interested in that kind of solution, where the PLO were able to have their own state. And I think that they were afforded that ability by Kissinger's ridiculous ideology of, no, we can't engage with the PLO because they're evil monster terrorists.
The PLO were doing terrorism at that point, though. They never stopped.
Yeah,
they ceased, apart from the attempted ceasefire before 82, which even then, there was one point where the Israelis struck an installation and then the PLO had to keep their population happy, but their version of avoiding an escalation was to fire mortars into Israel, but they deliberately aimed them to miss. And obviously the Israelis didn't know they were trying to miss. So even then, no, that's not coming back to the central question. You do not believe that had the PLO not been in Beirut, that Israel would have gone in to try and militarily create a Maronite state? No way.
I think it was pretext to do it. I think it was genuinely pretext, and I think that Sharon lied.
Okay,
I think that Sharon
pretext is-
categorically lied to his population. I think that they didn't really need to get rid of the PLO because it represented such a major threat. I think Khalidi also makes this point. The problem of the PLO was, right, the PLO were kind of showing we can actually run a state here because there are a huge amount of Lebanese refugee camps, and they were kind of operating a state within a state, and Israel didn't like that. I think at that point, Arafat would have been willing to engage in peaceful negotiations. I believe Jimmy Carter knew this quite well at that time, that the PLO were probably interested or more interested in a two-state solution than Israel was.
Maybe, but the fact is that their actions, they were just definitely not showing that. The Coastal Road Massacre is not the kind of behavior that you engage in if you're trying to pursue a two-state solution. And at the end of the day, you said pretext, but that sounds like you agree. They would not have gone into Lebanon had the PLO not been there and firing attacks at Israel.
But
we
I
know
don't
that.
think
We
it
know
was
that.
because they were.
Yes, I know it's not
because they were deadly evil terrorists in the way that Israel lied about them.
The thing is that you're making my argument then. My argument when it comes to the Israeli right is that yes, they are expansionist. Yes, they are adventurous. Yes, they are whatever you want to, whatever bad thing you want to call them, they are. The fact is though is that they need an excuse. That's why when you don't give them the excuse, when it's whether it's Egypt or Jordan, or then they don't do it. So that's why when it comes to the excuse that was given in Lebanon, we know that again it wasn't just Israel that didn't like the PLO being there. We know that regardless of what Maronites thought, even the Shia Lebanese were not too happy with the PLO being there. They described themselves as being turned into fodder for the Fedayeen because unemployed Shiites were employed by the PLO to go and basically be the fucking front line of certain death attacks against Israel. So that's why there's that story about them throwing flowers at the IDF the first time they rolled in. Just to bring you back on something you said about Gaza and how, again, there is a spectrum between being a between being like a military installation for Hamas and turning that entire strip into a war machine versus it being reliant on aid and trying to develop, albeit without having the risk of bombs coming on top of you. Like Jordan to this day is reliant on international aid. Jordan's like a desert kingdom, and obviously their existence is preferable to that of Gaza. So just because they wouldn't have had a perfect existence under the conditions of 2005, there was a choice. There was a choice that was actually voiced by one of Hamas's original founders. I can't remember, I can find his name if you want, but there were people in Gaza, even within Hamas, who were trying to say that if we stick to ourselves and if we build ourselves up the best we can, then that will at least open the door for opportunities to go further, and it will be preferable to keeping up the fight to try and destroy Israel from this tiny bit of territory that we have no chance of doing and only inviting reprisals into us. And again, because that's what the right wing likes. They like excuses to go and do the things that they want to do. But then obviously he was sidelined, right? And the people in Hamas who wanted to continue attacking Israel never went away. That's why you had the second Intifada from coming out of people in Gaza with Hamas. And that's why you also had the rocket attacks that never stopped even after 2005. So...
Oh, sorry.
But the main point I'm trying to get to is that I think most of this argument is interesting and all that, but like I think a lot of this argument is kind of a little bit redundant because it seems like you don't even think that the Israeli presence in that region is legitimate, or you think that like they had no reason to want a state in the first place, or they had no good reason to anyway, or no understandable reason even, and that just needs to get done away with. But I'm just trying to tell you, and the thing I'm trying to get across is that there is a reason that this strategy of using force and international sanctions and international pressure and whatever like legal attacks that the UN General Assembly that they try to do to Israel, there's a reason that they've been doing this for the best part of 75 years, and it hasn't got them anywhere because they're trying to deal with a group that in a way they don't even really fully like understand or acknowledge like why they're even there. They think that Israel can be pushed into either giving up their military defenses or their military infrastructure, or giving up their like security presence or the like, which they would call the blockade, or like the presences around the West Bank. They think they're going to give it up for nothing, even though they still haven't been able to prove that they wouldn't use any bit of leeway that's granted to them to attack further. And as long as that happens, the PA is treated differently from Hamas's. Like the PA is treated differently.
But they're treated differently, but Israel still settles their land. Israel still constantly incites against them, constantly says they're evil, monstrous terrorists. The Palestinian Authority Their forces are trained by the CIA, by private mercenary companies in Jordan. They spend their time cracking down on Palestinians. They collaborate on security matters with Israel, and they get nothing in return. I am sorry, like, Israel controls their economy. The situation there is not good for most Palestinians. The Israeli occupation and has destroyed so many meaningful things like the tourism industry, handicrafts industry. It just doesn't work there anymore. There's not many jobs that are actually available to people. And I think that like what this analysis is totally ignorant of, and what it totally misses is that like the PA did this. The PA did this. Like Keith Dayton. Lieutenant General Keith Dayton, there's a famous speech in 2009 where he says, "We have created new men in the West Bank." And he's like, the Israelis come to me and they ask me, how many more of these new men can you generate? They are security forces entirely benevolent to Israel. They have shown that they will collaborate with the occupation, and yet still the Israeli government incites against them. Even when there's a left-winger in power, nothing changes. Like nothing is good enough for Israel. They continue this colonization. And by the way, just on this topic of like highly militarizing a population, like first of all, you know that Israel has massacred all over the region, that it constantly engages in political assassinations everywhere, like everywhere it can. It has shown that this year, that it will assassinate people wherever it can get their hands on them. But I think that like the other key part is that Israel as a society is so militarized to the point where you have, in this discussion, you have described human beings as a means of security, that Israel should and has like a justification to build settlements on hills and specific areas because they're apparently defensive. And that is literally just using a human being as like a means to see what Palestinians are up to. That is like all that is.
To be clear, I don't think settlements are security. The only settlements, quote unquote, are the installations that are actually military. They're not even really civilian communities. They're are the ones like on the very edge on the hilltops. And I would happily swap like 5 times the land for that to go to Palestine. I would never, ever describe civilian settlements in the West Bank as security. That's not my opinion. Anyway, sorry.
But what were you describing as security? Sorry.
The military installations that are on the hilltops.
As in the like
or even like the checkpoints, like or the border checkpoints.
Okay, wait. Sorry. So you think the border checkpoint should go?
What, unilaterally? Probably not. No, there'd have to be an agreement.
But like the vast majority of them, the ones that are literally just
the ones that are there to protect like outposters, yeah, fuck them. I don't think the IDF should get called when those guys get attacked.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's a decent-ish position. I can't really remember the point of what we were just discussing.
The point of what we're talking is that you think that Palestinians can concede everything and they'll basically get the same thing that Hamas does. That sounds like what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's insane because God.
Wait. I just want to, like, in terms of the structure of being subjected to a violent settler colonial regime, yes. And I don't know how you would plausibly deny that, because I don't think you can see the PA as anything but collaborationist, right? They've literally just passed something that if you, or they're moving to pass something that if you don't accept the Oslo Accords, you cannot run for office in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank. Many people in the West Bank over and over again criticize the Israelis. They refer to Israel's occupation as, the Palestinian Authority as a second occupation. They collaborate with Israel. And what do they get in return? Mass annexation of territory, huge amounts of killing, massive Israeli raids into their territory, destruction of not entire townships, but mass expulsions. I mean, we saw that this year, right? Like there were huge expulsions in the Jenin refugee camp and all these other places. Even after the PA went in and engaged in a crackdown, I think in Jenin, correctly? Yep. And so I think it's kind of this situation where you're like trying to tell me that Hamas could have done things so differently. But the West Bank shows that that's not a reality. And the West Bank also has a major beneficial factor of it's not one of the most densely populated places on earth. Like the Gaza Strip is.
Yeah, and Gaza has the advantage in that Israel was willing to take every single settler out of the area. So that wouldn't have been the same problem in Gaza. And again, if you're going to say that they were going to go in with the army, again, there's this whole thing. I feel like there's an issue with just saying like there's either bad or there's good and there's no in between, or and everything bad is equal, regardless of whether it's what's happened to Gaza in the last 2 years or what's happening to the West Bank. I think these are very, very different situations. It's no coincidence that even when Israel does massively overstep or commit crimes in the West Bank, it's in areas where there is Hamas and PIJ activity. It's places like the Jenin refugee camp, like you said, like one of the biggest hotbeds for Hamas extremism. There's a reason that they go in. The IDF have always been more aggressive there than they were in Ramallah, right? That's not a coincidence. And when it comes to the PA, again, we can go for quibbles about like the PA's effectiveness and how quite a lot of people in the Second Intifada who fought against the IDF with PIJ or Hamas were trained by PA security, and that Arafat's attempts to keep them in line were very, very limited, and obviously his efforts to stop them were pretty much nil. We can go into that but it's not really addressing, I think, the key issue, which is
that was 20 years ago, though.
Yeah, I know, and but when it comes to Abbas as well,
the security forces were reworked under Abbas. Like, this is an undeniable point. Like, the US, Israel maintains every ballistic record for the guns that are fired in the West Bank. If any weapon that belongs to weapons that belong to the Palestinian Authority, of course, they don't have, some random weapon that's sold by some Israeli to make a bit of money, because I think that's a thing that happens. But I think that, like, is referencing Arafat's era and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade and their uprising against Israel, that's a time that's gone now. The PA have been collaborating with Israel for 15 plus years, and all they've become, entirely, I mean, Arafat arguably did too, but all they have become is more authoritarian, more violent to their own population, and basically just carry out tasks that Israel can't. So something Andy Clarno writes about specifically is the PA are very often the people who carry out politically sensitive, or at least in the time he was writing, this was about 7 years ago, maybe Israel is more aggressive now, but that in terms of this, the PA 7 years ago were regularly arresting people for throwing stones. They were arresting people for, protesting. They are an organization entirely benevolent to Israel. They are not engaged in mass uprisings against Israel. There may be the occasional Palestinian Authority security force officer who does that, but they're all trained in Jordan under CIA, is it Blackwater? I don't want to. Yeah, Blackwater. I think it's Blackwater anyway. They're all trained there. And it's kind of a situation where I look at it and I see this aggressive colonization is still ongoing. It is only getting worse. And sure, the spectacular nature of the violence may not be as bad as Gaza, but the fact that, I know you quite like to cite it, so I had a look at the poll. Apparently 85% of the Palestinians that they interviewed for is it the PSPR, the Palestine Pulse thing, felt unsafe in the West Bank. They felt unsafe because of the situation in which they live. When you talk to Palestinians who are there, when you look at a film like No Other Land that documents the horrible nature of this violence, where there is just people coming into your land, attacking you, taking your homes from you, expelling you on the basis of some very shaky legal manipulation, I think I would call it, is maybe an apt term. That situation is totally, totally unacceptable.
Well, my Mossad handlers only introduced me to Palestinians who love Israel, so unfortunately I missed the ones who felt they were scared. That's a joke.
You're shy.
In any case,
big yes.
There's like a forced binary happening here. Yeah, like the PA is very different now to how it was under the Second Intifada. But again, we know, I don't think you don't disagree that Abbas has a lot less power over the Jenin refugee camp than he has over Ramallah. Like, we know that this is a different situation, and we know that. But again, I'm not even trying to say that I agree that the PA, well, actually, maybe we agree for different reasons. The PA does generally get a pretty fucking brutal, as far as they are with collaborating with Israel, like, they're much more helpful to Israel than anyone in Hamas or anyone else is going to be. They do, Abbas, like, at least in his speeches, he does say a lot of the right things. The problem is that people in Israel, like, again, they know that Abbas doesn't really have that much popularity. He's very unpopular, actually. It's one of the only things that Palestinians agree on. And the other thing is that we know that Abbas, as soon as any like PA presence or that presence is weakened, the alternative will be Hamas. And I don't think you're really acknowledging, when it comes to the fact that the peace process was on the table with Camp David or with the Olmert plan, I don't think you genuinely believe that had either of these been accepted, that settlement would still continue in the same way it does now. And I think that's the issue. The issue is that settlement happens, and settlers, one thing, and again, this is one thing I did learn from speaking to them, because I've unfortunately met a few of them too. The one thing that settlers fucking hate being asked, if you ever want to trigger a settler, is they'll tell you that they're there because of security and all this bullshit. Like apparently they're the thing that stands between Islamic Jihad and going into Israel, not the checkpoints. They'll say that they're there because there's no peace process and because like they might as well put a barrier between Hamas and Tel Aviv and all that shit. But then you ask them, okay, if Palestinians actually offered peace in exchange for this land, would you give it up? Would you give up this land for peace? They will never answer that question, because they know that as soon as there is a convincing olive branch from the Palestinians, they know that as soon as there is a convincing leader or an offer even that can get offered by the Palestinians, then their position is fucked. Like they have no leg to stand on. Like that's why Israeli opinion has gone from very, very anti-settlement and from people who are willing to dismantle settlements even unilaterally towards Netanyahu. It's because they have not been convinced meaningfully that there is actually an olive branch for peace there. That's why you get peace processes. You get lots of big words about the framework, so whether it's the Arab Peace Initiative or Geneva, but then as soon as they get down to the table, as soon as they start talking about details, then there's an offer from Israel and then they walk away. Or they just kind of say, well, I'll think about it and I'll come back later. Conveniently enough, I'll come back later at a point when you're just about to get voted out of office and then a right winger is going to replace you. So
I think it's really interesting to focus on Camp David and Taba when, like, they had the Oslo Accords and Israel wrote into that an exception when they were like, yeah, we're going to expand the settler population. And there's a huge expansion of settlers there. It's really hard to see why, like, the kind of expectation is that Arafat goes into a negotiation, right, where things are not exactly 100% clear. I believe with Olmert, right, isn't it? He said, or I believe he said, that Abbas didn't even say no, right? Or has he changed his position on that?
Olmert is, I spoke to Olmert.
That's 2009.
Olmert is a lot more sanguine right now about the whole process than he was back then. Olmert believes that had he had more time, had he not been, fucked by criminal charges from the right wing, that he would have got peace with Abbas. But the fact is that Olmert to this day will also still complain that that whole story with the napkin map and Olmert showing him the final offer, Abbas saying, "Oh, I want to study the map," and Olmert thinking, "You're just going to leave and never come back, are you? Let's do this tomorrow."
Wait.
And then Abbas reschedules tomorrow's appointment because he's got to go to Amman, and then they never hear from him ever again. Olmert's kind of got two positions on that. He believes that they could have had more time and they would have maybe got something. But at the end of the day, Abbas himself actually, he didn't say no. He also, I think in 2009-10, said that the gaps were too wide. His number two, Saeed Erekat, went to a Jordanian newspaper and just said, well, they offered us 60% at the beginning of Camp David. Then it became 92. Then it became 94 at Clinton. Now it's closer to 98 or 99, 100. Why rush? That's what he said to a Jordanian. So I think the lack of intent there, it's hard to convince me that people have tried everything or that they've tried to show these olive branches when there is not one final settlement ever in the last 100 years for two states that Palestinians have even offered, that they've never described. Oslo. There's not one. That's not a final settlement.
Oslo's an interim agreement, but that's kind of the trick of Oslo, right? That Israel, it seems like it's given all this pomp and, there's the famous handshake, but it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, Oslo's an agreement to have an agreement, right? Oslo is an agreement to have an agreement.
Yeah, but the thing is that Oslo establishes the Palestinian Authority. Oslo is clearly Palestinians' recognition of, Israel's right to exist. And it doesn't go anywhere because at Camp David, in my understanding, the problem pertains specifically to Jerusalem and settlements. I know you mentioned this other example. I'm not so familiar with it, but I'm not so sure that I'm so quick to trust Shlomo Ben-Ami and any of these people. I don't think they were honest brokers in their time. I think they relied on the fact that the US was always going to give them power. But I think that also, just like on a base level, right, like our governments recognize that Israel's occupation is illegal. They say the base for peace is a two-state based on 1967. Most Western governments do. Trump may have changed that, but largely that's what they say. The problem for me is that we never see anything materialize around that. That, like, regardless of who's in power, the position doesn't actually change. Israel doesn't take this powerful unilateral action to crack down on right-wing extremists in the West Bank. They are constantly cracking down on Palestinians. They have the apparatus to go in and smash those extremist settlements. But the other problem for me now is that we're at a point where there are 700,000 settlers living in the West Bank. The proportion of which are extremists, I don't know. But there is at least a sizable amount with decent levels and high levels of military training who will not give up. Even during when they pulled out the Sinai, right? There was a slight issue of like, fuck, these people are There was like an incident where loads of Kahana's followers nearly killed themselves in a bunker, and they had to fly in a rabbi or something to that effect to prevent them from doing it. I think like it just underestimates the situation in which Israel is in. That as long as Israel is continually hugged by both the Democrats, by the Republicans, by Labour, by anything that we have, I mean, we don't matter anymore. Like, let's be frank, the UK is a meaningless fucking country and all of this. But as long as like Netanyahu is hugged, as long as Israel is hugged, as long as we give, you know, so much privilege to the anxieties of Israelis, we're always going to be in this perpetual situation. And that's why I'd invest in the one-state solution, because over and over again, whoever's in power, they've shown a consistent inability to make these major changes. And that I'd much rather believe in, like, the world will change. And at that point, if you're talking about a two-state solution anyway, what's the fucking point? And we may as well go for the belief that human beings can exist equitably in a society. And I know there's much you'll say about, like, oh, well, the Middle East has all this sectarian violence, but think about, like, how much sectarian violence is produced off, like, hugging a particular sect and enabling it. Like, people always go on about Sunnis and Shias, right? In the context of Sunni and Shia oppression in a place like Bahrain, people are oppressed there as Shias because they're not of the ruling majority. The sectarian issue isn't really that big. They bring over huge amounts of Sunni Muslims to alter the demographics. And I know this may seem to be like gish galloping, maybe, I don't know. But what the point that I'm trying to make is that I would rather sit there and imagine this better Middle East. And I know perhaps that's sitting from a position of an ivory tower, but at the same time, simultaneously, I do think human beings within us exists this capacity to live together, to exist in better societies, you know? And I think that the problem with a two-state, with the whole of the Middle East, is that, actually, with the two-state, we're talking about reimagining the entire Middle East.
Right. Took a few notes there. So first of all, you don't have to believe what Ben Ami or Balin or any of these people say. You can look at the PLO. Most of the PLO I don't think anyone in the PLO disagrees with Olmert's narrative of what happened in 2008. I don't think any in the PLO disagrees that that's what happened, that the gaps were too wide. I don't think anyone in the PLO necessarily disagrees with the ultimate stance from Arafat, which was that they thought the Clinton parameters and Camp David were just unacceptable. They were just too wide to them. When you come to international law, again, international law does not say unilaterally withdraw. We agree with that, right? International law does not say, Israel, you shouldn't be there, get the fuck out. Doesn't matter what Palestinians are doing, just leave. It does not say that. It says mutual recognition, peace, borders, security, all that shit, right? It means that there needs to be some understanding between the two groups. If there's never going to be even a counteroffer, even like we'll accept this, even once, then there's no withdrawal. That's under international law. That's how it goes. Even the new ICJ thing that said that the occupation of the West Bank was illegal. If you look at the people who voted in favor of that resolution, they literally say, yeah, the reason that we affirmed this position is because it doesn't say leave unilaterally, unconditionally, and it doesn't even say leave at every single point of the West Bank at the same time and in the same way. They acknowledge that if there is going to be two states, it has to be agreed by both sides, and one side has never said what that final settlement will look like. And that's an issue. Settlers, yes, there are far too many settlers in the West Bank. There should be zero. 80% of them are still pretty much on the green line. That land can be swapped. It's not impossible to swap land, even with Gaza as well. Those settlers, as far as the ones that remain, the ones who live in places like fucking Yitzhar, like on those stupid hilltops, like again, if there was a Palestinian militant group that was focused on doing like an ANC style operation against those, where they were basically deciding that settlements were going to make a distinction between these guys and Israeli civilians. If you're a settler, especially an outposter, like the worst of them all, then we're basically going to make this system ungovernable or unsustainable. We're going to dismantle infrastructure. We're going to block roads like you guys do to us. We're going to fucking throw rocks at you like you guys do to us. We're going to burn down your fucking agriculture. That would be so much more sympathetic than what happens now. People have sympathized with militant groups in the past, like Western states sympathized with the ANC, right? If they did it like that
after a long time, though.
Yes, and after a lot of strategizing and a lot of mindfulness from the ANC, they were very considerate. I'm just going to, sorry, let's finish one more thing. When you talk about wanting to move to the one-state solution, okay, do we agree that neither group wants this? As far as like equality, one-state solution, neither group wants it.
I'm not so sure I do, because I can't remember the poll you rely on. Can you send it to
It's from PSR. There's one in 2002, one in 2024.
PSR. 2022, do you mean?
One from 22 and one from 24.
Because the thing that I find difficult about this poll, right, is Oh, the thing that I find interesting about this poll is, first of all, very small sample size, okay, but seemingly it's Palestinians in Gaza who are interested in the two-state solution more than.
1,270 is not a small sample size. That's representative.
Is it not? I thought that was a relatively small sample size.
No, sample sizes for polls do not have to be that big.
Okay, cool. Interesting. I'm trying to find the one that you were looking at, because the annoying thing is I looked at it earlier.
I can find the 24 one as well. I believe it's gone down, not surprisingly, in 2024.
The 2025 one. Well, also, by the way, their findings are quite different to Gallup's poll. Gallup finds something very different. I think Gallup find about 22% support the two-state solution.
We're talking about how much support the one-state solution. The one
but,
and you have to delineate between an equal one state and an unequal, because whenever they're given the choice, they'll choose the unequal one over the equal one. Both groups will do that.
But I was also really interested because I think the phrasing, the terminology is limited rights for Jews, right?
There's one with equal rights and one with limited rights for the other side, is what they say.
What do limited rights mean? Because I was really interested. I don't know if you know, but like I don't really know what that means. But I think that what's interesting about picking this poll is that surely if you take the one state together, so you take democratic, which dominates in the case of Palestine by like a tiny amount, like maybe 7-8% or something, I think, in the one you cited, right? It's like 7-8% over the undemocratic version in the case of Palestine, right?
The democratic one is I think for the 2024 one, I thought it was 8%, although
8% over.
As in, there's three options. Like there's two states, then there's one democratic, and then one unequal. The one democratic and equal one is always at the bottom for both groups.
This is really annoying because I had actually found the exact one that you refer to. Now I've forgotten it.
I think I've sent you two links.
Oh, have you?
Yeah,
okay, sorry, I need to just.
2022 one it's between one non-democratic state without equality and one democratic state with equality. And if you look at Palestinians and Israeli Jews, the democratic state with equality is the bottom for both groups from 2020 to 2022.
Which one? Yeah, here you go.
Figure two on the 2022 poll. I'm just looking for the figure on the 24 one.
I thought this was a different.
You'll find higher numbers if you look for one that just says 1 and 2 states. But obviously, it's best to think about what kind of one state they're thinking of, because it's not difficult to get Palestinians to say one state, obviously, but then it's harder to get them to say that they want one where Jews are equal.
Okay, 25% of Palestinians supported a one state. Is that right? And there was an example. I really think that I've seen a better version that you've used before. Not as in like better for the statistics I want, just as in that it shows us bars, which is kind of annoying.
The one with the bars is the 2022 one. I think it's the first link I sent you.
Really?
Yeah, 2022. If you look at figure 2, support for, I can screenshot it and send it to you if that helps.
25%. Okay, so we're talking in July 2024, 25% of Palestinians and 14% of Israeli Jews supported a democratic and equal state.
Mm-hmm.
A non-democratic one in 2022. For fuck's sake, why am I so confused by this? I'm sorry. I really wish I can find this one with the two polls.
You can take your time. It's fine.
Well, it's not the most exciting viewing.
Fuck
in July 2024, 25%.
You need to respect the process.
Yeah, respect the grind. 23. It compared 23% among Israelis and 20%. I thought there was one because I can't see in the unequal. It stood at 30. So in 2022, an unequal state stood at 30%, and that's for Palestinians, right?
No, that's the 30, and then 23 for the democratic. Yeah.
And what's the support for the two state?
33.
So does that not mean that like support for the one state is technically higher? It's just kind of how that one state looks.
Yeah, but I'm guessing we don't want to support a one unequal state or have that.
No. But I think kind of dismissing the concept of a one state solution as not being wanted when even the majority of Israelis over a two state favor an unequal one.
Well,
I think it shows that people just want to live in.
Well, they both want they both like the idea of one state where they're in charge of everything. But that's obviously, I think from the river to the sea, it's about 50-50. So if one group's going to be unequal, like that's just turning a war into a civil war.
No. But what I'm saying is that there's clear support for this kind of thing, a one state. I think it is a good idea, and Palestinians do seemingly show a preference for equal over unequal, which, you know, it may be a
No,
small margin, but it's still.
you
Wait,
said
do
that
they not?
backwards. You said it backwards. They support unequal over equal.
Do they?
The green one. Are you looking at the bars? The green one is equal.
Have you just sent me another? Have you just
No,
sent me
I'll send you the
another?
screenshot from the 2022 one. The green one is equal. The red one is unequal. The red one's bigger than
One
the green
democratic
one
state
for
with
both groups. Yeah.
equality. Okay, sorry. I think I've seen the one that's from whenever it's called. But even then, okay, so fair enough. Like, the number is, I thought it was the inverse. Maybe I looked at a different poll and the 2024 one is different. I don't actually know. Either way, it still shows you that 53% support a one-state solution. And the reason that I think that this is important or worth bringing up and maybe saying, hey, this poll kind of actually shows the failure of the two-state solution is that the two-state solution is the one that's supported by all Western governments. It's the one that's been campaigned for by, you know, it's the one that's campaigned for over and over again by like Western politicians. It's the one that the international community conveys all this legitimacy on, and yet people who live the reality of the two-state solution don't actually think it'll work.
There's not a reality of the two-state solution, though. We have one state and we have one territory that's occupied or blockaded or blown to pieces.
But that's what I mean, though. Oslo is arguably like the closest anything has been to a a two-state solution, right? And it doesn't work. And they see what the international community is simultaneously saying is we need negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis, and then we'll reach this magical two-state. But it is not materializing, and their lives are just getting worse and worse for Palestinians.
We don't know two states doesn't work because there's never been two states. There's been agreement from the Israeli side on a couple of occasions. There's never been a final settlement offered by the Palestinian side. We don't know what they want for two states. We have no idea what their version of two states even is.
The point that I'm making here is, well, I think you can infer that most people would be happy with 67 borders.
Well, 67 borders, yeah, they like, when they say 67 borders, and I think you know this as well, when Hamas says 67 borders, or because they're the most popular ones, when they say 67 borders, they mean just get out and we're not going to change anything. We're not going to recognize you. We're not going to stop fighting you. And also, yeah, if they the version of two states that they seem to say that they won, say with Barghouti, when obviously he changes a lot, but when it came to 2000, it was like, yeah, we'll take two states, but that's full withdrawal from the 67 borders, all of East Jerusalem, and also full right of return. And that's like, well, that's just one state. That's just that's just two Palestinian states that will become one. That's not really a two-state solution.
Also, I think that there's another factor majorly within this, which is I look at Israel and I look at the things that it has done, the destabilization that it has wrought on the region and the destabilization that it coupled with its Western backers have wrought on the region. And I find it hard to see why anyone as a leftist would remain committed to the ideology that there is anything beneficial about continually supporting Israel.
It depends on what part of Israel you're supporting. I think they should. I think they're supporting in the sense that they should be allowed to exist. Yeah, because then the alternative to them existing is worse.
But the prerequisite of Israel existing for the last 70 plus years has been constant warring. And there were people who pointed this out, that this was going to happen in order to maintain a demographic majority of Jewish people. Like you talk it through it here. Everything is an anxiety for Israelis. They're worried that if Palestinians get a two-state, then all of a sudden they're going to attack Israel. They're worried that, you know, Hamas will gain power. But all of these things are anxieties produced by Israel's actions, right? Like, I think that when we look at what Israel is and has done, and we see that as not just like crazy singular state aberration, but rather existing within the context of Western imperialism in the Middle East, that we see, fuck, this is terrible. And that clinging to this ideology that has continually allowed human beings to be subjected to apartheid, occupation, extremist violence, and no offer of any kind of equitable solution. I mean, you point to these things, but they've never materialized. And
they
so
haven't materialized because they've never been accepted.
But also, I'm sorry, I find like the accounts of people like Finkelstein, Seth Anziska, many others who point to the way in the PLO were willing to accept these more convincing than pointing out to specifics that are also denied by Finkelstein. I'll be frank with you.
How? No. How is so Finkelstein saying that they were willing to accept? So where is it? Where is the final settlement? Where's the one final settlement? This is what we want for refugees? Jerusalem, security, borders. Where is it?
Because these have to be negotiated and agreed upon. Like,
so they weren't. So they didn't give a final offer. So they got a final offer. They didn't counter it. Why not?
But in my understanding, Arafat sent a note, right, at the to Taba. Tabba negotiation. Why can't I find this? But it apparently says that in Haaretz, Arafat had accepted Tabba.
He accepted it when?
In 2002.
What happened in 2002?
18 months after.
18 months. So, and you understand that before Sharon gets elected, before Clinton leaves office, you understand that Clinton said, when I leave office, this offer comes with me. It's done. You know you're on a deadline. You know you've got lame ducks in office. You know that the lame duck you're dealing with, Barack, has staked his entire career and his reputation on completing this peace process. If he doesn't complete it, his re-election prospects are fucking dead. They are dead. Of course they were dead, because the second intifada happened when he was trying to negotiate the peace process. Yeah, you can't just say, again, this is a pattern. It's like people will say they'll either refuse to counteroffer or they'll walk away, and then once the deal is dead, they'll say, actually, can we have that now, please? That's a very common trend. Actually, one person in the PLO called that out. It was Nabil Amar called that out when he said, that's exactly what we do. He called, and he even said it about Camp David, let alone Clinton parameters and Taba. He just said, yeah, this is what we do. We accept a deal after it's completely wiped off the table. Like when the time comes to actually either counteroffer, dot the T's, cross the I's, and finish the deal, we don't do it. And they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like when I look at these things, I don't really understand how people can act as if it is like a one moment and that's it. This is talking about like Palestinians' just basic rights to dignity. And the problem is that the international community just being like, right, you get one chance and you have to accept these negotiations. That's not how negotiations should work, right? Like, I'm sorry, Camp David was not a great negotiation. When you're in a situation where the Americans are basically acting in favor of the Israelis, where Israel is refusing to give up control over East Jerusalem, that does not seem to be like a good situation. And beginning with the basis of international law and just saying, right, it is wrong what Palestinians have been subjected to. The Israelis have to make major concessions and offer serious justice to the Palestinian people. I'm sorry, I can't see why like anyone would act as if, yeah, actually the Palestinians are rejectionists. Because as you're saying, Olmert says, seemingly, that Abbas didn't reject because he didn't accept it instantaneously, because Oslo set a precedent that Israel would use negotiations as effectively as a means to, trick the Palestinians and take more land away from them. If there were not very strict red lines about no more settlements, these things that are ongoing are changing the reality of the West Bank.
And you think also, those red lines weren't absent Olmert's plan, though? You've seen Olmert's map, right? You've seen the map that Olmert showed to Abbas. It means it takes Jews out of Hebron. Like, that would have taken like the IDF would have had to. That would have been a pretty violent operation. You've seen settlers in Hebron, right? They're fucking insane. But that would have taken. It would have taken so much settlement out. It would have given land swaps. It would have been, I think, as close to 100% as you can get with land swaps.
But Israel annexes huge areas of the West Bank, right? And these areas would still be protected militarily, correct?
They annex now. Or you're talking about they annex in...
they would have annexed in the peace plan.
They would have annexed in land swapped, meaning Palestine gets to annex parts of Israel as well.
I think that there are also like complex aspects, which I don't really know if you know the answer to this. But where did water factor into a plan like this? Like, because you do know that's kind of like the areas that are being annexed and largely water-rich areas of the West Bank, I believe.
I haven't looked into the full details of water negotiations, but again, I'm yet to see Abbas or Arafat or anyone saying that we couldn't come to an agreement here because of water.
But water's a serious issue, right? Like, it's not something that you can just dismiss. Like, who controls the water? Palestinians had their water taken away by Ariel Sharon in the 1980s. And so, like, I think I look at these plans and I see this as apparently this beautiful Israeli concession. And like, okay, yeah, sure, they take Jewish people out of Hebron. But I think that, like, ultimately, you're still keeping major settlements in the West Bank, which are deemed illegal under international law. Palestinians having a right to spend some time thinking about that, to want concrete definitions of maps, because I really am looking for this Arafat quote. Arafat wanted specifics. He wanted maps and such of actually what was going to be swapped and all of these things, but he didn't get them.
Well, you're talking about Abbas. Abbas was offered to meet with, maybe Arafat says, but as far as I know with maps, because the napkin map, that's like the big fucking press, that's like the big public spectacle, was Abbas holding up the napkin map. The map was because Olmert had offered this solution. He shows them the map. Abbas says, I want my map expert to look at this, Saeed Arakat. So we'll meet the next day. The next day comes, and Abbas realizes that he has a meeting in Amman. So they postpone, and then that's the last you hear from it, because Olmert gets kicked out. and then that's it. But Abbas
And that's
said
it.
a year later the gaps were too wide.
What
Arafat
were the
said
gaps over?
he didn't say. Not that I'm
It's
aware
just,
of. And
it's really
Arafat said
interesting
they
because
keep
I don't
offering us
know.
more. Why rush? So
I don't know what the gaps are, but like I look up things like I don't think it's just as simple as swapping land because there are many other calculations to put in with that. And it's also, by the way, any acceptance of anything like this is the complete abandonment of the Palestinian cause. Like it's the abandonment of saying we should just have a state on the 67 borders. Like the PLO were ready to recognize that in the 70s. It was Israel who was not. And then at Oslo, I'm sorry, when you negotiate in such bad faith, when there's this situation where the Palestinian people see this handshake and they see this moment where ostensibly you are moving towards a peaceful solution. I know it is interim, but serious issues were meant to be discussed later on. And that was the mistake, really. But they see this and their lives don't improve markedly. Selling it to the Palestinian people, you need a good deal and you need major concessions out of Israel. And so expecting Palestinians to accept the Camp David is basically impossible. But also, by the way, it's Arafat's letter on the Clinton parameters where he's like, I need clear answers to many questions relating to calculation of land ratios that will be annexed and swaps and the actual location of those territories, as well as the basis for defining the Western Wall, its borders and extensions, and the effect on of that on the concept of full Palestinian sovereignty over the Al-Haram al-Sharif.
yeah,
We
but
understand the idea of
yeah. I know what you're referring to. You're referring to the letter the letter of acceptance and the caveats. That's fine. That's not the issue. The issue wasn't well, some of the reservations just completely contradicted the parameters. Like they said for refugees, that it had to be. It was a very vague wording of like it has to be that everyone gets the right of return, but we're also willing to be flexible. I don't know how you can reconcile these two positions, but in any case, they said that. And with regards to maps, yeah, they were okay to say that we would like to see maps. The Israelis said the same thing. The maps were discussed at Taba, but when it came to sovereignty over Haram al-Sharif, Arafat was offered sovereignty over the Haram al-Sharif as long as he acknowledges that there is a Jewish temple underneath, and he said no.
Yeah, and again, I think that exists within the context of the tunnel under Al-Aqsa and the kind of inflammation that occurred within the Palestinian population. And I don't think what's going on in Palestine is a result of religion, but you've got to understand that this is like something that matters, like that it's something that matters in the context of Palestine. But I also think that, like, ultimately, my position comes from none of these people who allegedly made these major concessions were willing to just take, did Olmert stop settlement in 2009? Like, just full stop, no more settlements.
I'm not aware of him stopping settlements full stop, but he was.
See, that's the kind of position where it's like that is literally altering the reality on the ground for Palestinians. That is eating up more Palestinian land, and you know what those settlements are like. They steal water from Palestinians. Even the way in which they're made affects the flow of water in the West Bank. These things have just been like, well, the Palestinians didn't give a quick enough response to this kind of thing. I think it's like, if you look at what's actually going on and the fact that Israelis are unwilling to stop the settlements, which I think Reagan and the people around him recognized was the key obstacle to peace. If you're not willing to do that, what are you willing to do?
Well, apart from the fact that their offers would have dismantled settlements and then ensured that they never go there again.
But where was the insurance that they'd never do it again? Because the thing is that this is like a long-term plan. The withdrawals are over a long amount of time. You need it to be quick because you need to ensure that this kind of thing can never happen again, that this kind of extremist ideology, because by the way, unfortunately, I don't think you can expunge this from Zionism, because I think since 67, and even if you look at the Israeli Knesset, a quarter of the Israeli Knesset is currently dominated by ultra-religious far-right parties. A quarter. No, it is very difficult for people to form, a majority without that. Like religious Zionism, Shas, United Torah Judaism, and Otzma Yehudit are all believers in the ideology that Israel should never give up any of the land. It's over a quarter. They contain over 30 seats. I believe there's 120 in the Israeli Knesset. I think it is very hard because Israel for too long has been a country that has continually coddled and protected these religious extremists, that has over and over again afforded them the ability to take more Palestinian land with the direct protection of the Israeli military, directly altering Palestinian existence on life on the ground. And no one in the international community does anything about it. No one in the Israeli government takes actions to directly stop it. It's so bad fucking faith to be in an interim agreement and to write into that more settlements as a left-wing Labour politician in Israel, or growth of settlements. Like, it's so bad faith. And I'm not surprised that Palestinians, when they get these offers that are seemingly coming from America and they're very and they're very much a pro-Israel country, that it's really, really hard to see Palestinians just being willing to accept anything that isn't majorly concrete.
I don't know what's more concrete than a final settlement. The Clinton parameter withdrawal period was the implementation period was 5 years. That's not that long. It's about the same length that the Oslo Accords went on for. As far as Israelis, again, we can talk about first of all, like Haredim and Ben Gvir. Like these are quite different groups, right? The Haredi don't like, they think it's against Jewish law to even go on top of the what do they call it, the Harabai, like the Al-Aqsa compound. Jews aren't even supposed to stand there, let alone riot there. So yeah, there's a different in any way. It has to come down to, again, this only matters, I guess, if you care about what Israelis think. But we know that Netanyahu, he got in power in the 90s. He sabotaged the Y River Agreement. And then when Barak ran on that re-election to finish the peace process and to actually do it and implement it, Netanyahu was booted out because it seemed that when Israelis believed that there was actually an offer on the table and they were talking about all these things that you mentioned, Netanyahu's big talking point was they're going to divide Jerusalem. We can never let them divide Jerusalem. They're going to negotiate with a terrorist like Arafat. Barak got elected anyway. And if you want to talk about bad faith parts of the negotiation, I agree that Barak went further than Yitzhak Rabin, right? Rabin even said that it's not even going to be a sovereign state. And obviously it went further than that because the Clinton parameters was offering a sovereign state. So there were differences there. And Netanyahu was kicked out by the left-wing leader who was saying that we're going to get these settlers booted the fuck out from anywhere that's too close to the Green Line. We're going to land swap. We're going to divide Jerusalem. And he still won over Netanyahu. But then obviously when it came to the crunch and Arafat did not counteroffer, he spent most of his time going around the world and just meeting with kings who were trying to pressure him to change his mind and to offer something, but he just didn't do it. You get to a point where and obviously he's not doing anything to stop the Second Intifada. If we can go back and forth all day about sides negotiating in bad faith. If I talk to Israelis, they'll complain all the time about how Arafat said that he would clamp down on extremism, and then it turns out quite a lot of these people who were involved in the Second Intifada were also trained by security, or people would go into jail for a few months and they'd come back out again, like a revolving door system. Obviously, he didn't do anything to stop the Intifada when it happened. So, but I would never let that imperfection be the enemy of the good. And Israelis fail at that as well. They fail at having all of these expectations that they make of the Palestinian Authority that are just beyond what you need for peace. You don't need these groups to be perfect. You need them to accept a final settlement. Final settlements were offered from the Israelis. They were not only walked away from, they were not counter-offered. And this is the one thing we're never getting around. You think that they were justified in binning it because you want one state, but I'm just saying the offers were there and they were not counter-offered. And I think looking for reasons about water or any of the other things that they didn't call main reasons, the real reason is quite obvious, and they'll say this more openly than they spoke about water. Neither of these Palestinian leaders were prepared to abandon the prospect of river to the sea. That's it. Like because they recognize the right of return does mean that eventually you're going to have a full Palestinian state from the river to the sea. Abbas didn't want to give that up. Arafat literally said, well, if I agree to this, I'll get shot. And it's like, okay, you were willing to be a general and to fight for war, so why not fight for peace? But anyway, that's the reason that they haven't been willing to concede to these. It's because they want the river to the sea. That seems to be the consensus.
I'm really sorry. Do you want to keep going? I just really have to go for a piss.
Okay. No, you can go. That's fine.
If you want to keep going, but that's up to you.
No, you can go for your. Oh wait, you wouldn't mean like end the call or just break?
No. I'll just be gone for like a minute or two.
Yeah, just go. I'll entertain your
cool,
guys,
cool.
I suppose.
I'll probably mute it for now.
Sure, fine.
Okay.
I thought he was already taking the piss. Whoa, good one. Sick. I'm trying to think. There were a few things I wanted to ask that I need to settle on. I'm trying to think, like, having these two-state disagreements are kind of an issue because you're talking to someone who thinks that Israel shouldn't be there at all. It should just be gone. So I think maybe that means there should be more of a question about like, why are they even there? Or like, why does it not make sense to try and destroy the country? Or destabilization is maybe a good point. Like trying to destroy Israel is destabilizing. Like the Axis are not a very stabilizing force in the Middle East. They kind of cause problems everywhere they go. Maybe that. Who knows? Fuck knows, man. Ooh, you won't get him to change his... That's not the point. The point, like, debating to change someone, like, you guys who can kind of like that shouldn't be the only thing you think about, because obviously creators are like, even if people change their minds, they're not going to do it in an instant. Like it's people are not like that. So it's more just communicating the points, the memes. Is the final settlement when the settlers turn their small settlements into a big settlement base? What? You guys are weird. Talk about how Israel invented cherry tomatoes. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry about that.
That's fine.
Yeah, so that's why I was taking notes as you were talking, just to try and remember where we were talking about.
Yeah.
But I think that, like, ultimately for me, I just don't really understand why Palestinians should be forced to give up the right of return, right? I'm not really a big believer in the concept of nation states, in the sense of, I don't think states, the political entity, should serve specific nations, as in like a specific nation of one people. I think that they should be states of all their people, not just, a national majority. I think that there are many states that have national minorities now, and I think you balk too at the idea of like governments coming into power that are specifically saying we are going to serve what we define as the nation. And I think that what I hope for in this world is a major change in which states are based around the idea of serving a national majority, and that in the context of somewhere like Palestine, if it were to end up being a one-state solution, that it is a situation in which Palestinian people and Israelis are able to live as equals, that there is justice, that people are held to account for the crimes that they are committed, and that it stands as a beacon for the change that can be possible in the Middle East. Because I don't think that change is as unimaginable as people think.
You know what? I'd love to think that. The problem is that it's easy to say that you don't really care for nation states when you have one, when you've never had to worry about one. Obviously, modern nationalism was all about people disconnecting from empires and saying that, like, we don't want to be part of like Austro-Hungary or whatever. We just want to be Hungary, or like Serbs don't want to be part of the Ottoman Empire. They just want to be Serbs. Like, it's easy to say when you don't have one, and it's also easy to say when you are not the one group that has been fucked harder by not having a nation than the Jews have. Like, ever since the French Revolution, right? Like, it was the whole argument that, yep, they're going to exist here as citizens. They're not a nation. Fuck them. Like, and then giving them equality and emancipation didn't seem to work. We know that formal equality with the Tanzimat reforms, I believe they're called, in the Ottoman Empire, that obviously didn't translate to meaningful equality for Jews. Obviously, in Europe, it didn't mean it. And with Arab nationalism, there was no indication that it was going to be any different, unfortunately, as far as achieving equality. So, yeah, you can say to Israel, like, yeah, this should be a multicultural, equal nation, but then I can't expect Israel to do that unilaterally while the Palestinian side is still preferring an unequal state over an equal one. The problem it's effectively like unilateral disarmament. I don't know why anyone would expect that to work. And frankly, speaking about wanting the impossible, the only way you're going to get Israel to concede to that is if you invade them.
Yeah, what do you mean by like an international community? I also believe that you can get Israel to do it by cutting off their supplies.
No.
Like, sanctions don't work against a country like Russia, but what would Israel do with a major sanction regime? Like, what would it actually do?
As long as groups like Hamas remain the most popular group in Palestine, and as long as you've got Hezbollah, and as long as you've got militant groups even in Syria, and as long as you've got the attitudes of the majority of even fucking Egypt, right? Egypt is one coup away from binning the Abraham Accords and fighting with Israel as well, right? We know
that's a good thing though. Egypt are a horrendous dictatorship.
Oh, okay. I thought you said it was a good point. I'm an idiot. Okay.
No. Egypt are a fucking horrendous dictatorship. They should bin Camp David.
Okay, yeah, you're just making my point,
to have a relationship with an apartheid state. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Okay. The fact is that, first of all, I don't think anyone who overthrows the Egyptian regime is not going to be one that cares all that much about apartheid, like equal rights. But in any case, the fact is that you can have all the international pressure in the world. You're not going to stop Israel from thinking that as soon as they let their guard down, then they're just going to get completely overwhelmed and a whole bunch of them are going to die. They're going to fight. That's it.
The way in which look, I don't want to see a huge massacre of Jewish people, but frankly, it's not what I want to see. But I genuinely believe that the vast majority of animosity in the Middle East towards the state of Israel is a direct product of what Israel is and does. That Israel's actions against the Palestinian people are the major problem. That, Israel, because of the fact that it consistently takes land off Palestinians, because of the fact that it cannot have anything on its borders that is ostensibly a threat to the way in which it acts, I think that, you cannot allow this thing to keep on existing in the way that it is. I think it is a major problem for the rest of the region, and that it basically ends up in a situation where the West never wants change in the region, that we want to maintain our geopolitical geostrategic interests in the Middle East, which are basically maintaining Israel and ensuring that it's protected by a load of dictatorial regimes. When a democracy did rise up in Egypt, we did not give a solitary fuck that it was overthrown by a violent dictatorship. In fact, John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, praised Sisi for restoring democracy 2 weeks before he would commit a huge massacre of people living within Egypt. And so I think that like this whole thing of just being like, well, the status quo should remain the same because Israel is under threat, to me is just farcical, because it needs to change massively. It has to. And the thing is that if you look at opinions of people who live in the Middle East, they don't want to be ruled by dictatorships that normalize with Israel.
I don't think that's necessarily addressing the point. Sanctions and isolation are not going to stop the Israelis from fighting, because they know that if their state and their defense mechanisms are gone, they're going to get overwhelmed and a bunch of them are going to die. Like, again, it doesn't even need Hamas to be a majority for that to be the case, right? Like, a militant group doesn't need to be that big to just go in and have a free reign. Like, you know this. Let me ask you. Let's say the IDF just lowered their weapons and just said, fuck this, on October 7th. What would have happened? When would Hamas have stopped? Let's say the IDF just didn't turn up October 7th. The IDF just doesn't turn up. Well, let's say they don't, because obviously you want them to be like isolated to the point that they can't continue. That means also the IDF is going to be less armed or less capable, or.
So I don't necessarily. I've told you I don't want like a humongous massacre of Jewish people. I mean, targeting Israeli soldiers, if they're currently fighting, I have categorically no problem with. Targeting settlers who exist within Palestinian land in the context of dispossessing people, but just average citizens existing and living their lives, you know. As much as I dislike them and disdain the state of Israel, I don't think that they should all be massacred. But I feel like this counterfactual is quite interesting in the sense of like, what happens in Palestine when there's no one with weapons?
Well, Ramallah is safer than Gaza. Gaza has more weapons than anywhere in the West Bank. It's less safe.
On the one hand, you want me to deal in a counterfactual of like what will happen to the poor Israeli Jewish people when the Palestinians get their hands on them, when I've just watched 70,000 plus people be slaughtered in Gaza.
Well, who's more armed? Who's more
women
armed?
And children.
Gaza. Who's more armed, Gaza or any city in the West Bank?
But the whole problem is that if you live in the West Bank, you're still being dispossessed.
So the point is the arms are not defensive. The arms don't have a defensive quality.
Pardon?
But the point is that the arms don't help you. They don't save you. It's worse in Gaza than it is in Ramallah.
Nothing saves you. Nothing saves you from Israel. Like you know this. Israel is colonizing the West Bank. It was before October the 7th. Since its inception, it has been taking away the land of Palestinian people and dispossessing them and destroying their hopes for a state. Like, this whole argument of dealing in a counterfactual where all the poor Israelis get killed is really odd to me when I am watching mass slaughter of Palestinians coupled with a huge regime of dispossession and violence being carried out by said state. Like, why would I deal in this counterfactual?
Well, it's because you know what would happen if the outcome of what you're asking for was fulfilled. If Israel was isolated and if they didn't have any military, if they didn't. Yeah, but would you rather live in Ramallah or Gaza City?
It depends if I'm rich.
Really? You'd rather be a slightly like a middle upper class person in Gaza City than a working class person in Ramallah?
Existing in where? What, like existing in Ramallah and just experiencing dispossession? Sure, I'm shielded from it probably because I'm well off, but I still know that, in the vicinity of where I am, my brothers, my sisters, my family, my people are still being dispossessed by an incredibly violent military that is continually targeting Palestinian people. Like, this counterfactual to me is crazy because, like, what are we seeing in the West Bank right now? What are we seeing in Gaza? Sure, the extremity of the settler colonial project in Gaza may be stronger, but that is largely a product of removing all the Jewish people from there. In the West Bank, life is not good, and that is not a meaningful existence for any human being.
I just wasn't aware that acknowledging that there is a marked difference between being Gaza, where 70,000 people minimum, let's be frank, have died, and 90% of the buildings destroyed, versus living in Ramallah. These are massively different forms of existence. These are massively different levels of suffering. These are massively different levels of prospects for the future. And the whole reason I mention it is not to say that life in the West Bank is good. It's not. There's still an occupation. The point is to say that having Hamas's approach made things worse. Hamas's approach and Hamas having power made things worse. Hamas being in the position that they have, being well more armed than anyone in the West Bank, did not help them. It did not save them. That wasn't the point. The point wasn't to save them.
Israel existing for Jewish people in its very logic of providing security for the Jewish people has not done that. Israel, since October the 7th, and its behavior has facilitated the rise of Nick Fuentes. Like, objectively, it has. You know, prior to October the 7th, Nick Fuentes said on the Just Pearly Things podcast of Palestine and Israel, I don't have a dog in that fight. He did not care because he despised the Palestinians. What he realized was that there was growing ire amongst right-wing Republicans who saw a situation where both political parties in the US are completely benevolent to the state of Israel. That this is a state that is just able to do whatever it wants, that Biden may draw some red lines, Israel will violate them anyway. And then this situation with simple explanations of, well, the Jewish people are controlling the world. It has facilitated hatred, anti-Semitism to rise against the Jewish people, and also the farcical nature in which Israel uses anti-Semitism, where they can welcome someone like Tommy Robinson as apparently a great advocate against anti-Semitism and actually facilitate the rise of the European far right. Israel is endangering so many human beings by virtue of its existence. It endangers Jewish people. There is a reason that October the 7th didn't happen in New York. There is a reason that it didn't happen anywhere else. It has failed in its very objective of protecting the Jewish people. If Palestinians having weapons and engaging in resistance against Israel hasn't helped them, then as a global group of people, because not all Jews live in Israel, Israel has totally failed in its aim of protecting the Jewish people.
Okay, not all Jews live in Israel, you're right. Most of them do, though. How well off were Jews before Israel? How well off do you think Jews would have been had Israel not ever been formed as a state? Like, how well off were Jews when... I don't get that. Like, how well off were Jews before Israel?
The Holocaust ended before Israel.
Okay, what was happening? What was the situation Jews were in just after the Holocaust? Getting kicked around.
What do you mean, living in displacement camps?
Getting booted around displacement camps. Some of them getting sent to Seychelles or Mauritius or to it was Mauritius and Cyprus. Some of their boats being turned back away from Mandate Palestine and sent back to Bergen-Belsen that was repurposed as a DP camp, being in the Arab countries where even before the 48 war in Iraq, they were already, you already had the Farhud, you already had anti-Semitic riots in Libya, you had anti-Semitic riots going on in Syria as well, or Egypt. This was all before the 48 war as well.
And I think that that's a really interesting point to disconnect, because what might have building a state where the British, who had fucked over many of these countries, along with the French, who had fucked over the rest, what might it have done to people when they began to associate Jews with Western imperialism? Why might that have affected
why
the position of
Why
Jewish
would you
people?
associate Iraqi Jews with Western imperialism, if not for anti-Semitism?
Because wait. I'm not here to make excuses for apocalyptic nationalism, but do you not see that there's a commonality there? That in the sense of like, hey, there's kind of this thing going on where the British have brought in a huge amount of Jewish people to Palestine, and it's resulting in the dispossession and marginalization of the people who live there. You know this, of course. There were plenty of people who traveled from countries in the region to go and fight against even pre-state Israel. There were people from Syria, people from all over who went and fought against it. Actually, the British more in the context of the Great Revolt. You must surely realize that like people bring back and they're like, look what these damn Jewish people are doing in Palestine. Look what these damn Jewish people are doing. And that will sell. And that is a bad thing. But that, again, we can trace back to the problem of the Zionist project.
It sounds like you're doing, to assume like the good faith side, it sounds like you're doing an excuse, like explaining is not condoning. So it's obviously not condoning Iraqi Arab nationalist leaders for blaming their own Jewish population that's lived there for 2,000 years on, but they did anyway. Okay. Well, what is explaining about and not condoning when it comes to the Jewish population? What else were Jews supposed to do in the 20th century to feel safe if no modern nationalism is ever giving them any reason to believe that they'll be safe? Where were they supposed to go? What were they supposed to do?
In my understanding, in a recent article by Tom Segev, he mentioned how the majority of Holocaust survivors did not go to Israel.
Survivors at what point? They went scattered to different countries, but you understand that assuming that's true, I'm not sure that's true about the DP camps after the war.
He's the only person that I've heard say that.
Okay. In any case, let's assume it's true. Yes, you also acknowledge that Jews fleeing the Holocaust went to countries that all had quotas on them, and that in the Evian conference, all these countries said, let's basically take in none, or we'll expand a quota a little bit. Yeah,
100%. And I think that it was the duty of Europeans to re-examine their own position, because I'm going to be frank with you, I do not view the Holocaust as like this aberration. I think it is a product directly of the behavior of European countries for a very long time, and the denigration of human beings and designating certain human beings as others who are responsible for societal degradation. Like, you know, the Kaisers doing it during the First World War, and many people who saw Israel as a way to get rid of Jewish people. I don't think we can ignore that fact that many people like Winston Churchill thought it was a good idea because he was worried that Jews would become Bolsheviks.
Yeah, Churchill
and
had
so,
a few flip-flops in the period, but yeah, he
and
was a
so
bit odd.
when I sit here and I look at this as like a situation of, well, where else were they supposed to go? America had the capacity to absorb huge amounts of people. It did categorically. They chose not to, and they chose to fob the problem off on Palestine, which is not acceptable, which is not justified, which is immoral. And by the way, we can always talk about things without justifying them and explaining the context. Like, you know, for example, people made the claim that like Jewish people didn't integrate into society. But for example, in my understanding, in the Russian Empire, they were literally banned from going to Russian schools, right? But explaining that does not mean that I'm sitting here and justifying what the Russians did by saying, well, actually, yeah, they did lead parallel lives because of what the Russians did to them. That doesn't mean I'm justifying it. I'm explaining and saying, hey, this is where this idea comes from. It doesn't make it true. In the same way that, like, I don't know, I guess, no, actually, I won't mention that, the Versailles Conference, but obviously there's no truth to that.
Yeah, so we're just going back to the fact that shifting the blame like correctly is not getting to the actual problem of what should Jews have done. Because if Jews can't go to America because of the Johnson Reed Act and quotas, or also you need more money to go to America, the rest of Europe is clearly not safe for them. The rest of the Arab countries are starting to warm up to European anti-Semitism, and also they're starting to flirt with their own nationalist ideas, and nationalism so far doesn't have a good track record when it comes to Jewish people. What were they supposed to do? The ones who ended up in Israel, the ones who went to land that had been purchased or had involved in quite a few cases, land evictions. What were they supposed to do?
Yeah, like I wouldn't have begrudged, like Walter Benjamin made the choice not to go. Do you know Walter Benjamin?
Marxist.
Yeah,
Frankfurt,
Benjamin made the choice not to go to Palestine, and he died because of it. Well, he died because of like a kind of mistake, but as in he took pills and he didn't have to because he wasn't actually going to be caught, but he was convinced he was. Anyway, I would never have begrudged him for going to Palestine. I'd never begrudge anyone for going and seeking safety. What I begrudge, and the problem that I have, is that I see Zionism as a structure, and a structure which takes aim at destroying Palestinian society. There are multiple examples of Ben Gurion going round displacement camps and people being offended at his behavior. There are multiple examples of the way in which the Zionist project treated Holocaust survivors and basically viewed them as people who were sheep or lambs to the slaughter, is kind of the way in which it's phrased sometimes. And I think that ultimately, in this context, it was the job of Europe to make sure that this kind of thing never happened again, that this was a shameful outburst. However, this outburst had actually happened over and over again in our colonies, that over and over again we had mass killed huge amount of human beings, and that what we should have taken is a massive, massive re-examination of our societies, and we should have welcomed the Jewish people and emancipated them into our society. So I think that like this whole thing of like, you know, being like, well, what did you expect them to do, to form a not form a settler colony there? I think that, no, I don't respect the idea that a settler colony had to exist in Palestine.
Okay. That's the question I'm trying to get to, though. So obviously we can, if I can meet you halfway, I suppose, and say that if anti-Semitism hadn't existed, of course, you're saying if they'd actually respected and emancipated all Jews, Zionism would have been a pointless idea. That's why, even in the very beginning, most Jews didn't care for it. They thought it was a silly idea. They thought it was extreme. But then, obviously, you get to third, fourth, fifth Aliyah. A lot of these people who are moving to Palestine aren't even dyed-in-the-wool Zionist ideologues. They're refugees. They need somewhere to go, and that's the one place that seems to be saying, well, we're concentrating enough Jews in one place. We've got our little fucking defense forces and shit. So maybe this place, and then obviously, once they get there, they're like, well, this is kind of like the end of the road. We're not moving from here. Fuck that. No more Russian pogroms or no more anything else. And then when they're there, okay, you think they shouldn't have pursued statehood. I'm guessing you don't agree with the whole trope that they were welcomed in with open arms in Palestine. No?
I think like that ultimately intentionality doesn't matter. I think that they're still colonizers who went to another people's land and colonized and took it away from the indigenous people. And I look at and I'd rather look at this from the standpoint of the victims. Of course, it is wrong what Europeans did, but it was also wrong what Europeans did in Palestine. It was wrong what they've done across the entire Middle East. And so, yes, you're right. They went as Holocaust survivors, but I think that Western society were the ones who'd created this problem, and that they should have prevented and worked to ensure that there wasn't actually this problem of establishing a Jewish supremacist state in Palestine, the prerequisite of which was always going to be mass ethnic cleansing the second that they got the ability to do it. Because obviously they purchased land at first, but even then, that was hampered by Palestinian resistance. It was only once in 1948 they reached a point with no more British to tell them to stop it when the Palestinians responded. And also a point when the Palestinian people had been destroyed by the Great Revolt, where the British spent huge swathes of money on ensuring that Palestinians wouldn't be able to rise up and kick out the population that they didn't want there. I don't want to see Jewish people being sent to the slaughter, but equally, I don't want to see a Jewish supremacist state being built in Palestine. And I think that that's where you and I differ, that the intentionality, like, I don't blame people for fleeing the Holocaust. Who fucking would? No one deserves to die. But I do blame the Zionist project for then using them as a means to ethnically cleanse huge amounts of Palestinians.
Again, we're getting to the issue of, I think the question I asked was, do you agree or not with this trope that they were welcomed with open arms when they got to Palestine? That's the next stage. I'm trying to build up
specifically survivors.
Anyone, people who were Jews who went to Israel, whether or not they were there for ideological reasons. Even in the 20s and 30s, they were there for, a lot of them were there just as refuge, right? And they became ideologues when they were there. I'm asking you, do you believe that they were welcomed with open arms to Palestine?
No, but I do think that there are examples of them exploiting Arab hospitality as basically a means to expel people. Like, I think that that's something that Pape talks about, how basically like the village files were created from basically just going and exploiting Arab hospitality, so they knew what like the structure of a village looked like. So I think that there are examples like that, but then equally there are examples of Palestinians being opposed to being dispossessed and the establishment of a state that was not, the establishment of a state that had no place for them, which was made clear by the British, designating 90, however much percentage of the population it was, as, non-Jewish inhabitants was insanely fucking racist. And the problem lies with the fact that the British were like, okay, yeah, let's establish a settler colony here.
Okay. I'm going to take it back again. When we talk about when the Zionists arrived, I'm talking about like the early period. I'm talking about before even the 30s, or even necessarily before Balfour. On the whole, they were not welcomed with open arms. I think barely 1,000 by the locals, by either Arab leaders or by the Ottomans, or by varying levels of opposition or approval from village Mukhtars. But we know that overall, the Arab nationalist movement, whether it was in the press or within religious leaders or writers and or like local, whatever you call them, like the clan elites, like the Husseinis or the Khalidis or everyone else, they said, "Do not come here." I think ever since the first ever Arab leader protest against Zionism was in 1891. It wasn't, and this was not when prospects of a Jewish state were coming. This was stop Jewish immigration to Palestine and when? Stop them from buying land. 1891.
In what? 1891.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the Ottoman Empire did that. They stopped them buying land, and there was also, I believe,
that's why I'm saying broadly.
Doesn't David Ben Gurion get kicked out in 1911 for basically an attempt to found a state within a state? I think they find him with like banknotes or something, or like an attempt to create some kind of internal state. But like, I think that this is the interesting thing, when the early Zionists arrive, there are kind of different methods of colonization that are applied. Like Baron de Rothschild basically funds an attempt to create like a plantation economy there, but then pulls out because it's not worth his time or money and he'd rather focus on another colony. I think it's an imitation of Algeria. But then as the Zionist project crystallizes, they move more towards the expulsion and displacement of the Palestinian people from, if you look at like, I think 1903, the Histadrut, or is 1903 the Jewish National Fund, which the very premise of which is that they're going to buy land to develop that never will again be leased to Palestinians.
So, I can't remember what question I was asking now. I was asking you, when they arrive at this land, and Rothschild, I think when he funded the initial settlements, he obviously was quite different from a lot of the other Zionists in the sense that he always encouraged, trying to encourage coexistence. Like I think he made he wanted that every settlement that he was funding to have like Arabic basic lessons for people to speak to the locals. But going back to why they were there, and why they were not welcome with open arms, even when most of the land they were buying was not inhabited, right? Even when before the 20s, before the Sursok purchases or the big bulk of them, before they were doing the, like, you buy land and then you evict the tenant farmers, even before that was widespread, these leaders and the journalists or the Arab press and the Arab clan leaders, they were saying it wasn't just no Jewish state, because before the Balfour Declaration, they were saying stop their immigration and stop them from buying up land. They were always threatened by this group. They always thought that this group was felt that they were unwelcome for one reason or the other. And it wasn't just because they were afraid of dispossession. Like, dispossession came a little bit after the late 1800s as a meaningful threat, because landlords buying land in the 1905 and then evicting tenant farmers to put their own people in there, that was actually not that uncommon. The Sursok land was inhabited by Arab tenant farmers because previously those Beirut landowners, the Sursok family, had evicted Bedouins from there, right? So that's not why we have a conflict, okay? We don't have a conflict because of people buying land and evicting tenants. We have a conflict because there was this group that was unwelcomed by the locals. And then from the Zionist or the Jewish perspective, they thought that existing as a minority at the mercy of whatever national group emerges from this region will not be safe for us. And this is the thing I don't think you're quite acknowledging. Do you think they were right to believe that or not? That going there, that when the Jews who arrived in Palestine, were they right to believe that existing as a minority in that nation would have been unsafe for them?
Were they right to think that existing as a minority was unsafe for them?
Yes.
I mean, like, one of the interesting things about what you're saying is when Rosh Pinah was founded by Yitzhak Epstein, that's one of the first settlements. Yitzhak Epstein talks about how they were expelling, that Palestinian families were expelled and that they were just basically sent into the Hauran, which I think is the desert. And they basically just sent them out and the people were wailing as they went. And it was like a situation where you saw people being displaced. And sure, maybe that didn't happen instantaneously to everyone. But first of all, what nationalist press are you talking about that was like hugely against the idea of the establishment of Jewish state? At what point does that really emerge? Where they're against like huge amounts of Jewish immigration? Where does it emerge?
It emerges, like 1905,
yeah, which papers
1910?
Are talking about it?
Whether it was,
yeah, okay, so already you've got the Jewish National Fund with like the goal of, okay, we're going to buy land and we're not going to let Palestinians live on that. We're going to develop it only for Jewish people. Already you are starting to see some crystallization of this idea. And I don't know when David Ben-Gurion tries to go to the Ottoman Sultan. Like Herzl, I think, organizes a meeting between the Kaiser and the Sultan, like himself. So like this idea that they weren't looking at building a state early on, I've seen some people make this argument, like Daniel Boyarin, that Herzl's conception was not quite as a nation state we would have imagined it now. But it seems to me that there was like this attempt to like basically do colonization there. Like that's what they wanted to do, and that's what's always going to provoke the native. That's kind of the innovation of Jabotinsky. Like I know you might be willing to say, well, no, it was different from, and they didn't mean the same thing by colonialism at that time. But Herzl says it's something colonial. Herzl also is inspired by the scramble for Africa. Like that's another thing that's happening at that time, and that is very clear colonization of other people's land and taking it away from them. And so I think in the context of Palestine, like just taking away the settler colonial dynamic, the fact that Palestinians were displaced, that they lost their land, that people did not come as immigrants, they came as settlers with the goal of building a state there, or they became part of that, building a state that had nothing to do with the Palestinians, made clear by the Jewish National Fund, and the fact that they planned to purchase land and not allow Palestinians to work on it. You see the problem emerging.
Again, the opposition came even when Arabs were working and living on Jewish purchased land. Herzl, again, we can distill someone down to like a half of a sentence. It is something colonial. Yeah, you're right in saying that they didn't mean the same thing by colonial that we understand it in common parlance now. Because like I'm guessing you maybe also know, or maybe just aren't mentioning, when Herzl had the question of the Sursok purchases and whether they should evict tenant farmers, Herzl opposed it because colonialism meant something different to them than it means now. The Jewish Colonization Association, when they were first formed, their first couple of decades they were not even Zionist, let alone colonial in a modern understanding. They mostly focused on buying agricultural land in like Argentina. I think they were focusing on Iraq even before they started to focus on Palestine. So and you can say that this was an issue because for locals, even if they weren't like the majority of them, they were still evicting people like Rosh Pinah or Surzuk or like in the Jezreel. But on the whole, most of what they were doing was at this point, before the 20s, purchasing empty land. Even before the Balfour Declaration, when they were doing this, they were seen as a threat. And you can say it's a rifle threat, even like from the nationalist perspective of the Palestinians, because again, this is kind of why I say that both sides have a just cause, even from the beginning. But the just cause that I think you're missing from the Jewish side is that they had every reason to believe that if a nation state developed out of this place or just living as a minority in the Ottoman Empire would not have been beneficial for them. Like it would have been very, very threatening to them. And that's why they wanted to stay close together in clusters. That's why they started to mistrust the Arab population. It wasn't just because they were racist, like they were, but they also actually had like factual reasons for mistrusting because like of things like theft or raids and things like that would happen as well. And often these were over very, very petty disagreements, even if it was down to because they viewed property in different ways. The Ottoman reforms
That's
meant
not a petty disagreement.
Well, what do you think I'm referring to? This petty
Viewing property in different ways. The idea that you have a communal right to graze your animals on land. I'm sorry. That's like I think Foucault talks about this. That it's like a key thing, like a revelation within France that produces violence and criminality. The way in which they start to view communal lands and property. Like I think that kind of distilling it down to that, but also what I would look at much more is the structure. I would look at the outcome for Palestinians. I would look at the things that come out of the Jewish National Fund saying, okay, we're purchasing land only for Palestinians. I would look at the Histadrut saying that, no, we need to boycott all Palestinian goods and the outcomes that come out of that. And I would look at the outcomes of what Herzl did and the people who were around him. In fact, I think there's even a quote from Nordau where he says, we will lie about our aims when we need to, effectively. But the thing that I think is more important is taking Zionism from the standpoint of its victims rather than taking this view of like, oh, it was all like, just happened by chance that they came over and then eventually it moved towards this point of like badness and incorrectness. I think that there's a structure that exists from the early Zionists that come over that develop in relation to the land, and the colonialism crystallizes in a form that the realization that you will only be able to establish a Jewish state via a Jewish majority that requires expulsion and ensuring that Palestinians will not be able to work and live on that land.
Okay, so first of all, I don't think Herzl was necessarily lying when he opposed the evictions because that was internal discussion. I don't know why he would lie about that to his own people or to his own allies. But in any case, the difference is you don't need to convince me that Palestinians saw the Jewish national movement or like the Jewish state as a threat. Of course they did, and they were right to. Like even Jabotinsky said this. Like you acknowledged that in the Iron Wall, he's basically saying that what we're doing is going to anger them. It doesn't matter if we do it on empty land in Hadera. It doesn't matter if we evict people in the Jezreel. They're going to be angry either way because they think it's their country. Like because that's where it's been our majority country for hundreds and hundreds of years. So you don't need to convince me of that. The thing I'm again trying to get here is, maybe I'll phrase the question a different way. Say between 1881 and 48, what outcome should the Jews living in Palestine have pursued?
They shouldn't have built a settler colonial state there.
Can we be a bit more specific? Like, okay, so
they shouldn't have built a state premised on the elimination of the Palestinians.
Yeah, so pre-Balfour, they're there and they're purchasing land. And
pre-Balfour, it's hard to do, and there are consistent like ebbs and flows of people who go and come back, and the conditions are very hard to work there. But once they get the backing of an imperial power, what happens? All of a sudden, it becomes a lot easier, especially once you get Herbert Samuel in power, who even Ronald Storrs, who was the military governor of Jerusalem, was like, this is a crazy decision. The guy is an avowed Zionist. He enacts multiple changes in the law to establish a Jewish state there. I think that like trying to disconnect and say like, look at this specific period from the rest. Like, sure, maybe there's like this slight break where we see like other attempts at colonization at first, but I think that ultimately the goal of building a Jewish state in Palestine, the prerequisite of it is the elimination of the indigenous people who actually live there, because as Jabotinsky puts it, they will always stand up and fight back. And that is a reasonable position. Like, it just fundamentally is. I'm sorry. In no other context would you be like, yeah, you know what? I think that, like, settlers have a right to go over and dispossess whoever lived there just because, I don't know, they have this supreme right to the land. It's wrong, it's immoral, and it's unjust. The British should have acted better then. But now when we look at the state today, we see its problems and we see its actions, and we see that it is a total failure in protecting Jewish people, that it has increased the situation and animosity towards Jewish people worldwide.
We actually do that with quite a few countries. Like, no one's trying to destroy America, or anyone who is a LARPer who's probably not going to take it seriously.
But there's a fundamental difference between America, right? Which is that America managed to eliminate the vast majority of its indigenous population and the alternative society that it posed. The different context with Israel is that it still has an open frontier engaged in direct settlement of Palestinian land that can be stopped. The entire state can be reimagined as a state in which all human beings have on the basis of just a right to exist and a right to dignity can exist there. That's the fundamental difference with America. The natives are not gone. They're not fully dead, but largely their position is cemented, and there are just not enough of them because they genocided enough of them.
That's why I'm trying. That's why I'm trying to. I mean, you can say the same with Turkey or Australia. Like, that's why I'm trying to get an answer from you, not a negative. I'm trying to get a positive answer. Before Balfour, let's say all these Jewish people who are living in Palestine, all the like Ashkenazi, like Zionists, whatever. Let's say they've been Zionism. We're not going for a Jewish state anymore. What should they be pursuing that would also guarantee their safety?
Existence in a society, existence in Palestinian society,
existence as a minority,
getting the protection of the. Well, I mean, okay, you're talking about pre-Balfour, but so the question that you're asking is what should they have done between 1882 and 1970?
What settlement should they have pursued rather than a Jewish state? Yes,
they shouldn't have settled in Palestine.
Okay, some of them were in Palestine because there was literally no other option.
They shouldn't have sought to build a Jewish state in another people's land.
Well, you understand that.
Shouldn't.
Well, okay, let's say they bin the intent. They just say, okay, we're just gonna be here as migrants. We are just here as refugees because Johnson Reed is keeping us out of America. We really don't trust European nationalism. There are at least some Jews kicking around Jerusalem, and there's already people buying land here, so we're just gonna go there. That seems to be the hot spot. Let's just immigrate there, and then when they're there, they bin Zionism and nationalism. They should just accept being a minority under like the rule of whichever Palestinian leader comes in, right?
Participate in a society.
Yeah, participate in a society, which is where the leaders are warming up to European anti-Semitism. Yeah, where the leaders are warming up to...
When's the major warm-up to European anti-Semitism?
It happens across the entire Arab world in the early 1900s.
When at what point do we see like the first expression in Palestine?
Probably... I don't know. I think the first ever writer was that Lebanese guy who wrote his treatise in French.
But like, when was the first expression of mass Palestinian outrage against the Zionist project?
I mean, probably not long after they first arrived. There was... I can find the first article if you want, like the first ever press article or reader statement. The first protest was 1891, wasn't it? That was when they sent that telegram to the Ottomans. Yeah, that was when the Arab leaders sent to and that's where the two demands were: stop immigration to this region, zero immigration, and stop them buying land, empty or otherwise.
I don't think fundamentally it's right. Like, I'm a proponent of the notion of immigration, but the fundamental difference here is that this is not immigration, and it does not end up being immigration. Choosing to separate this specific point and being like, no. Well, in this small period, it was just immigration. When I look at the actual outcomes for Palestinians after this point, what do you see? Like,
well, to be clear, they also opposed immigration absent their prospects of a Jewish state, right? So even when it came to the white paper, when they were demanding a unitary state, even all the way before the white paper, when they were demanding 39, but even before then, when they were demanding the unitary state, it was two demands. It wasn't just stop immigration because they're intense. It was a unitary Arab state and stop immigration.
Sorry, say again.
The demand was a unitary Arab state and stop Jewish immigration.
Yeah, and I don't think that should have been the context, but at the same time, simultaneously, you even mentioned it. Palestinians had a right to choose what became of their land. They were the people who inhabited it. The only reason that they didn't get to choose, the only reason that they are framed as these evil, monstrous rejectionists today, is because the British Empire had supported the establishment of a Jewish state on their land to do away with a problem. Like their own problem. I'm sorry, it should have been this. It should have borne the responsibility of Europe to change, to fundamentally move away from the kind of racism that existed in our societies. And I think that, like, okay, yeah, sure, that didn't happen, but fundamentally, the problem is that.
Isn't it? But the important thing is that it didn't happen. That's what the Zionists had to deal with. That's what the Jews had to deal with.
But it also didn't. The outcome didn't have to be the establishment of a Jewish supremacist state in Palestine. It just didn't.
So just to be clear, you're saying that the Jews who were in Palestine in the 1900s should have abandoned the prospect of statehood and just taken their chances with leaders like al-Husseini.
Well, I mean, also al-Husseini is put into power by the British. You know.
Well,
that, right?
Yeah, but do you know why?
because he's seen as a good calming influence. He's taken to Herbert Samuel by Ronald Storrs. He also comes from a prominent family of the Husseinis. And it's also like it's a balance measure instituted by the British, so they don't want a singular family gaining too much power. The Nashashibis. Also, by the way, Husseini is thanked in 1937 by the British specifically for offering sermons that calm down Palestinian ire and resistance against the British.
Yeah, because of Jerusalem, yeah, but that's not the only. It's also because he was able to, because in terms of the national movement, he was able to be the most influential even then. You know, that after he lost his election, al-Husseini was out spreading fucking posters everywhere with his guys saying that the election that's put him in fourth place has been rigged by the Jews, right? So he was actually able to, it wasn't just the fact that he had a calming presence in Jerusalem at the point of the riots, it was also that he was threatening. And when he had lost that election as well, the alternatives to him were what, the Nashashibis, the people who ended up taking bribes from the Zionists. Like the opposition were in large part taking bribes from Zionists. So al-Husseini was, he was eventually put into that position by the British, but he wasn't unpopular, and he was the one who had sway over the national movement, to the point that when the opposition started to get power back from him, he exploited the Jerusalem riots, didn't he, in 29 to solidify his position.
But we've missed a fundamental disconnect here, haven't we? Because we've jumped from talking about pre-1917 to post-1917 and post-Balfour Declaration. And the fact that the Balfour Declaration is, in my understanding, is it revealed by the Bolsheviks?
I think so, yeah.
Well, that may be wrong, because that might just be Sykes-Picot generally is revealed by
one
the
of them was
Bolsheviks.
I think it might have been Sykes-Picot, but one of those was revealed
okay, it's Sykes-Picot. Yeah. But like also the Balfour Declaration, after that happens, I'm sorry, do you really expect people existing within a society who hear that a foreign power is giving away their state to people who have not lived there for thousands of years to not have like an extreme reaction? And the multitude of those early reports, like the Passfield, the Hope Simpson Commission, the King Crane Commission, what they generally find is, okay, the Palestinian problem is much more pertains to dispossession, and that we should limit immigration. We shouldn't be bringing over huge amounts of people because it's causing major problems for the Palestinians. Like, they are rejecting the fact that they can see their society slipping away from them. Kanafani writes about this in 36. You know, I think it's like 20,000 Palestinians are like unemployed or displaced by 31, I think. And so I think that, like, just leaping between the early Zionist period, where the amount of settlers is small, that it's not heavily altered the demographics. I mean, even after the First World War, a huge amount of people die in Palestine. Many people are in an awful situation. But like afterwards, you see a huge influx once they get the backing of a colonial power. And I don't think I'm really surprised that many people want to resist a colonial power. Like, I don't. I think that within this kernel of anything that Palestinians do, it doesn't come from hateful, anti-Jewish desire to just kill and harm Jewish people. I think it comes majorly from dispossession, from an experience of unjust denial of the right to live within their own homeland, and the homeland to develop as in the way that all other nation states, not all, but most other nation states at that time did.
Yeah, the fact is, we know that it wasn't just like dispossession that inspired this, because it was happening in Arab nationalism all over the Arab world. It was happening just as it happened again, because like there's nothing special. I don't know why people would say this. There's nothing special about Arab nationalism. It's just like any other. And and nationalism in general is just not very nice to Jews. Even when there was dispossession happening in Iraq or in Libya or Algeria or wherever else, like it's just. And we know that they singled out their own Jewish populations as well. Like the FLN in Algeria, like they weren't angry at their own Jews because of anything Zionism was doing. They were angry at their own Jews because they didn't see them as loyal enough to the cause, or like disloyal enough to the French. So,
but also, I think in some contexts, Jewish people had been collaborators with the French, and so often they were seen, and you know, the whole population is tarred as such, which is unfair.
Yeah, the minority of them were, and then at the end, the result was what, to not give them citizenship or to take it out. And they even said they would take it out on the whole population. But that's my point. It's nationalism. It doesn't matter. It only takes a minority of them to do something bad for the whole group to get attacked.
Okay, but I do think that there's a specific of Arab nationalism that you must admit that Arab nationalism is a major response to colonialism.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, it's trying to come into being as a nation, so that's quite a specific thing.
I mean, it was birthed in opposition to Ottoman rule, largely, yeah.
Ottoman rule. Yeah, okay. So many people viewed the Ottomans as a colonizing power for being Turkish and having control over specific areas. But also Arab nationalism really, really lights up in the period of British rule.
And Arab nationalism also, like all the other nationalisms, whether they came out of just causes or unjust causes, or whether they were justifiable or not, it involved a rise in anti-Semitism. It involved
Yes,
some Jews are doing something bad that we don't like, so we're going to take it out on any of them.
Yeah, of course,
And that's
of course.
why I'm saying with Zionists, I think it is very unrealistic, and just like any of this, like the ones they think is unrealistic, it was very unrealistic at the time to take these Jewish refugees who were in Palestine, whether they were there for ideological reasons or not, to take their chances with this new nationalism that doesn't really seem all that different from the other ones.
But in Palestine specifically, the nationalism is rising because Palestinians are being dispossessed.
It's rising everywhere. It's everywhere. It's rising where there's no dispossession.
Wait. Of course it's rising everywhere. But also, surely you must recognize that the dispossession, the realization that like people weren't stupid. They made the realization of what the Zionist project was doing. Ben Gurion was found. When was Ben Gurion kicked out the Ottoman Empire?
It's like early 1900s, some point.
What was he doing?
What
were they kicked out for?
I don't know what specifically he was doing, but I know he was up to
I'm pretty confident that it was basically found that they were allegedly doing things involving the establishment of a Jewish state. I think it's called, is this Poal Zion? I really don't want to get this wrong, but I am pretty confident that I have read at least somewhere that it specifically relates to an attempt to establish like all the trappings of some kind of Jewish state, basically. And he appeals to, you know this, he wore a fez, he learned Ottoman Turkish with the specific goal of basically finding an imperial backer for the Zionist project, which the Turkish weren't very interested in because they were like, no, I don't want to do that. But I think that like, I think in the context of like Palestinian nationalism isn't exclusively a response to Zionism, but it is such a big factor in terms of it. Like, it's undeniable that Palestinian dispossession, and the only way to reach this conclusion that it's not the case is to take Zionism from the standpoint of its oppressors rather than its victims.
No, but the problem is that's not the problem. The problem is that you're suggesting, because again, for the millionth time, I will say that Palestinians had every right to not want a Jewish state to be in that region. Like I think there's a point, obviously, where the national aspiration becomes a little bit less plausible. Like the same thing. That's why I don't expect Native Americans to be claiming parts of America anytime soon. But when it comes to Palestine, I was saying something about, for Jewish people living as a minority, like you seem to be suggesting that it was like the dispossession was what inflamed the Arab nationalism. And I'm telling you that you're a Jew in the 20th century, early 20th century. It does not matter how well integrated you are anywhere. We know this, right? Like Jews have every reason to believe that you can be the most integrated Gentile, whatever the fuck, that you ever could possibly be, and they will still target you, right? Nationalists will still target you. And I don't think Palestine was going to be any different, regardless of whether or not dispossession happened, because no other nation was like this. No other Arab nation that had dispossession or didn't have dispossession decided to make like special accommodations for their Jewish minorities or cared to keep them in their own countries. So I don't know why Palestine would have been different. And I think this thing is that when it comes to acknowledging the rights of minorities or acknowledging not even the rights, but the positions of minorities, I think it is very, very naive to think that Zionists would have just had to abandon their prospects for a Jewish state and then they would have just been safe. Like al-Husseini's prospects or his beliefs would have just gone away, or maybe they would have been replaced by a more pro-Jewish leader and then they would have just been like a bit unique compared to the rest of the nationalisms of the world. And I don't fault them for not wanting to do that.
As in what, you don't fault the Zionist project for what it did
I don't fault
Palestine?
it. Well, no, that's not what I said, is it?
Well, no, because I think the point that I'm trying to make is like,
No, wait. Just to be clear, what I said was I didn't fault them for not thinking, well, we should just integrate and just become minorities in the whatever new Arab state. I don't fault them for not wanting that.
I think also in the context of like the experience of Iraqi Jewish people, Moroccan Jewish people, like let's be frank here, incomparable to Europe. And it specifically takes off really badly in the 40s, right?
30s as well, but 40s, yeah, more likely.
40s is where it really, really reaches its peak though, right? And maybe into the 50s. Largely, it is a product of what Israel is and does, and the fact that, once again, like Jewish people become associated. It's not explaining why it's a good thing to do. Like, I don't think nationalism is good. Why do you think I'm so anti-Israel? Like, Israel is a perfect example of why building a nation state is a terrible idea. The same with America, the same with our country. I mean, keep saying our country, but like, this, I guess it is our country. You must see, like, because we live in these societies where we're basically told over and over again that the nation is what the state should serve. loads of people just end up taking that to its end point of just being like, yeah, well, anyone else who's here, no matter how long they've been here, have no right to be here. I don't think that's right and moral. And I think that what, like, basically I'm saying, or what I think is so important to make the realization about Palestine, is that Palestinian people were not wrong for not wanting a Jewish state established there, and that what actually we should be looking at in the current reality is the realization of a binational state, because I don't think the two-state will happen, because I don't think you're ever going to get an Israeli government who is even willing to make the minor concessions that, you know, they previously once were. I don't think that that is ever going to happen again. I don't think the current international community will ever move towards understanding the Palestinian position. I just don't. If the Labour government can't do it, if Barack Obama can't do it, if Joe Biden can't, I mean, Joe Biden was like a mega Zionist, but if none of these people can do it, why would I not just be like, yes, nationalism is really bad, and let's imagine a world without it, a society and a world in which states are political entities that welcome everyone, that are not these things that are specifically geared for a specific nation, that we start to reimagine the world in which we live.
Again, I'm already repeating myself now, but it's easy to say that when you have a nation and when you don't have to worry about national prospects or anything like that. It's much harder to say when every other nationalism in the world is basically telling you that you're not welcome. And it's the same thing. And no group experienced that more than Jews did, unfortunately. We acknowledge that some nationalisms can be emancipatory. Some of them can be oppressive. Obviously, I don't think you have any issue with Palestinian nationalism. That's why, the power of nationalism, that's why when Palestinians say they want one state, more of them will favor the unequal state than the equal one. Yeah, of course they do, because they feel like if they have to share power with Zionists, they're going to be fucked. They don't appreciate that. They don't appreciate having to share power with people who have been fucking them for 75 years. By the same token, Jews in the 20th century had every reason in the world to not want to take their chances as just being another minority in another fledgling nation. And they were, in a lot of ways, they were right to believe that, because they saw that when people attacked them, there was no distinction. They weren't distinguished on Zionist grounds, like the Hebron massacre targeted those were mostly non-Zionists who got killed there. They were targeted as a nation group. They were targeted broadly, and that's what nationalism does.
Yeah,
it forces smaller groups, say like whether it's Serbs or like Balkan states under the Ottoman Empire, it empowers groups and empowers empires and things like that, but it also takes smaller groups and gives them a very good reason to want to stay together as a smaller group. And I don't think any group has had that experience more so than Jews. And when we come to today, now that Israel has existed for 75 odd years, a bit more than that, if you're going to try to, we talk about destabilizing the region, I'm sure maybe you don't acknowledge, but like, how destabilizing have the attempts to destroy Israel been? It's not like the axis of resistance have been a stabilizing.
Far less so than Western
you think
imperialism.
the axis of resistance
would you compare anything that Iran has done to the invasion of Iraq? Like,
well, we're talking about Israel
anything on that
here.
level?
We're talking about Israel.
But but Israel does not exist on its own. Israel exists in a nexus of Western power
Israel
region.
came into being when the rest of the world was not necessarily helping them. They got arms from Czechoslovakia.
I mean, they'd already got all the help they needed from the British.
Well, they thought the British had betrayed them. What do you mean, all the help that the Arab Revolt?
Thinking the British betrayed you is a fundamentally different thing to having like a pro-Zionist, the most powerful imperial power in the world, enabling you to do this. And I think, like, also, by the way, people are spamming this. Native Americans, like, come on, millions upon millions of natives, indigenous people across the Americas were exterminated by by a similar project of basically saying the indigenous people who live here are unworthy. Our project is of supreme value. This is the kind of thing that like Churchill and Balfour said. They were like, yep, the Zionist project is of supreme value over the Palestinians, so you go and do this thing. I think that is where the problem lies. I don't think that it's about Jewish people. I don't think that it has anything to do with immigrants. I think it has a problem to do with settler colonialism. But on this topic of destabilization of the region, I think that one of the things I'm so interested about, like your position online and other people who sort of consider themselves leftists, our media tells us that Iran is evil. We see the Puppet Master cartoon in The Guardian, like an allegedly left-wing newspaper in our country. We are told about what Iran does in Syria, but we're not told about how, hey, there was a democracy in Egypt, and the guy who's there now, who we call our main ally, was put into power by the axis of secessionists, the United Arab Emirates, the bootlickers of Western imperialism. Mm-hmm. We're not told that the UAE crushed popular sovereignty in Bahrain, along with Saudi Arabia, and we're not fully told about our complicity, and especially America's complicity, in what was done to the Yemeni people. Like, hundreds of thousands of them were killed as a result of what the Saudis did whilst they refueled their planes and were taught by the Americans. And we're not told when Sudan comes up, hey, actually, Saudi Arabia and the UAE just decided that they were going to destabilize this country and back the dictatorial regime there because they have a plan for Africa that, involves a multitude of different dictatorships. We are told over and over again what Iran is, but yet we are filled with this idea by pro-Israel Western media that is not willing to confront the reality of the Middle East. And why, as a leftist, you wouldn't want to challenge that is beyond me.
I don't know what you think I'm not challenging. You're not going to, I don't need to convince my audience. So first of all, I don't know who in my audience thinks that Egypt is that their leadership is good for the country or is reflective of what the country wants. I think I'm the first person to say all the time that the populations of these dictatorships want something different from what their leader does. Actually, that's strangely true in Iran as well. The regime is massively unpopular. What I'm saying is we're trying to do one point at a time. So I don't, there's nothing new to me there.
Oh, this is something I really want to talk about.
Yeah, but the thing I'm getting at is we talk about destabilization, and again, I can maybe make the same point for your side. Like, I find it bizarre that people are able to say positive things or like to support the actions of the Houthis or Hezbollah, given that Hezbollah helped Assad kill more of his own people than Israel has killed in their entire fucking existence, right? And people seem to still wave a flag for them anyway. I think that's kind of insane. And it just seems to be to me that like there is this very strange overlap with the fact that like it seems that every country that devotes itself to destroying Israel ends up fucking themselves as well. Like Hezbollah are not good for Lebanon. Like the Iranian regime is not good for Iran. The Houthis are not good for Yemen. Yet Hamas are obviously not good for Gaza. But these groups are the ones that come into the forefront, and this is probably why I think even if you got what you wanted, like I said, I think maybe there's this imagination that one thing that I think might destroy Israel, and it never will, is if all these Arab countries actually did have democratic will. Because I think a lot of these countries would probably vote for someone who wants to get rid of. Will. If these Arab states had a democratic say, you probably would get quite a huge pan-Arab like launch of attack against Israel, right? We agree on that.
How do we? Maybe, but how do we ensure and maintain that these Arab states haven't had democratic will for a very long time? How has that been maintained?
Well, we've done it with dictatorships, haven't we? Yeah.
But who has backed and enabled these dictatorships for decades and continually enabled them with weapons transfers with the same with Israel, no conditions put on weaponry to Sisi? Like, he couldn't do this shit without Western backing. The King Abdullah in Jordan couldn't do the shit he does without Western backing. We're about to find out
that they absolutely can. I mean, Saudi have gotten really annoyed at a lot of them are trivial, but there are conditions put on these weapons. That's why Saudi have kept on increasing their arms purchases from China right now. And again, that's why a lot of these countries who say that they want to, give Israel a talking to or whatever, like, yeah, they usually do enough to keep their populations happy, but meaningfully, how many countries have really backed out of their ties with Israel in any kind of like damaging way? We've had a few, like Biden froze 1,800 2,000-pound bombs. China says a lot of words. Even China still maintains their connections with Israel. The problem is that a lot of this popular desire when it comes to even the Arab world is that when it comes into practice, when all these Arab countries in the 48 war had to start raising volunteers to try and go to Israel, the most that they could get was like a small number of a few hundred per country of poor, like swashbuckling youths who just went over with shit training to go and get like overwhelmed by the Haganah. So I think the problem is that a lot of these countries, whilst they have a lot of ideological and emotional attachment to trying to get rid of Israel, is like the difficulty comes when you start to get any substantial number of people who are willing to go and do it, or even states that are willing to go beyond saying bad words or doing like very trivial denouncements or surface denouncements. The fact is that Israel is there to stay. And if they're not there to stay, it's going to be through force that you stop them. And that means a population that sees themselves as indigenous and with their backs to the wall, you're going to have to defeat them by military force. And they are a nuclear power. And that's not a good future to live in. That's not going to help anyone.
But I think that also Israel is riven with insane internal divisions that are also going to come up one day. But I just think it doesn't really answer the question. If you must recognize, right, like that internet leftists and people online are not shaping the discourse of our general population, are not like influencing us to continually support dictatorships. Like, look, Hassan may interview a Houthi pirate, and that may be the biggest thing that you're ever upset of, and need to call him a Houthi pirate. But let's be frank here, our media tells us over and over again, the Houthis are bad. They destroyed and ruined Yemen. They're an Iranian proxy. They are bad and evil. Our governments tell us that these people are our allies. What we have to challenge for a better world, frankly, categorically, is the way in which our governments act, the way in which our media acts, the way in which they're not telling us the full truth. Like, we can get denouncements about Hamas. We can hear about how Hamas are authoritarians. But, like, where is the condemnation of fucking Sisi? Where is the condemnation of the UAE for what they do in Sudan? In fact, that is actually blocked, like, over and over again. And over again, Western powers have chosen, we'll just go with whatever dictatorship fits our whims and wills. They were happy to give Saddam, chemical weapons as he gassed people. It was only at the point that he turned against Western imperialism and made himself no longer useful to the West that he's dealt with. I think that, like, frankly, it's just so interesting that we sit here and we are told, like, over and over again, by people like yourself, by others, that we need to be focusing on what X person says about Hamas, the Houthis, when ultimately there is a kernel of anti-colonial resistance within there. It is hardly surprising that people find with the Palestinian national movement some kind of hope or solidarity for the imagination of a better world. But where our media fails us, and where we are more endangered by our societies, where more human beings are being slaughtered and subjected to racist regimes, lies within the actions of our government and our mainstream media, not people on the fucking internet, you know?
Well, my job is on the internet, so I argue with people on the internet. But I mentioned the Houthis because my understanding is that you support the Houthis as well, no? In the Red Sea?
In terms of engaging in a blockade against Israel, yes.
It's not a blockade against Israel. It's targeting of any civilian ship that goes into the region and kidnapping people.
It depends. Isn't it only if they're flying the flag or they're tangentially related to Israel?
No, absolutely not.
What's the example of it not being? What's the example of it being not being the
fact
case?
that the plurality of ships that they've attacked have been Greek, not Israeli.
Okay, where were those Greek ships headed?
Some of them were headed. How many ships go through that region? Some of them were headed between Africa, India, Europe. They weren't all headed to Israel. Did you think that?
Well, even then, it doesn't.
There's an entire like shipping forecast website that and there's civilians on ships. What are we talking about? These are civilians.
I think fundamentally choking Red Sea shipping in relation to Israel, when you do get those chances where you do hit it as a small nation, they prove what all human beings should be doing, which is boycotting Israel.
That's not a boycott of Israel, though. Even if they had the intelligence to realize which ships were Israeli based, they're not doing that. So I'm asking if you support what they're doing, not what you think they should be doing.
Yes. Yes.
So even though you're going to completely characterize the thing that they're doing as what they're not focusing just on Israeli ships. They're targeting anything. They've targeted like ships that were, again, the plurality of them are connected to Greece, not Israel.
Are they?
And they're targeting civilians. You acknowledge that these are civilians on these ships, right?
I mean, come on, like
these are not military personnel on these boats.
Lonerbox, I feel like talking about civilians is crazy work when you went to Israel.
When have I ever supported someone targeting civilians? You think I support the targeting of civilians?
Your work on the Great March of Return, like, I've never seen something more crazy than that. Like, that was unbelievable.
Well, acknowledging that there was some civilians and there were some Hamas fighters there.
You went to relitigate the Great March of Return, right? Like, you went to basically explain, okay, no, Palestinians, there was X amount of them shot. There was like X amount who I have calculated are actually Hamas militants.
How did I calculate that? Wait, how did I calculate that?
Hold on. You did that. I don't care how you calculated. That's not the point I'm trying to make.
Well, that matters because if some of them were, then some of them were.
Lonerbox. It doesn't matter. The point is you sought to relitigate the Great March of Return to say that actually about 30% or just under 30% of the people killed there were militants. But that's not what you were actually trying to do. You have an audience built up that there's a sizable amount of Israelis, a lot of right-wingers, a lot of people who just fucking hate Hassan Piker. Like, that's the basis of your audience, sadly. But what
as
you
opposed to what?
Hamas
Hamas and Hezbollah simps? Like, what the fuck?
What you wanted to appease them with, and what you wanted to get at them is like, look, the UN is untrustworthy. Anyone serious would look at the Great March of Return and would say, hey, the idea of this was to do non-violent resistance. Israel responded instantaneously with killing. Avigdor Lieberman said there will be no investigation of what we've done. No one did anything wrong instantaneously. You then go on to say, well, they attacked the border wall. They set fire to a sniper, something that they didn't even have a soldier in. And you intentionally ignore the fact that, like, if you bother to read like wider literature on the Great March of Return, they talk about, and I'm not just talking about there's an article by Craig Jones, which talks about this, how there was a specific noticing of people being shot in specific body parts. You know that story about the knee.
Yeah.
Israel has this logic that it has a right to cripple, to disable people for the rest of their life because it's not killing. And you chose, in a situation where there were 30,000 wounded, I believe about 7,000 shot with live ammunition, to create an allegedly beautiful research, something you'll probably have some fucking pride in, to basically say, well, it was actually all a Hamas thing, the UN lies to you, and blah, blah, blah. When if you look at the overarching effect on a society that is largely vertically built, that does not have the healthcare capacity because of the blockade, because of the size of it, because of the way in which Israel limits people leaving the Gaza Strip, to even have the ability to deal with the amount of wounded people, you choose to make a video about how actually there was a small amount more Hamas militants there. Like, I kind of want you to reflect and have a feeling about that.
You can tell me to reflect when you can tell me to reflect when you accurately characterize the things I say, because if you had watched what I said on the Great March of Return and looked at my notes that I took on it, you will also notice that I pointed out that there were quite a lot of people there, especially with the injuries of people who didn't deserve to be shot and the fact that there was no investigation. You will probably know that I spoke about the fact that in the IDF over Israel's entire history have gone perhaps like, I think the longest sentence they've ever given to someone who has ever like murdered a Palestinian was something like 18 months in jail. Or maybe there was a longer sentence, but the longest they spent was 18 months. Or you would have noticed that I mentioned how the IDF actually lied openly about Nijar, that person who called herself a medic who was killed because they clip-chipped one of her interview statements and said that she was calling herself a human shield. So just because I hold people to, I guess, like similar standards, and how if I see someone like Finkelstein lying about the fact that he said that the first day of that march was all civilian, and then I go and find out that Hamas are claiming a third of the people who died, and you've got Sinwar in a tent telling these people that we're going to go and march through the wall and like rip their fucking hearts out, then I think that's worth acknowledging. If people want to frame it as it was a completely peaceful protest and they just fired at people random, like that's not what happened. So I'm correcting the issue on both ends. That's why people who are right-wing Israelis or Israelis who like support, like love the IDF or whatever, don't like me. You just don't see that part because it's not really in your purview. But in any case, none of this gets away from the fact that you're supporting the targeting of civilians in the Red Sea.
But like, Lonerbox,
do you or do you not? Do you not support targeting civilians in the Red Sea?
The reason that I support the notion of it is targeting Israeli ships. If other ships get hit in the process, that's not great. But if it's Israeli ships that are getting hit, that is a good and a just and a moral thing.
I don't think collateral damage is like you just hit a ship that has nothing to do with Israel and it's still civilians on it. It's like quite far. That's not what you think is collateral damage, that they just get the wrong ship. What?
What do you mean? That it's collateral damage that they get the wrong ship? What is the percentage of ships that are hit? Like, I'd like to hear this.
Wait, no, we're not getting away from the fact that you acknowledge that you are supporting the targeting of civilians.
Like,
I've never done that, by the way.
Lonerbox, come on, mate. At a certain point,
it's a simple yes or no question. I don't know what to tell you.
What do you mean? Do I support I'm telling you objectively what I support, which I support is preventing shipping to Israel. I think that's
not what they were doing, though. They were hitting anyone.
What is the number of like non-Israel linked ships that are hit? Like, how many is it? Is it a sizable amount? Because I didn't seem to see all that much reporting that it actually was this.
Depends on what your Israel-linked ship is, because I think one of the Israel ships that they had claimed was because first of all it was heading, I think, from either Europe or North Africa, somewhere on the Mediterranean, to India, and I think it was owned by a company that's owned by a company that has an Israeli person leasing the boat out. I have no idea how that's supposed to hurt Israel in any meaningful sense. I think the guy lived in London.
There's a sizable amount of international shipping that goes through the Red Sea, and I don't just think it's Israel that's complicit in the crimes. Greece, perhaps not so much, but American shipping, anything linked to America as well, 100%. But like this thing that I'm like, apparently, enjoy the targeting of civilians. I feel like I've been quite principled in my stand against Israel by saying over and over again that the reason that I am so totally against them is because of the fact that they are a genocidal settler colony, the fact that they take aim at Palestinian life, the fact that this society that we're all just meant to have relationships with, that we're meant to say is like good, is just, is moral, is part of this awesome family of nations that my government regularly tells me is my friend and ally, that they beam the flag of onto Downing Street, is actually this country that is engaged in such violence. Like, sure, the Houthis took over and seized power during the Yemeni revolution, and it's perhaps not what all Yemeni people want, but neither is a fucking Western-backed dictatorship led by the UAE and the rest of Yemen.
Yeah, I just wonder if like why one imperialism or one like
The
foreign
Houthis.
installed government
Wait,
is
why would the Houthis? Why would the Houthis be a foreign installed government?
well, who is arming them?
What do you mean?
I mean,
Well,
foreign backed, not
wait.
installed, backed.
You know when the Houthis came to power, right? Ali, I think his name's Ali Abdullah Saleh, the previous regime. He was crying to Washington, going, "Oh, the Houthis are Iranian backed," and Washington dismissed the claims. They were like, "These are just the claims of a dying regime." Like, it wasn't true that they were initially Iranian backed, and also Iran. I mean, it may have increased a bit, but like generally it wasn't really possible to get Iranian weapons there very easily because, Saudi Arabia bombed the shit out of all of the airstrips and controlled the vast majority of ports. Perhaps that's changed, but the Houthis do also have some.
Yeah, they did that
But the Houthis tap into a long-standing thing as well, which is, like pretty much since their inception, Yemeni people have been very supportive of the Palestinian cause, right? So, like, what you've got to understand here is, like, I'm not a big fan of religious authoritarian governments. I don't think they're awesome. I just think that people targeting the genocidal settler colony that I am constantly made to think is my wonderful ally by our media class, by our political elite, is a good thing.
They're not targeting the settler colony, though. They were targeting civilians. They were targeting civilians on the boats.
I think most Palestinians are pleased with what they've done. I think even those polls that you cite, Palestinians show a great happiness with what the Houthis are doing. So I don't really think it's that insane of a thing to say. I think, frankly, kind of any litigation on what Israel has done, kind of spending your time targeting Hassan when there are so many other people on the internet who are so horrendous is fucking insane to me. Like, if you were targeting Hassan for, like, kind of, I don't know, supporting Graham Plattner or something like that, fine, that's a good thing to be doing as a leftist.
But not Chairman Mao.
He is an evil terrorist.
Plattner versus Chairman, but not Chairman Mao. Plattner versus Chairman Mao. Pick your poison. Fuck me, man.
Okay.
Supporting Nasrallah.
Like, sure.
Jesus.
Sure, great. But I mean, supporting Nasrallah is still objectively better.
Nasrallah, who helped Assad kill more of his own people than Israel's ever killed in their whole existence.
Lonerbox. During the Syrian civil war, how many children died? Can you look it up for me?
I don't know how many children died. The children fled, didn't they?
30,000 children died.
Okay.
That's the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights.
How many civilians
20,000 died? 20,000. It's about half the death toll of civilians. So
the civilian death toll in Syria was something like at least 300,000 or 400,000, and the majority.
So this is talking about the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights,
and the majority of them are attributable to Assad and his allies. His allies being one of them, Hezbollah.
Yeah. But well, I mean, Hezbollah probably killed at tops like 7,000.
Well, they helped the guy. They also potentially might have saved him. Assad might have lost in 2012 when Hezbollah came in.
Yeah. But also,
so,
put frankly, how many people died in Iraq? How many people died as a result of the sanctions regime?
I don't support that. I don't support the invasion of Iraq.
I know that you're saying that you don't, Lonerbox, but it's really hard to square the circle of kind of just like running defense for Israel on the internet and complaining about like the online Western left. Like, I get it. I get criticizing and saying like blind support for the Iranian government is fucking crazy because like the Iranian government is objectively bad. The people there want democracy. They want some kind of accountable government, but also simultaneously making this clear point, which I very often do, is saying like, hey, when the Iranian government do things to target Israel, that is good. When they oppress their own population and don't allow them to live their lives as they want, that is a bad thing. Like, targeting Israel is good because it's a genocidal settler colony. Like, it's as simple as that.
Even if they're targeting civilians, though, because that's what they... Like, Iranian rockets are not aimed. Those ballistic missiles are not aimed.
Every single defensive war that Israel has fought and every single justification that you make for them being scared is premised on mass killings of civilians. Like,
I don't. The difference is that I don't support Israel when they target civilians. Do you think I support Sabra Shatila or I support like the numerous crimes that they've committed in Gaza? Like, I don't support targeting civilians. I don't make exceptions for that. No. Which is why I'm just wondering why, like, even if the boats are connected to Israel, like the sailors aren't, they're like Filipino or European. Like, it's fucking mental, man. God.
Let me give you
the reason I have a big issue with people who support the Axis and this like armed resistance against Israel. It's not just because of the effect it would have on Jews. Like, the Israelis seem to they're handling it. Like, they're in their own reality now. Their new status quo is that every time we see a new Hezbollah installation or every time we think we see a new Hezbollah installation, we're just going to bomb it. We're not even going to ask the army half the time. That's their status quo. The reason, but it's not just because of how it affects the Israelis, it's how it affects Arabs. Like, these groups are not good for them. These groups don't help. How have the Houthis helped Palestine? How have Hamas helped Palestine with what they've done?
I mean, in the opinion of Palestinians, a lot more than the fucking West. Like, there is objectively, right? They're like saying, how have the Houthis helped Palestine when we have for how many decades coddled Israel and had that as just an accepted status quo of like the lesser of two evils. I am much more interested and focused on that. Like, I feel like that is so much more of a meaningful thing. You know, the fact that like for decades we have sold and protected these authoritarian, brutal, barbaric regimes while simultaneously condemning others and saying, Hamas are evil terrorists, aren't they? These people have got to go. They can have no role in power in Palestine, while simultaneously being like, well done, Israel. Oh, you may have starved a lot of people. You may have, targeted institutions. You may have mass killed and done all these things, but you're still our close friend and we coddle them. That's what has to change. Not our position on the axis of resistance, because already they're all designated terrorist organizations, apart from the Houthis, by the way. They're all designated terrorist organizations that it is literally illegal to support.
Well, I'm literally online in a space where it's quite popular to support these groups. So yeah, I'll talk about that if I want. I don't know what's wrong with calling that out, especially because of how like useless and destructive it is. You said your argument for the Houthis helping Palestine is because Palestinians in a poll said that they like their actions. Given that we're talking about if you keep appealing to leftist perspectives, I'm here for material.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what materially have they done for Palestine?
More than any Western government.
Like what? Like what? How?
Actually tried to stop shit, to take an action as like a poor nation and shown huge solidarity with the Palestinian people and taken an action with the small means that they've and taken an action with the small amount of arms that they have. Like, I'm sorry, Lonerbox, surely you must realize that even hitting one Israeli-linked ship is more than our government, I keep saying our, but the UK government have done for Palestine. We're continually like whining about this fucking two-state solution bullshit while simultaneously continuing to hug Israel.
So hitting a ship full of civilians that is importing, I don't know if we think there's arms imports. I think they might even be consumer goods, but either way, how is that helping Palestine?
It's enforcing a blockade, and it's showing that even a small country can take well, it's not actually a small country, it's a very populous country, but even a country like Yemen, that is one of the poorest, if not the poorest in the entire Middle East, can take an action, whilst the same dictatorial regimes who back the same kind of slaughter that apparently should be so horrified and shocked by from the Houthis targeting a civilian ship. Like, I'm sorry, man.
I'm not telling you to be shocked or horrified out of the context. I'm asking you for supporting it, about cheering it.
About supporting what? About supporting a blockade and them.
Well,
yes.
The blockade that entails targeting civilians, often when they don't have anything to do with Israel.
I think that is a good thing. But don't they give the ships a ring before they target them?
People have died on these. like roof knocks.
How many people have died? How many people have died?
I don't know, but we're talking about the principle of targeting civilians.
How many people were massacred in Yemen when America bombed them? How many people were massacred in Yemen?
It's a good thing I don't support that.
Wait. How many people were... Well, I mean, you think that, like, resistance should all just end and that everyone in the Middle East should just accept the status quo of brutal, bloody dictatorships across
When did I say resistance
should
all just
Israel.
end? Didn't I tell you what kind of resistance that I support in the West Bank? I didn't say all resistance should end.
You said that you supported, like, what, protest and, like, going to settlements through blocking roads?
Like ANC actions. Right? That can also entail killing settlers.
Yeah, but they're not allowed to... Lonerbox, they're not allowed to do that because Israel will fucking shoot them. Well, like, Israel will shoot them. Or if Israel don't shoot them, they'll get their lackeys in the Palestinian Authority to arrest them. Palestinians aren't allowed to do that, Lonerbox. The Great March of Return, like, that's why it's so crazy that you offered any litigation and you didn't bring that up to your audience of being like, this thing is so fucked that when people engage in predominantly non-violent resistance, as in the first Intifada, Israel's initial instantaneous responses, ooh, time for mass torture and bone breaking of children who dare to oppose us in any capacity. Ooh, you're boycotting us. You're engaged in civil disobedience. We are going to torture the fuck out of you. Like, that's the thing. You, like, act in this world of, like, simultaneously where Palestinians can do that non-violent resistance, but then also litigate the Great March of Return. Like,
I don't know how I don't know how I would say that what I was supporting was non-violence. You realize that attacking settlements and attacking settlers would be violent, right? Like, that's violent resistance. Yeah.
So do
you think I care if a settler gets killed in like an ANC style like attack on the settlement? Like, say if there's like an outpost trying to be set up and the Palestinians say, no, you can't be here. We'll shoot you if you keep building this, and then they just stay. You think I wouldn't support that? What?
Yes, I really did not think that you would be willing to support that, but I think
because you don't know your enemy. Like, I don't know, like it's just like.
But I think that, but in the context of Palestine, is were any Palestinians to do that, you wouldn't support it, right? Like, surely on October the 7th, you must realize that some of the settlements in the Gaza envelope are like part of surveilling the Gaza Strip. Like they can see into fucking Gaza. I know it's not as big a part as like, say, having, military outposts and stuff there, but I think that it's undeniable that like on October the 7th, Israeli civilians live across from Gaza, that they have humiliated people in Gaza as they have over and over again been killed, that the vast majority of these people have served in the Israeli military. And like in the context of, say, somewhere like Lebanon, people are fine with like huge amounts of people being blown up in civilian clothing whilst they're not actually engaged in militancy directly. And that when it comes to Palestine, it's like, well, or when it comes to Palestinians doing it, it's like they are the most evil, barbarous savages that our world has ever seen.
You'll forgive me if I don't actually think that the kibbutzim outside Gaza were the same as settlers trying to set up outposts in the West Bank. Yeah, I think targeting one is probably fine. The other one, not so much. Again,
what's the material difference?
The material difference is that, well, I thought we were talking about law earlier. The difference is that one of them are citizens of Israel, the others are illegal settlers.
But they're still citizens of Israel, protected by the Israeli military to engage in the violence against Palestinians. Like, you know this. You met the Israeli military. They were just out there protecting. They were out there protecting. Protecting.
The kibbutzim are
protecting the settlers.
The kibbutzim are not there to protect settlers. The kibbutzim are there to. Well, most of them are there because they were, depending on which one. Some of them were like built by Moroccan refugees. Others are, but generally speaking, the kibbutzim were inhabited by left-leaning people who wanted statehood for Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean, not in every place though. That's not true, is it?
Which
like, Sderot.
You were the one. Wait, Sderot is not a kibbutz; it's a town.
Okay, it's a town in the nearby.
The kibbutzim were the ones that were close, that were right in the envelope.
Yeah, but.
Those were mostly left-wing people. Yeah, people who supported Palestine state.
Like,
those were also the ones who. Anyway.
I think also like it's interesting that you think like in the context of Holocaust survivors in Palestine, they basically had the right to participate in a settler colonial entity that dispossessed and denied the Palestinians any dignity, but Palestinians who participated in militant resistance against the state that had continually humiliated them and denied them their basic rights and kept them under the yoke of Western imperialism, that they had no right to rise up and break out. I don't think mass civilian killing is good or a thing like that, but I think that Israel is a very different situation in that these settlers have engaged in militancy their entire lives against Palestinians and humiliate them.
Well, the kibbutzim residents were not settlers, though. They didn't do those things you're just describing. They're people who were, most of them were born there. Like what?
But what's wrong with what a settler does in the West Bank?
They're claiming land that is not internationally recognized as theirs, and they're also in a situation where they have to use the pretext of a military occupation to set up there, whereas the settlers in Israel are just they're in their country. That's all the kibbutzim dwellers.
It was always premised on the dispossession of the Palestinians.
Yeah, but by the same token that I don't support Native Americans murdering random American citizens just in the name of land back, the same reason I wouldn't support going after people who are citizens of Israel, especially given that most of these people were born there. They weren't the ones who did the 1948, who did the Nakba. That's not them.
No, but to this day, Israel still dispossesses and harms Palestinians every single day.
What are you trying to tell me? You don't support killing civilians in Israel?
I don't think killing civilians is a good thing, but I think that like ultimately drawing this distinction of like, oh, settlers in the West Bank are so evil that they're the ones who are doing this evil thing when they're just supported entirely by the Israeli state is kind of hard to me. That these settlers do live on the outside of Palestinian territories, lands that belong to Palestinians, and that Palestinians want those lands back. And I can't sit here and think like, that Palestinians are the most evil, savage monsters to have ever existed in the world, and that Israel has some right or just moral position.
I don't know why you keep on invoking this like evil, savage monsters. I typically don't describe people in this way. Like, if you wanted to understand why Hamas does what they do, but what are we even talking about now? We're talking about targeting the civilians. You seem to be okay with doing it in the sea if the ship might be Israeli. Flip a coin. It doesn't matter.
I'm definitely okay with that. I'm definitely okay with that.
Yeah, and as far as it goes with Israeli civilians in the kibbutzim, I don't think you support targeting them, and you're okay with settlers. So
no, I don't.
There's not much of a disagreement there.
Civilians.
Okay, so. No. I don't know what argument we're trying to make. Because their country was founded on ethical grounds, that means that we could be more understanding of the civilians of today getting killed there. I mean, we wouldn't put the standard to any other country.
I think that we can be more understanding of what the Palestinians do and why the situation, why October the 7th happened, basically. I think that that's the thing that we should be talking about, that especially in the context of the world in which we've lived for the last 2 years. So many Palestinians have been slaughtered in part because the way in which they were all tarred as barbaric savages after October the 7th, that over and over again we heard that there was mass systematized rape, that there was huge amounts of killing, beheadings, and all of these things, and that our media perpetuated that narrative, and that has been so incredibly dangerous in Palestine. And this taps into what I'm talking about with the Houthis and stuff, and why I find it so odd to kind of have this hyper-fixation or hyper-focus on, say, Western leftist interest in the axis of resistance and stuff.
Well, because that's my area. The predominant narrative around Palestine in my country or in the English-speaking world, what I see on social media or what I see in the area that I work, that's what I see. That's the popular That's the popular stance that I see. I think it is completely useless. I think it's destructive, and I don't think it doesn't help. Like, I've never seen in my life so much popular support for a cause and it go to what? Like, what the fuck have they achieved?
What do you mean? Well, the anti-Iraq war stuff didn't stop the invasion of Iraq.
But the anti-Iraq war had a cause that was agreeable. It was just don't go to Iraq and carry out the war. Whereas we're talking about the activists for the pro-Palestinian cause right now, and the fact that it's like acceptable in these spaces to support Hamas or the Houthis or Hezbollah or any of these other groups. It's okay to call for the destruction of Israel and all this other shit. So I'm just wondering, like, there's been so much energy gone into it. I just don't know how it's helped.
Well, I think that ultimately it has raised huge amounts of awareness for what Israel actually is, and we don't pussyfoot around what Israel is actually become and does and is. Like, most people recognize it as a settler colony. Most people recognize it as an apartheid state that has dispossessed Palestinians. And I think that the outgrowth of this, that what you're underestimating, is that this is going to have ripple effects forever. It's tearing apart the American right-wing base and how they reconcile that and bring it together. I mean, listening to the elite of the pro-Israel movement is insane. Like, they don't have any solutions. They're like, let's ban TikTok. Like, let's deport fucking people. There's no way to fix this, Lonerbox. So I think, like, underestimating the major effect of what will come, what will happen in years to come, is kind of foolish,
Well, I don't doubt that things will probably change. It won't be unusual, I think, in maybe 10 or 20 years for elected leaders to just want to fully disconnect from Israel. I don't think that would be surprising. Do you notice that every time I asked you how they've helped, you tell me how they've hurt Israel? You don't tell me how they've helped Palestinians. Do you see that these two are not completely intertwined? Palestinians.
What could we do?
Well, look at what's happening now. Palestinians have not had their lives improved in the last 2 years, have they? Their lives have gotten markedly worse. The lives of people in the West Bank is even worse, and obviously Gaza. Well, I don't need to tell you about Gaza. So yeah, you've put Israel in a worse position, but it's not like Palestine has gone, like, it's not like an inverse ratio, is it? Like, what's hurt Israel seems to have coincided quite a lot with Palestine getting even more hurt.
How could we have helped Palestine? What should we have done?
To a degree, like, I don't know, what can we do to help Sudan? I don't know, but you could have stopped, like, there's only so much. Well, there's only so much that Western powers can do in most of these countries. Like, people, when it came to Israel, when it came to, well, first of all, with Sudan, for example, they could have maybe not elected Trump because canceling USAID and closing 80% of the food kitchens in that area, the emergency kitchens, was probably a pretty shit idea. I think with Western activists, I think there was actually some opportunity in bringing more popular attention to Palestine and we even saw, like, beginnings of this. I'm saying it went far enough, but there were beginnings of this when it came to Biden. Like, he was willing to sanction settlers. No other president's done that. They did actually make a pretty loud noise about Israel when they were blocking aid. Trump let them do it for 3 months. There are differences that can happen from these leaders. Back in the day, you spoke about how Bush Sr. had frozen settlements. I know you're smiling, obviously, because we don't want the same thing. Like, you want to destroy Israel. But in terms of actually tempering bringing the Israeli right into their place and allowing a more left-wing alternative to become more popular in Israel, there were things that activists could have done. But instead, what they achieved is, I think, maybe they actually made Israeli Jews and even diaspora Jews who have had connections to Israel feel even more like they need to dig in. The fact is that all this popular support and all this isolating of Israel does not get you around the fact that this is a group that's not going anywhere, and they're not going to stop fighting. This is not going to be like white South Africans. They're not the same.
Well, I think that something really interesting that you said there was that Biden did an amazing thing by sanctioning.
Did I say it was amazing, or did I say that it was not enough, but it was the beginning of things?
That is a movement that we should view as, like, some kind of major movement.
Just checking your memory.
when the entire government in Israel does nothing about settlers and you continue to have a relationship with it, what meaning is there in sanctioning settlers? That's a pressure valve. It's a pressure valve to reduce huge amounts of protest against you and to say, look, I'm actually doing something. I've drawn a red line here, and then not having any accountability with that red line. It's like, hey, that's not good enough. That is not good enough from what we can imagine for Palestinians. And that being as like something that the Western left did or could have done for Palestinians is crazy, because he still fucking hugged Netanyahu. Like Ben Rhodes wrote about this, that Ben Rhodes was called like Hamas for having like some vaguely unequivocal pro-Israel views, basically. But like, just in this context of like citing that as like an achievement, that's not an achievement.
Again, given American precedent, it is a move. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying if we had 4 more years of Democrats, there would have been. I know it's meaningless to you because what you want is Israel destroyed. Like, yeah, I'm never gonna. Yeah, we can easily agree that I'm never going to convince you that any Democratic presidency ever would have actually like satisfied you. But that's the problem. I think the things that would satisfy you guys is something that's just not desirable.
Well, I mean, I would say kind of ending the world order as we currently know it would be far more satisfying and a decent thing for human beings than the perpetuation of a current status quo where the best you can get in the face of like huge, unlimited war crimes, genocide, consistent apartheid against human beings, the best thing you can get is a few sanctions on a couple of settlers. Is, I don't know, it's kind of like, it doesn't really appeal to me, but I don't live in America. I don't make the choice of voting for Kamala or Trump. Like, I don't make that choice.
Would you have voted Kamala or Trump, or would you have abstained, or a third party?
No, I don't live there.
Would you have?
I don't have to make the choice.
Would you?
I don't have to make the choice. I don't have to make the choice.
You are a public figure who publicly announces their opinions online. You can't tell me whether or not you would have if you could.
I told people I don't live in America.
That's not an answer to the question. Wait, why would you equivocate on that question? That's such an easy question.
What do you mean? Why would I equivocate on the question? Because I don't live in America. It's not my choice. It's not my decision. People can make their own fucking minds up.
Israel and Palestine's not where you live. You tell them what to do all the time.
But
what
the fundamental
fuck?
difference is my country. I guess you could say the argument that I was about to make is that my country would be heavily complicit, in Palestine. And well, no, I think that there's actually a fundamental difference.
You think Egypt should get rid of Sisi, but you don't want to say who you would vote for.
Yeah, because he's like a brutal, bloody dictator.
Okay, but you wouldn't. But you can't say who you would vote for in an American election if you have the right to.
Like, I think that the thing is...
Are you afraid of how your audience will respond? Do you think if you acknowledge that Biden would have been preferable to Trump, that the Bada fans will fucking come down on you like a ton of bricks? Shit.
Personally, being frank, I don't think either of them are preferable. I don't think either is a good situation.
No, I know that, but there's a lesser of two evils. Yeah.
What, in the context of Trump and Kamala?
Do you believe that or no? That's what I'm asking you.
I think my opinion is wider in the sense of I believe that these left-wing parties are consistently kicking the can down the road and that we're consistently moving towards more fascistic governments. I think Labour is a perfect example of this in the United Kingdom. We elected Labour, or most people elected Labour, on the basis of the idea that Labour would bring about meaningful change in our country. They have totally failed in that. Keir Starmer is now demonised as evil Stalin overlord. He's likely to be replaced by Farage. Even if he weren't and Farage was beaten, Farage will probably die at some point of his smoking issues. But like, the longer we kick the can down the road without a fundamental major change in our society, I just see it as the same outcome either way. Like, sure, it may be marginally better for many people if Kamala is elected, but also for so many it's not better. She said if she was going to go hard on the border, sanctuary cities was something that emerged under Joe Biden. I know in this country that I'd never vote for Labour. But like, put frankly, I don't live in an American state. I don't have a choice around who's going to be my elected representative. But personally, I don't think I would vote Democrat.
So you wouldn't vote Democrat?
Personally, I don't think so. No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
It took a while to get there,
and I don't think it would have meant. I don't think it would have meant one thing, because I don't think it was my fault. I don't think it was the fault of the pro-Palestine movement. I think it is a failure of consistent left-wing parties to offer any meaningful challenge to Donald Trump.
So would you have abstained,
and the kind of politics he espouses?
You think you'd have abstained or third party?
Spoiled my ballot.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah, I would have spoiled my ballot.
I think. Do you think Palestinians felt a difference when Trump came in Gaza?
In what context?
3 months of aid being blocked, for one.
I think that Biden allowed similar things. I think that Biden allowed it to happen, but Trump took it further. I think it's a bad thing what Trump has done, but I think that ultimately Trump has even had to temper some of his most extreme rhetoric from the beginning.
To be clear, I don't know about you, but aid being blocked for 2 weeks versus 3 months is probably quite different.
But at what point would we know if Biden would have done the same?
Because he was there and he didn't. When there was that 2-week block in the north of Gaza, the Democrats and the administration threatened to reevaluate their arms arrangements with Israel, and then the next day, Kogat sent aid in and filmed it.
But
Given that they were willing
much,
to stand 2 weeks, I don't know where 3 months comes in.
But how much better do you think it is to basically allow a famine to go on where you alleviate it every now and again, where you like alleviate the situation for certain people, and that's all that happens. You just alleviate and make it better. Like, Israel's crimes didn't begin under Trump. They accelerated, sure, but at the same time, simultaneously, they were terrible, terrible things under Biden.
Yeah, so I've never gone hungry myself. If I had to choose between 2 weeks versus 3 months of an aid blockage, or if I knew that other people had that choice and they weren't making it for me, I'd probably be kind of upset at them. I don't know. I think
But
even if, and this is only one example, obviously the famine designation from the IPC came under Trump, not under Biden.
Mm-hmm.
So, not to mention the GHF, not to mention the 2,000-pound bombs that Biden had frozen, 1,800 of them that Trump resumed within his first week of coming into office. Not to mention the fact that we know what Trump's version of the two-state solution looks like. That actually is a Bantustan. That's a leopard print of a nation in the West Bank that I've never seen any Democrat endorsing.
Israel banned UNRWA under Biden, right?
Mm-hmm. That's not the same as banning 3 months of aid.
Where do you think that was going to go? Like, what was the alternative to banning UNRWA? They let that happen. There's no strong steps taken, and I just feel like I know what you're trying to do, and it's fair enough to say this. Like, Palestinians starve worse under Donald Trump. That's objectively true, and that's a bad thing. And I don't want Donald Trump to be in power, but fundamentally, I think that the problem is that it was a failure of Biden, not the pro-Palestine movement, and not my personal feelings or decisions. Kamala didn't offer anything that substantively different to Joe Biden, who was a wholly unpopular president. And so the situation is not my fault, and I don't live there. Sure, it's terrible for Palestinians, but so is any mass slaughter of Palestinians. I want that to stop. I want to imagine a world in which the Democratic Party doesn't just love Netanyahu. It didn't look like we were getting any closer to Israel ending its actions. Like, in the context of Sudan, the RSF was still operating there. The Biden actually drew himself. Normally, during Biden's presidency, they're actually further away from the Gulf, but Biden drew himself closer to the Gulf. I think they signed a specific kind of weapons agreement or like a proximity with them whilst he was in power.
Okay, and I'm guessing we agree that Biden wouldn't have shut down USAID, which was 80% of the emergency kitchens in Sudan.
Is that actually the exact number?
Roughly 80%, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think that would have saved the people of Sudan from the slaughter. And I think that what we have to examine is why Western countries would ever have a relationship with the United Arab Emirates.
It's not just people in El Fasher, right? They're not all the people who were starving, right? There were people in Zanzam and all those surrounding camps.
Yeah. Of course, there are
will
people,
suffer because of Trump cutting that those kitchens.
And these are terrible, awful things. But it's not my decision. I didn't vote for Trump, and it's not the fault of the pro-Palestine movement.
No, I know, but you're saying you didn't vote for Trump, and now that's why I was asking you. That's why I thought it was worth bringing up. If you said you would have just abstained if you could,
I would have abstained if I could. Yes.
Okay.
But I wouldn't have had the decisive vote.
But
sure,
I guess, but no one has the decisive vote. Like, it's obviously about whether or not you would contribute in your one-person way to these differences taking place. You seem to acknowledge the differences. They just don't seem to be big enough for you.
But the reason for this failure was in part is why can't we have like a political party who is genuinely looking for change in Palestine? That the Democratic Party would have just allowed the situation to continue. Sure, maybe it may not have been as exactly as bad, but where's the fundamental change? They were in power for all this time. Sudan's civil war kicked off under Biden. They didn't sanction the UAE.
You keep on doing this thing where I'm telling you the differences and you acknowledge the differences, but then you say you wouldn't have it wouldn't have been the game changer for you because there are other bad things happening. I don't understand that. The difference between like the fact that we know that also Trump was saying these things about USAID before he came into office. We know that 80% of the food kitchens were in Sudan. And the fact that we also know, even with regards to aid to Palestinians or in the West Bank, we know that when Trump was last in 2016, he cut aid to the Palestinian Authority that Biden actually restored. So we know that there were differences here and that people's lives were affected by this. But I guess to you, it's like, I don't know, is it maximalism where you're just saying, well, it's not good enough for me, and that's why I would abstain?
I think that it's not good enough for anyone, I think is my problem. And I think in the UK, I see the same thing, that if we keep, and that kicking the can down the road to just make people's lives better for 4 years is not good enough. Like, I just think that we need major change. And like, I really don't think that my opinion on an American election that happened where it wasn't defined by this foreign policy stuff, but was actually defined mostly by what Trump was offering versus what Kamala was offering, that like, it's not my fault. It's not the fault of the pro-Palestine movement. It's just objectively not. It's the failure of the Democrats to offer anything materially different.
Okay, I think that distinction is a little bit bizarre to me, but
Mm-hmm. I
I
mean,
don't know.
it's your opinion. It's
Are
your
we?
opinion. I mean, neither of us live there.
Yeah, but neither of us seem to have an issue talking about countries that we don't live in. I think we're perfectly
No, no,
fine
no,
with
no,
that.
no, no, no. But like, I guess in the context of what Israel is and does. But yeah, I think like when it comes to Sudan and stuff, like I was talking about the UAE's involvement in Sudan earlier this year, like before Al Fasher. I was interested in the UAE's involvement in Sudan. I've written a dissertation
Hmm.
about, in part, the UAE and the way in which our discourse revolves around the United, how our discourse revolves around Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and all of these things. And I think that it's really important to say that the fact that this stuff is kind of just going on and on and on with mass slaughter under both the Biden, under both the Trump administration, and that these problems are not changing, that I find it really hard to be like, yep, the Democrats are just going to fix everything. And I think that that's the thing that disappoints me or makes me just not want to give my name or support to a party like that. I think that people should make their own independent choice. I don't want to tell people whether they should or shouldn't vote for Kamala. Again, I don't have to make that choice. It's not something that I actually have to make the choice of, you know?
So how do you? You seem to have pretty
Yeah.
big ambitions when it comes to changing the world, like
Yes.
overturning the world order. How do you? If voting's not going to do it, what do you want to do? What's the
What do you
plan?
mean if voting's not going to do it?
Well, like, or it seemed like you weren't interested in voting between like, I guess like a fascist Trump and whatever neolib like Kamala. But I'm just wondering what you like. What do you think people should do, or what do you support
What do
doing
I
to
think? What
bring
do I
about these
think will
changes in
change
the
the
world?
world?
Yeah, yeah. Or
Abandoning
even
capitalism.
okay.
I think that that's the only option. I think that our world is burning around us. I think that we live in a society where continually certain human beings are designated for death on the basis of our geopolitical order. And I think that the only fundamental change that is going to make the world just a much better place is abandoning capitalism. I think, like, you must admit that, like, our government's response to Sudan has been lacking. Where has
Hmm.
been the action against the United Arab Emirates? Where has that been? Like, I live in this fucking country. This is the country I live in, and I see the fucking disappointment. And I think if the massacre had carried out, sure, maybe there would be a bit of a no, 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 no from the Democrats, but that would probably be it because they are pretty reliant on the UAE for enforcing a regional order that is not good, that is not moral, that is not just. And I think, like, look, it's hard to imagine the changes that happen in this world. And I'm not someone who's designed a political program for how that's going to happen, but unfortunately, I don't think that most of that will come through voting.
Okay.
I think that I think that participation with other human beings and I think joining movements and trying to act and make changes in your local environment is a good thing. But I think unfortunately these governments are going to keep disappointing us. Like, honestly, and I understand what you're saying, and I do take into account like the thing about Sudan. It's awful that closing US aid did that to Sudan, but ultimately it doesn't address the root cause of the problem. Like the famine in Sudan is complex, by the way.
Hmm.
There is like the famine in Sudan is not as simple as Gaza. Gaza's famine is very simple to address. Gaza's famine could have been fixed instantaneously. It was directly the result of Israel, a country that we have welcomed into the the advanced family of nations, creating a fishbowl situation where they destroyed a pre-existing food system on the basis of trying to destroy Hamas. Sudan is a humongous country, which yes, the soup kitchens may go away to alleviating, but I think in this context, I find it really hard to I think I find it really hard to just be like, yeah, it would have been better under Kamala because maybe it would have been marginally, but I don't know. I just think that the root cause of the problem wouldn't have been addressed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I guess there's maybe one question I wanted to ask. It's maybe a repeat,
Of course.
but
No, 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 no
okay.
problem.
I wanted to. I feel like I didn't get an answer to this. Uh, if I wanted to characterize what you're saying, it seems like because you, when it comes to Israel and Palestine, it seems that you very much see this as a very these needs are all unilateral. Like it needs to be Israel that's up on the stand. It needs to be them that are losing arms deals. It needs to be them losing economic associations. It needs to be them
Yeah.
losing all their international support. until they're left on their own. I'm guessing from after then, it's probably going to be harder for the IDF to maintain itself. They might not struggle to pay soldiers or whatever else. We're not going to tell Palestinians or their leaders or any like Axis leaders to change anything. I'm just like, if October 7th had happened with the IDF either being much, much weaker or just non-existent, what do you think would have happened?
We went through this. Why would I, once again, and I'll give you the same answer, why would I deal in that counterfactual with the slaughter going on in Gaza?
Oh, but because it's what you want. Because the former is what you want, right?
The former is what I want.
Like, let's say your position was much more like had much more weight across the world before October 7th, and Israel was losing its ability to train soldiers, and it was losing its security apparatus, and it didn't have as much sophisticated weaponry, or its security situation was just like weaker, right? And they have all these internal issues as well that would probably come as a result. Let's say they have all this and they are just much weaker to the point that their military might not even be like fully functional. That is what you would have liked Israel. You'd have liked Israel to be in that situation before October 7th, right? You'd have liked them to be in a situation where they were much, much weaker.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I look what they do with their power.
And the reason
in reality, not in a counterfactual.
Yeah, and the reason but this is what you want, so surely you should be able to tell me what the outcomes of what you want might be. And if, let's say, that you had got what you want, that you had got what you wanted before October 7th, and Hamas launched their attack, what would have happened?
Once again, you've already... So once we're at the base of this counterfactual, the world in which we need as the prerequisite for that is a world that is completely different to the one in which we exist. And so what I would say is an international community who are like, okay, you're not going to go in and do massacres, but Israel is not going to be able to massacre you. It's not going to be able to continue in the way that it exists. So the situation wouldn't be produced. No more occupation, no more apartheid, no more of any of these things. So there's your answer, that you want me to do this counterfactual, but here's another counterfactual, that in the world in which Israel is already targeted in these ways, that its occupation will collapse, that if Israel's military institutions could have been hit and destroyed, that's a good thing. Israel should not have the military capacity it does. All it has used it for is mass slaughter.
But in your world, the international community, so they are holding Hamas accountable as well and telling them not to do what they're doing, or not?
And Hamas committing, I do not give a fuck. Hold Hamas to account for war crimes. Take into the context of why said war crimes happened, as always. But I think in the context of this, I just want Israel to be held to the same kind of account that you would hold Hamas, because we already exist in a world where Hamas are sanctioned, are claimed as a terrorist and evil regime. Like, I want that to happen to Israel. I think that that is a base level of a desire of someone who wants to live in an equitable and just society.
So your counterfactual is that the international community that puts all the pressure on Israel, apparently one-sided pressure or unilateral pressure on Israel
the pressure's already on Hamas, Lonerbox.
Okay, so it stays on Hamas. Well, the pressure was on Hamas before October 7th, and they still launched their attack. So can they get more pressured? Are they getting more pressured in this counterfactual then of yours?
Well, I think if Israel's held to account and it's cut off from what it's able to do and maintain a racist occupation of Palestinian land, then what legitimacy does Hamas have? Like, what ability does Hamas have to appeal to a population?
The fact that they want the whole country back, and that they think the Jews who live there are like illegal occupying invaders, like that fact. It's not
the thing is that in the context of Palestine, yes, they are illegal occupying invaders. I don't want to see mass slaughter. I want to see an equitable binational solution where both people have the right to exist and live within a state.
Yeah, I know you want that, but everything you've advocated for so far until like 5 minutes ago was all the pressure goes on Israel, and you don't,
because all the pressure is already on because all the pressure is already on Hamas.
Yeah, and the pressure on Hamas didn't stop them from succeeding in October 7th. So that's why I'm trying to get you to engage with this counterfactual, where it seems to be the case that Hamas already have the pressure on them. They already have the military capabilities that result from having pressure on you. But then Israel has the pressure on them, and I can just tell you what would happen, and you tell me I'm wrong. Okay. If Israel's in the position that you want them to be in, where their military is weaker, their civil society is weaker, their economic ties are weaker, they can't respond as effectively to an attack. Hamas goes over. They're not going to stop at Sderot or the air bases. They're going to go all the way up to Tel Aviv if they can. They're going to maybe I think they sent 3 waves over. They had more in the back. They could have sent others. If they got what they wanted from the West Bank, then obviously Israel's security apparatus is down. So militants in there can go as well. Iran has less of a reason to worry about reprisals from Israel, because obviously they're very far away, and America's not going to help them with the B-2 bombers anymore. So Iran fires off. Hezbollah, well, they're not deterred anymore, so they're going to come south. This would be a 3 or 4 front invasion that just And no, and given that Hamas were able to kill what, like 1,000, 1,200 people in the space of less than 12 hours, you would see the wholesale slaughter. I don't see why you wouldn't. Tell me I'm wrong.
I think if that happened, people should be held to account for what they've done, and they should build a state for both peoples. Like, if that is a reality that does happen,
How long does
like,
how long does the rest of the world have to get involved here? Like, what the fuck?
What do you mean? Like, how close are the
Israel has no allies anymore.
The biggest wait. But if Israel has no allies, then it couldn't act in the way it does. Like, it couldn't be so aggressive against Iran. You know that its missile detection system is reliant on, and in fact, in both waves of true promise, it was reliant on Jordanians shooting it down. It was reliant on, I think they're recon ships that operate inside the I don't know, the Mediterranean, I assume. I don't actually know specifically where they are, but anyway, there are these ships that help them with their missile targeting system. Israel couldn't be so aggressive towards Iran. It couldn't be so aggressive towards all of these countries. So already once we reach this counterfactual, it's just pretty odd where you're asking me, would I get catharsis from huge amounts of people being slaughtered, when for the longest time I've been look, I don't think that Israel should be allowed to go into Gaza and mass slaughter people. I don't like it. I want to live in a world where that doesn't happen. And imagining the way in which that doesn't happen, the prerequisite of it is Israel no longer being able to act in the way that it does. Yes, in your counterfactual scenario, probably mass slaughter would occur, but also in the same way, Israel could be offered base level protection from, just huge civilian killings, whilst also being told you can no longer be a racist apartheid state.
Okay, so first of all, it's not saying that you would take any catharsis from it. Okay, I don't do that whole accusing people of being bloodthirsty or whatever. I don't reciprocate that kind of accusation. I'm just saying that it doesn't seem like you just seem to deny that this would even happen, or if it did happen, which again, I don't see any indication from places like Iran or Hezbollah that any weakening of Israel is going to weaken their resolve to destroy the country, because their goals are different. Their goals are destroy Israel. That's it. And we know what they've in the past said about what they think would happen to the locals, or at least we know that what they do whenever they have got the opportunity to, whether it's with October 7th or with the suicide bombings of the Intifada, they seem to not discriminate that much between civilians and militants. So it seems like this would happen, and the international community would do what? Just hold them to account how, or stop that attack how? They'd have to be they'd have to do a military response, wouldn't they?
Yeah, a military response where they create armistice lines, a peacekeeping force, and they ensure that mass civilian slaughter is not occurring wholesale. But put frankly, Lonerbox, this kind of counterfactual is not what I'm imagining. I've told you over and over again that I would rather invest in this kind of reality in which human beings are able to live in an equitable and just society. I don't want to invest in this one where everyone gets slaughtered, because that's the one I live in right now. Actually, right now with Israel, mass indiscriminate killings of civilians, mass bombings of refugee camps, keeping human beings under apartheid. That one day of slaughter would be bad, but I think it is equally as bad to have a regime that is premised on the idea of the racial supremacy of a specific people and the right to just hold others under occupation and apartheid. Surely you agree, right? I think at a base level you agree Israel is apartheid, right?
I think what they do in the West Bank is, yeah.
But that's such an odd decision. So do you think Israel is an apartheid state?
Like Israel proper? No, I think they practice it in
Israel
the West
proper.
Bank.
So how would Israel? Sorry, so you're cutting off the rump of how many Palestinians live in the West Bank? What, 3 million?
3 million, yeah.
So you're saying that it's not an apartheid state, apartheid designated as a crime against humanity, where there are 3 million Palestinians being subjected to it, and that we should just be the rest of Israel's okay though? That's crazy, and especially
the reason I say that is because there are people who believe that even if you went to two states, Israel itself would still be apartheid because they're a Jewish state.
Yes, it would be, especially if there were Palestinians living in it. Because the prerequisite of ensuring the maintenance of an apartheid regime is a multitude of different laws that specifically affect Palestinian people. Israel's talking about introducing the death penalty for terrorists. Once upon a time, that created mass revulsion in Israeli society, and now it's just lapped up and loved. Israel engages in a multitude of different laws, such as consuming terrorist propaganda consistently, denying the official narrative of the October the 7th, when there isn't even an official narrative of what happened on October the 7th. They haven't published one. They haven't given out an exact one, in my understanding, the Israeli government, this is. They have a multitude of laws that specifically affect Palestinians. For example, family reunification. How is that not an apartheid law?
Because if you want to go into this discussion about where like discriminatory laws end and apartheid begins, and whether or not like half of the world would be apartheid by that definition, that's a boring conversation to me. We can go into it if you want,
but a specific wait. I think a specific family reunification law that is specifically aimed at expelling Palestinians is a very different thing. So I view this as because you must admit, right, like genocide even within it includes like capacities that are like basically things that are not straight up killing, right?
Yes, but I don't think there's ever been a conviction for one that didn't involve killing.
Well, I think
there's any case law for that.
I think the reservations are considered like what was done on them, and the Australian policy of breeding. No, not reservations. The schools. I can't remember what they're called.
Residential schools.
Residential schools, thank you. I think that those are considered genocide. I don't think that there's necessarily been a ruling, but I think that there's a vast scholarly agreement. Now, a family reunification law to me, where specifically if I'm a Palestinian and I live inside Israel proper and I marry a Palestinian in the West Bank and I'm not allowed to reunite, but and I have no option of where we're going to go together and I just have to leave the country, that is a bizarrely eliminationist law that is specifically aimed at reducing the number of Palestinians.
Again, if you want to go into a very long, first of all, with the residential schools, I don't think there's a full consensus on whether or not that was genocide. I think Canada was willing to acknowledge that it was, but obviously they are not like they're not like a court. That was like a state decision to call it that.
What about breeding them white? What about breeding them white?
Again, as far as case law goes, I don't think there's ever been a conviction for genocide that didn't involve like the killing element. It can happen in theory, like separating children and all that, which is why people are talking about Putin doing it. But
yeah.
But in any case, like this is like over legal disputes, and again, legal disputes are to me like they're kind of mean. Like, let's say Israel is apartheid. Okay, what do we do to stop that? What do we do to change it? Like, we're still going to have different solutions. Then I don't think cutting off all our ties helps. I don't think it's going to help.
What should we do? What should we do if Israel's apartheid?
I think with the international community, what they should do is that they should deter and pressure as much as they can the right-wing tendencies of the Israeli government to push them to stop things like settlements, or to stop them from, or even you can lobby against different laws if you want, or to stop them from like the war crimes that they're committing in Gaza. I think there's a lot of things that governments can lobby to stop, but I prefer to just talk about tangible actions. As soon as we get into this, like let's agree that it's apartheid or genocide.
But the thing is Lonerbox, we have lived in a world where allegedly that has been happening, where the UK government all of a sudden sanctions a few right-wing settlers, and then they find different ways to avoid it. Like, put frankly, I think it's really hard to sit here and kind of ridicule the one-state solution when, like, the things that you are proposing to get rid of Israeli apartheid just do not work. Like, there is an international consensus that the two-state solution good, everything else bad, okay? There's an international consensus of that. We have that predominantly. Trump violates that. Trump says settlements are illegal. Reagan condemns settlements. Everyone condemns settlements. Nothing happened. This thing of like, without really serious steps against Israel, without ban Israel from all international competitions. Like, why is it still there? You know?
How many countries are we banning from international competitions to do that? I don't know why, like, yeah, but
Russia?
Again, how many?
I think we should ban countries into reforming, and I think on Egypt. I don't think we should give aid to Egypt like freely and fairly. I don't think we should give weapons to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. I don't think that is a good thing. I don't think we should continually make excuses for dictatorial regimes because they fit with our geopolitical interests. Like, I think that is, like, when you sit here and you're like, well, we should just do X thing that we've been doing for years and does nothing.
To be clear, I don't say that. So to be clear, I don't think I've ever said that I think Western governments do enough when it comes to Israel. I don't know where that came from. I said it's a start. I think it's something that can be built on. But at the end of the day, these discussions don't really matter with either of us because we both want completely different things. You seem to think that Israel can just like unilaterally give itself up to becoming a binational state, or just get so pressured and weakened that, well, you know, maybe Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis and Iran will change their tune and not try to do a broad attack and take over the entire country by force and kill however many civilians they can. But I don't. Israelis are never going to hear that. They're never going to hear a Western activist telling them, "Oh yeah, well, we're going to keep on fucking you, but as soon as you start playing ball and giving up the border security and giving up the military positions and giving up your parts of your weaponry, then they will treat you like equal partners in a nation." They hear Hamas. They listen to Hamas in one ear saying that we're going to destroy you, we're going to like get all the Palestinian Israelis to rise up and stab people and run people over with cars. They have Hezbollah saying that the fucking Nasrallah, when he used to say that the fucking Jews should all just go back to Ethiopia or Russia, and you've got like Iran with their little clock talking about the countdown to destruction of Israel, and are we fucking about with ballistic missiles or not? Yeah, they hear that. They're never going to listen to you over their neighbors who are telling them what they want to do if they get the opportunity, which is why they're just going to keep fighting. 10 years from now, that's what they'll do.
Why would Hamas or a Palestinian listen to you when they hear in their ears the Israeli government going, it's time for voluntary emigration? It's time. Do you think they're going to go for the two-state when that's happening? Do you think they're going to go for the two-state when, and like, I'm sorry, Ben Gvir is not marginal. He ran, like, and I'm not sure you'd say that. I don't think you're foolish enough to. He ran Israel's torture system and is someone who, throughout his life, has been an open advocate of, transferring Palestinians, like removing them all from the land. He's only moderated it in order to not meet the same fate as his love of his life, Kahana, because he's realized that you cannot be doing that always. And now every time he said emigration the other day and had to put voluntary there. But I think that this whole thing of just like being like, well, Palestinians have got to change, but like we should give so much sympathy to Israelis and that we just shouldn't do anything because they don't like Western leftists, when the context of what Palestinians experience is so much fucking worse, is just insane to me. Like,
do you think my position is that we should give all the sympathy to Israelis and Palestinians should be the only ones to change?
Well, I mean, it kind of feels in many ways that way when you're just like, it's the Israeli right that has to go. I'm sorry, there's no left-wing alternative in Israel right now.
Okay, so I don't know if you're just like doing that on purpose or if you just are incapable of understanding my position, but that's fine. Yeah, the way you characterize everything I say is so bizarre. Obviously, like, if I'm talking to you, the issue is that you think that all of the behavior from Israel should be completely unilateral. That's why, of course, I'm going to try to encourage you or try to make the case for why the Israeli opinion matters in this and why it needs to be considered. Unless you just want them to get taken over by right-wingers who think being as forceful as possible is going to help. Like that's where they are now, and that's the only direction they're ever going to keep on digging into. If you get your way, that's the way I see it. So if I'm talking to like an Israeli or someone like who doesn't sympathize with Palestinians, like that'll be the first thing I bring up with them. I still say to this day that Israel exists because they stole a country. That's no other way to put it, right? They came in from somewhere else, regardless of why they were there, regardless of what they were fleeing or refugees or whatever else. The Palestinians saw a foreign group coming with European privileges through the Ottoman capitulations or with the British Mandate, and they saw them getting their support from the West and then later getting it from America or the Czechoslovakian arms. They saw them and they came in. They didn't learn the language. They didn't consider the customs of the other people, like you said with communal grazing. Of course they understood that their land was getting stolen or that they had a right to fight against it. So I'll say all of these things. I don't know why you're saying that Palestinians should be the only ones to change, and that's my position. I think Israelis need to change as well. So at least just characterize what I'm saying accurately. It's just kind of annoying when you're like doing these weird summaries of what my position is.
Because I think already, like in the context of Palestine, like you've already admitted like the base positions that I have, which is like, it's not the Palestinians who need to fucking change. It's the Israelis. I think Hamas gained so much legitimacy. I think, Hezbollah, however you feel about them, they are birthed as like a resistance movement to Israeli occupation of their land and American occupation of their land that comes as a direct product of mass slaughter.
Why didn't they fight against Syria? Why did they support Syria occupying Lebanon? Because
let's be frank here, like in terms of the Syrian government did bad things in Lebanon, but let's be frank here, who's done the worse?
Well, compared to if you're in Lebanon in the early to mid 80s,
done the worst? If you're in Lebanon,
I'm going to tell you, if you're in Lebanon from the early to mid 80s and you're Lebanese, you're obviously going to have more issues with Assad than with like the American embassy or the American Marines. On a material sense.
I mean, like in the context of Lebanon, I feel like Hezbollah have enjoyed some popular legitimacy for a very, very, very long time.
You acknowledge that their military and their state within a state is completely illegitimate, right?
What do you mean?
That they don't have a legal right to have a military in Lebanon.
No, but I think that the main problem is that the country that it's fighting against has no legality in terms of what it's done to the Palestinian people and what it's continually done, and that this situation produces resistance movements. Because, like, frankly,
well, if Hezbollah are popular, why can't Hezbollah just run the ballot and get the Lebanese army to fight Israel?
But they
If
have
that's
at
what they
least
want.
enough popularity. But also because the Lebanese government are much more interested in being closer to the American government. And like they draw legitimacy, right? Because you must admit this, they draw legitimacy from what Israel has done in southern Lebanon. Like Israel, I feel like it's not even a grand thing to mention. If you look at southern Lebanon, Israel has burnt the shit out of it, has destroyed it. And sorry, the reason that it has done that is probably to ensure that Lebanese people don't return, that they can't go back to southern Lebanon. And that this kind of thing is only going to fuel the popularity of Hezbollah. And that if we want to imagine a status quo in which Hezbollah don't exist, that these authoritarian regimes don't exist, what we need to change is Israel. What we need to change is Western imperialism in the region, because it saps all of the legitimacy, and you stop forcing people to live under dictatorial governments. Like that's what's giving legitimacy to resistance movements, and that's what births anti-colonial resistance.
Hezbollah they're popular amongst Shiites. They're not popular amongst the rest of the population in Lebanon. As they've never been able to amass popular support within the country for their military aspirations against Israel. I'm sure you admit that. Right? That's why they have a separate military to the Lebanese army, because they can't do it with popular support. They don't. Most people in Lebanon don't want to fight with Israel. Most people don't want that.
Because they know that Israel will just mass target civilians.
Yeah, well, they know it doesn't help them, right? They know it doesn't help Palestinians either, really.
Yeah. But I think that the problem is when you have a country that's mass targeting civilians.
Why would that, again, we went from saying Hezbollah are popular, have popular support, to
but
the Lebanese don't actually, but they don't have,
why they enjoy legitimacy amongst it, but
they enjoy legitimacy because they have a military force that the Lebanese army can't deal with. They're like a gang because they can threaten the government.
Who experiences the worst violence from the Israeli government?
Palestinians?
No, in Lebanon. Well, I mean, yeah, they're probably Palestinians too, but
recently it's been Shiites, yeah.
It's not just recent, it's been quite a long-standing thing, right? Israel ran a mass torture regime across southern Lebanon.
I'm talking about since the PLO, it's been the Shiites, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay.
Yeah, recently, yeah.
And Israel will destabilize and tear your country apart. And that's just not okay. That is not acceptable or moral. And that the West just gets to dictate what you're allowed to do and how you're allowed to behave. For me, that's kind of, I don't like that. I don't think that that's right. And I think if we're imagining a better world, that I'd like to do away with that just as much as I'd like to do away with any authoritarian regime, any regime that is based on. I'm not an advocate for religious ideology. I'm not a Shia. I don't believe in 12 Shiism. I don't have any loyalty to the Islamic revolutionary government. I don't think that that's like an amazing thing. But what I do think
the problem is that you think it's like a, sorry to interrupt. The problem is that you think with Hezbollah, it's like a rational response, right? Like their position in Israel.
I think it's a rational response to Israeli occupation, yes.
Okay. This is where I just don't understand where the lack of agency, or to like, you must think like Shia Lebanese people are fucking idiots then. You must think Hezbollah are
Why would I
really
think
dumb.
that Shia are fucking idiots?
Because Israel withdrew from Lebanon unilaterally in the year 2000. The UN drew a blue line and they said, this is the blue line, you go behind it. Israel even like they to the point that they dismantled a fence on one of the border communities and just moved it a few meters back to make sure they were exactly where the UN wanted them to be. International legitimacy, the Lebanese people did not want to fight anymore with Israel. And Hezbollah kept up the fight anyway. And they made up all these fucking excuses. Like they argued over how many Lebanese prisoners were still in Israeli jails, even though I think one of them was a spy in Palestine who was serving like 6 months of a sentence left. And the other person was a mass murderer. I think that one of them might not even still be alive because he's from the 70s. And they kept on the fight with Israel anyway. And they started to claim that the Sheba farms are theirs, even though the Syrian regime has never given up the Sheba farms to Lebanon. That's not a reason to keep on fighting this country, like, because that's not their goal. Their goal was not to get the occupation out of southern Lebanon. Their goal is to destroy Israel.
I think that there's like a quote that I saw today from the Israeli government holding Lebanese detainees as human bargaining chips, is the way in which they called it. And I think that like ultimately what they were saying is, look, you should release these Lebanese people regardless of what they've done, because I think you'll be frank here. You admitted it earlier. No Israeli is ever held to account for any massacre that they've ever done.
Are you talking about now or in 2006?
Are
you talking about now?
In 2000s.
So in the 2000s, they gave
2006 up. 2006 it kicks off it, but in my understanding, because Israel's unwilling to engage with negotiation channels at the UN and just begins a straight bombing campaign of Lebanon and an invasion. And I think that ultimately, like, look, there may be many Lebanese people who are against it, but there's also a decent amount of Lebanese people who are like, fuck Israel, this has brought instability, and they know that Western imperialism is not doing beneficial things for them. In the context of like Syria, yes, the Assad regime engaged in a a very brutal crackdown. But there's a huge amount of Syrian fucking refugees living in Lebanon who have like no chance at life on the basis of the fact that they were displaced in part because of Assad, well, a major part because of Assad, but also because of Western imperialism. Like Assad is a product of Western imperialism. Like
is every bad
like,
thing that happens in the Middle East a product of Western imperialism?
In what period?
In the last 100 years, let's say.
Not every single thing, but I think that it's impossible to take into account or analyze anything without the context of Western imperialism.
Well, we're not talking about context here because you blame everything on Western imperialism.
I don't blame everything on Western imperialism. I think people have the ability to do bad things, and I do think some of these groups have the ability to oppress their populations for their own desires and their own legitimacy of keeping themselves in power. I think that they do that. I think it would be impossible to say otherwise. However, what I am trying to make clear is that within the context of analysing anything that's gone on in the Middle East for the longest time, it is a result of Western imperialism, like who built the political systems, who has continually ensured the rule of dictatorships there. Even the Iranian government, the Iranian government, why is the Iranian government the way that it is?
Well, all because of 53, are you going to say?
I mean, he was a Democrat, Mossadegh.
And he was opposed by the military even before the CIA were involved. Like, would that?
He was opposed by the military.
Yeah, is there evidence? I know he was. I'm not supporting the Iranian coup. Okay, I'm just saying that the CIA's role in that coup was not to just engineer it out of absolutely nothing. As in, like, I think it's pretty much consensus that Mossadegh would have been overthrown anyway. I'm not saying it's a good thing. He shouldn't have been overthrown, but no country talks like this. No country says that because of what you did in 1953 that we're going to keep up like religious fundamentalist regime that's devoted to like our own version of destabilizing the region and supporting proxy militant groups in Syria and in Lebanon. Like that's not what countries do. Like even Vietnam has friendly relationships to a degree with the United States. Japan can have friendly relations with the United States. So I don't know why like Iran's regime is not the way it is just because of 53. That's a very reductive way to look at history.
No. I don't think it is entirely reductive. I think it's talking about how the Iranian regime came to power and like what the revolution was at that point, right?
The revolution was in part driven because of the fact that like the Shah was very aside the authoritarianism, like he was only really good at getting consent from people who were wealthy and urban, basically. And a lot of the rural population who suffered under him, and the people who obviously saw him as a foreign plant, and the people who suffered under the secret police, or the people who basically saw all of this economic gain going to a very small subset of, like that fucking stupid image where they talk about, oh, this is Iran before Islam. And it's like, 2 women in skirts at university. There's only like less than 5% of the population who ever saw any of this. Like the rest of the people were poor and in squalor. But then obviously a lot of the rural population of Iran were very religious, and the Ayatollah was able to bounce off of that as well. There was a conservative rural elite that was able to gain quite a lot of support from that the Ayatollah could ride on. But in any case, we can talk about the context of where any movement comes from. And I can hold Western powers accountable for coups in Chile or Iran or anywhere else. That doesn't take away from the fact that what these leaders are doing now, I think, is not just. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. The Axis's response to Israel.
When did Western imperialism end in the Middle East?
It hasn't ended in the Middle East. I'm not saying that.
So wait. Why is it so irrational to talk about the shaping of Western imperialism in the region?
Because it sounds like you're writing off everything. It sounds like you're writing off everything.
I'm not blaming exclusively 1953. What I'm talking about is that this shit hasn't ended.
But do we think, okay, one question. Do we think that Hezbollah's behavior in the mid-2000s after the withdrawal was rational or not? Do you think that was a good idea for them to go and do those cross-border raids?
What do you mean? In what way?
The cross-border attacks.
Good for every Lebanese person?
Even good for the Shiites. Was it good for them?
Well, I think that there was always going to be this problem with Israel. I think Israel is an expansionist settler colony. And I think that ultimately the fundamental issues of people within the region when it comes to Israel and American imperialism are not addressed. And I think that is always going to give groups popular legitimacy to do whatever. And I think that in the context of Israel, over and over again, Israel has invaded territory and it has done as it's pleased. I'm really sorry, though. Is it okay if we just call this? Because we've been talking for like 4 hours and I kind of want to just move on. Like, okay, not like fine. To just stop streaming.
No, yeah. I was just saying 4 hours. Time flies. Shit. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Time flies when you're having fun with great friends.
Hell yeah.
I think it was a lot more. Look. I think it was a lot more productive than last time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, I tend to reciprocate people's behavior. So if people are being chill, I'll try to do the same.
I had a loud mic.
No, you don't. You said you had a loud voice, and then I watched some
I
of your
have a loud voice
streams,
and a loud...
but I watched some of your streams, and you're talking like calmly and quietly. Like,
No, I really do have a loud voice, I swear.
you told me. Are you? You
I
don't.
swear,
You're not loud right now.
This is a different mic, that's why.
So you don't have a loud voice. You have a loud mic.
A mixture of the two. But anyway, I need to go now. Thank you for talking to me. I hope you have a nice rest of the evening.
That's fine. If you ever want to talk again, just let me know, okay?
Okay.
Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. I did not... That was quite long. The fuck? Very long. I feel like I didn't really speak that as much as him, but whatever. Fine. Whatever. How could you do this to me? I don't know. I thought that was fine. He's doing connections now. I probably should. How did you stay so calm? If someone's... I noticed a few times I was getting a bit kind of irritated, but then he wasn't really like doing it back. So it's just, you have to temper yourself. I don't know. Fuck knows. Also, Vivans. Let's go. I think he was rage baiting you. No, he genuinely believes the things he's saying. What are you talking about? I don't know why everyone instantly assumes people are grifting or getting paid. It's weird. Subscribe, you fucking assholes. I mean, sorry.